Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 1941 20 knot speed. What does it mean to travel one way in 2 weeks in the vast Atlantic Ocean? You know, on land, if you don't change horses, Marin and his men can only march more than 100 kilometers a day with 2 horses. In 2 weeks, it's only more than 1,000 kilometers. The Atlantic Ocean is more than 2,000 kilometers wide, so clippers run faster than 1 man and 2 horses, and can carry much more cargo. Of course, for common goods like grain, clippers will definitely not be used for transportation. Clippers usually transport valuable items. For example, in the 19th century, clippers were generally used to transport high-value commodities such as opium and tea. For example, the Cutty Sark clipper, which sailed from Guangzhou to London around the Cape of Good Hope in 100 days, was specially used to transport tea. Because the most popular black tea in Britain at that time had a shelf life of only about 1 year. If it was transported by an old ship, it would take 10 months for a one-way trip. Even if the imported tea was new, it would soon be out of shelf life when it was shipped back to the UK. Therefore, clippers, which can run a one-way trip in 100 days, became the first choice for transporting black tea. It is precisely because of the shelf life of black tea that Marin did not make it even if he knew how to produce black tea. In the Ming Dynasty, black tea was not produced until around 1568. The reason was that the local tea farmers were frightened by a passing army and did not have time to dry the newly picked tea leaves in time, which led to the fermentation of the tea leaves, and then dried and processed them, giving birth to black tea. In fact, the most popular tea drunk by Marin in later generations was green tea such as Longjing Biluakan. But the shelf life of green tea and black tea is not much different, or even shorter. Therefore, from the perspective of economic interests, Marin finally chose black tea bricks that can be stored for more than 10 years. Not for anything else, just for the super long shelf life. Moreover, the Earl Grey milk tea invented by Marin is not brewed, but boiled with milk, sucrose, etc. In this way, the problem of poor taste of brewed black tea can also be covered up, so it doesn't matter. In addition, the honeycomb coal stove invented by Marin is really awesome. It can cook milk tea or provide hot water at any time, and has become a standard appliance for wealthy people in Europe. If a family does not have a honeycomb coal stove to cook milk tea to entertain guests, they are embarrassed to say that they are a wealthy family. The profit of tea is also extremely amazing. At the beginning, in Western Europe, a 2.5 gene black tea brick was purchased at a price of 50 or 61 in Daming, but it could be transported to Western Europe and exchanged for a horse, which is worth dozens of gold coins, or dozens of taels of silver. This profit is more than 100 times. But later, with the sharp increase in the import volume of tea bricks, and the Portuguese also began to enter the coastal areas of Daming, they could also secretly get some tea and knew the low purchase price of tea. Marin had no choice but to reduce the price significantly, but a tea brick was also worth 10 gold coins, that is, 4 gold coins per gene of black tea. This price was a unified price set by Marin after negotiating with the Portuguese. After all, Portugal will always be able to get tea in the future, whether it is smuggling or finding other ways. In order to prevent the two sides from suppressing the price too low due to vicious competition, Marin took the initiative to negotiate with the Portuguese to set the price of black tea bricks at 10 gold coins per piece. Although the price is much cheaper than before, the profit will still be high if the volume is increased. However, the Portuguese did not know that in the Anhui area, where black tea bricks are produced in abundance, Marin had asked Conti to send merchants to make arrangements in advance to control the supply. Even if the Portuguese want to have a share, they must have a source of goods. And if ordinary black tea and green tea are imported back, with the speed of the Portuguese ships, even if the tea is shipped back, it will soon expire. In addition, Marin had asked Conti to send people to steal tea seeds. Moreover, there are already experimental tea gardens on the island of Cuba. By then, Bahai Kingdom can drink its own tea without having to import it from Daming. However, Marin has doubts about the cost of tea produced in Cuba. Because, in this era, no other country has a lower labor cost than Daming. Tea production is very labor-intensive, which makes Marin wonder if the cost of tea produced by his family will be much higher than that of the Ming Dynasty. Marin remembers that in history, in the 17th century, the wholesale price of sugar produced by Britain on the island of Barbados was as high as 60 shillings per hundredweight, which is about 137 coins per pound of sugar. It can be sold for 100 shillings per hundredweight when shipped back to London. However, during the same period, the price of sugar in the Ming Dynasty was only 30 coins. This is still the price in the north. In the southern Guangdong and Guangxi production areas, the price of sugar is only 15 coins per pound. The wholesale price in the production area is several times higher than the market price in the Ming Dynasty. This is the embarrassment of Europeans. Therefore, Marin plans to try to dig workers from China to make tea in the future to reduce costs. Moreover, with the clipper, it is faster to take the Pacific route. At 3 times the speed of the clipper, it used to take 3 months to go from Panama City to Keelung, but now it only takes 1 month. Even if you have to go around a big circle from Keelung to Panama City, if it is 3 times faster, it will take 2 months. In this way, for some labor-intensive products, Marin was too lazy to produce them himself, and he could just purchase cheap ones from the Ming dynasty. Of course, it was limited to non-essentials. For example, high-end consumer goods such as tea and sugar, Marin would choose to import them from the Ming dynasty. If it was strategic materials such as grain and sisal, it would definitely be reassuring to produce them at home. However, those experienced shipbuilders were skeptical about Marin's proposal to run a clipper ship at 3 times the speed. After all, the North Sea countries' ships can now run at a speed of 10 knots. Wouldn't it be possible to run at 30 knots if they were 3 times faster? In fact, they also misunderstood. The 3 times the speed that Marin said did not refer to the maximum speed, but the average speed. After using the upper edge girder sail of 20th century technology, the speed of the clipper ship was about 50% lower than the speed with the wind, even if it was against the wind, unlike the traditional square sail, which was 3 or 4 times slower than the speed with the wind. In other words, the clipper boat with the upper edge girder sail can run at a speed of more than 10 knots even against the wind, which is faster than the current maximum speed of Marin's galleon. Only in a windless or light wind environment will the boat's speed be less than 10 knots. In this way, the average speed of the ship is terrifying. Unlike traditional square-rigged sailing ships, the wind and the wind are completely 2 different situations, with a huge difference. In order to verify what Marin said about the high tide speed, the master shipbuilders specially built a small clipper boat for testing. However, because the processing was not well controlled, the hull was made too thin and a bit like a canoe. Even if the anti-roll fin was used, it was a bit scary. Because the hull was too narrow. Marin saw the canoe they built, and suddenly he had an idea. It seems that the earliest catamaran in the world is the Polynesian catamaran canoe. This catamaran canoe, because the 2 small boats are connected, makes it like Chow Chow's linked boat in Red Cliff, very stable, not easy to capsize, and very stable. So, Marin simply asked the shipbuilders to experiment with the catamaran, connecting 2 small test boats with a crossbar and building a deck. Then, a very stable catamaran was born. After hanging 3 small upper edge gaff sails, the catamaran went out to sea for sea trials. As a result, its speed was astonishing, 20 knots. This was the highest speed the shipbuilders had ever seen, and they were almost stunned. Chapter 1942, The Age of Secondary School. The only one who was not stunned was probably Marin, a worldly time traveler. He had seen a video of a catamaran in the future. The catamaran yacht ran at a speed of 30 knots, which was almost the same as the speed of modern warships. However, Marin shook his head, because he knew the shortcomings of the catamaran. Sure enough, after sailing a few times, the weakness of the catamaran was exposed during high-speed sailing, because the buoyancy of the left and right hulls was often different. It was easy to generate stress torque on the connecting beam. After sailing a few times, the wooden crossbeam connecting the 2 boats of the experimental catamaran broke directly because it could not withstand the strong torque generated by high-speed sailing. Fortunately, there was a ship monitoring the speed nearby, which rescued the sailors on the boat, otherwise it would have almost killed someone. Marin shook his head and said nothing, but asked the people from the steel plant to send a stainless steel beam. At the same time, the left and right hulls were made more pointed and hollow, and wrapped with stainless steel iron sheets on the outside, which not only prevented seawater corrosion but also increased strength. As a result, the speed of this experimental catamaran soared to 25 knots again, which scared the masters of communication design. Because steel beams were used, there was naturally no crossbeam fracture this time. But the problem is, NEMA stainless steel beams are really rare and precious. They only built a 10-meter-long test boat, which was fully made of stainless steel beams and outer skins, which was acceptable. However, if a large ship is built, how much stainless steel would be needed to make the beams? These days, the preciousness of stainless steel is not inferior to gold. Moreover, the chromite ore discovered by Marin's subordinate Wilts on the island of Cuba has a reserve of only hundreds of thousands of tons, and dare not squander it. Therefore, everyone knows that the speed of the catamaran is very awesome, but they can only sigh. Stainless steel beams that are not afraid of seawater corrosion cannot be built. In the end, the masters of the North Sea military shipyard could only keep the 10-meter-long catamaran speedboat that used a lot of stainless steel for testing and research. As for promoting construction, it is unrealistic. Through the wonderful test of this stainless steel catamaran speedboat, the master craftsman also believed Marin's 3 times speed. Because, when the catamaran was tested, the speed against the wind was much faster than the traditional square sailing ship, several times faster. In this way, the overall speed is 3 times that of traditional ships, which is normal. The only problem is that during high-speed sailing, the huge difference in buoyancy between the left and right hulls leads to a high-strength requirement for the crossbeam connecting the left and right hulls. In addition, the seawater is very corrosive, and at most only a small catamaran speedboat with a displacement of dozens of tons can be built. If you want to build it bigger, there will not be so many stainless steel beams available. In fact, if there is waterproof paint, ordinary steel beams can be used. But there is no waterproof paint in this era, and only stainless steel beams can be used as the crossbeams of the catamaran. Therefore, the cost is very high, and the ship is not big. But if a few catamarans are kept for the dissemination of confidential information, it can still be done. As for the problem of leaks, as long as a curtain is covered on the hull, the mystery of the catamaran cannot be seen from a distance. Moreover, even if others figured out the secret of the catamaran, they couldn't build it. Marin's master shipbuilders had tested it before. Wooden beams are easy to break during sailing, and metal beams must be able to resist seawater corrosion. In the end, only Marin's master shipbuilders could build such a catamaran speedboat, and it was not big. In short, even if this technology was learned by others, it could not be used. There is no way. The problem of stress on the crossbeam of a catamaran is a big problem in shipbuilding in later generations, let alone this era. Therefore, although the Polynesian catamaran canoe was discovered a long time ago, people have not been able to apply this technology to the construction of large ships. It was not until the late 20th century that the technology developed to a certain level and pure steel catamarans began to be built. This kind of steel ship with an integral structure can avoid the problem of insufficient strength of the crossbeam of the catamaran, so Marin is not afraid that others will learn the technology of the catamaran, because they can't use it even if they learn it. On the contrary, the clipper ship technology and underwater anti-roll fin technology are too simple in principle and there are no restrictions on materials, so Marin is worried that others will steal them. But what scares Marin is that the 50-ton stainless steel catamaran he used for testing was actually spotted by Caesar, who shouted that he wanted to go to London and take his sister Margaret to the sea. Marin was so angry that he beat Caesar. Why? Because it is too dangerous. Although the all-stainless steel catamaran is very safe and stable. However, if you really encounter a big storm at sea, it is just as dangerous. After all, due to material reasons, this ship can only be built with a displacement of dozens of tons, and its ability to resist wind and waves is limited. Caesar is his heir. If he dies while taking Princess Margaret out to sea, the boat will collapse that day. So, Marin beat Caesar without hesitation and made him say, "A gentleman should not stand under a dangerous wall," in Chinese 10,000 times. But Caesar is a teenager after all. He likes catamarans, which are very cool and very fast. It is normal for him to want to take his female companion out to sea to surf. Moreover, this child is very smart. Regarding Marin's concerns, he directly suggested to build 5 50-ton stainless steel catamarans. If the 5 ships act together, even if the one he is riding is in danger, there will always be others who can rescue him. In addition, Caesar also proposed that while installing the edge gaff sail, a diesel propeller system should be installed at the rear of the stainless steel catamaran speedboat. In this way, when encountering a bigger storm, the sail can be lowered and driven by a diesel engine. Yo-ho, isn't this the design of the catamaran yacht played by the rich and handsome in later generations? Marin was surprised. In later generations, many wealthy people played with catamaran yachts, which were equipped with diesel engines. When not using sails, they can still run at a speed of more than 10 knots. However, they used a Mercury engine with a single hanging horsepower of more than 250 horsepower, which is not comparable to the 12 horsepower single-cylinder diesel engine currently owned by Beihai State. After testing, even if 4 12 horsepower single-cylinder diesel engines were installed in parallel, the catamaran could only run at a speed of 7 or 8 knots without using sails, which was a big difference from the speed of more than 10 knots of a single engine. Of course, being able to run at this speed without sails has already shocked many people. In addition, because the side of the catamaran is low, the diesel engine is easily contaminated with seawater when jumping on the sea. Therefore, in order to prevent corrosion, the diesel engine housing needs to be made of stainless steel, which greatly increases the cost. Dad, hurry up and have someone build the other 4 catamaran yachts. I want to take the catamaran yacht team to London to take Sister Margaret out to sea for fun. Caesar acted like a playboy, which stunned Marin. This kid, well, has he reached the age of middle school? Marin thought about it, and it seemed to be true. Caesar is now 14 years old, just the age of middle school. Chapter 1943, Overstrike. Probably because he had died once, Marin, the time traveler, was extremely careful about life, never reckless, and almost cautious to the point of being timid. But Caesar was a teenager after all, and he didn't have such a deep understanding. Only after suffering a loss, would you have a little idea in your heart. So, in order to teach the child a lesson, Marin decided to plot against his own son. Then, the newly built 50-ton catamaran was tampered by Marin's people. The rivets of the stainless steel beam were deliberately not tightened. It was summer, and although the weather in the North Sea was not hot, it was close to 30 degrees. Marin pretended to be generous and let Caesar, the bare child, take a few servants and sailors to drive the catamaran out to sea. Of course, in order to prevent him from getting into trouble, Marin specially equipped him with a life jacket and asked several warships to accompany him for protection. Then, the ignorant teenager Caesar began his first sea drift away from his parents. On the first day, there was nothing wrong with the ship. After all, it was a steel beam structure, so even if it was tampered with, nothing happened. But the next morning, when Caesar's ship went out to sea for the third time, the steel beams on the ship finally loosened. Caesar, his servants and several sailors all fell into the water. Fortunately, they all had life jackets and no one drowned. However, while waiting for rescue, an extremely terrible thing happened. A shirtless sailor was accidentally cut on his upper body by a loose steel beam and bled. Then, two sharks nearby smelled the blood, rushed over and tore the shirtless sailor apart and shared it under Caesar's nose. The bloody scene frightened Caesar a lot, and he fell ill after returning. Marin was also scared to death. If it was Caesar who was bleeding. Oh my God, he couldn't imagine how desperate he and Angela would be after his son was eaten by sharks. So, in the next few days, Marin slept with Caesar in his arms, constantly comforting his son. To be honest, he didn't dare to face the furious Angela at this time. Because Angela also knew about the plan to deliberately pit her son. But after learning that his son was almost eaten by a shark, Marin's waist was pinched purple by Angela. In desperation, Marin simply hid in his son's room, and comforted his son immediately when he had a nightmare. Being frightened, and catching a cold and fever after falling into the water, this was a serious illness in ancient times. The two emperors of the Ming dynasty, Shengde and Tianqi, both died after catching a cold and fever after falling into the water. Of course, both emperors took elixirs after they fell ill, and they might have been killed by someone. In ancient times, there were no means of reducing fever, so it was easy to die. But Marin has means. He first asked Lu Tai to use the professional Chinese medicine Chaihu imported from the Ming dynasty on Caesar. Then, he personally wiped Caesar's body with alcohol. The dual fever reduction of drugs and physics finally saved Caesar. After recovery, Caesar's temperament seemed to be much more honest, and he never mentioned going into the water again. This made Marin happy, but Caesar actually began to fear taking a boat. Marin thought, how can this work? In the future, you will unite England, so you must take a boat to London. England is far away overseas. If you don't take a boat, do you have to fly there? Even if Marin can make a hot air balloon, that thing is much more dangerous than taking a boat. So, in the following days, Marin began to constantly enlighten Caesar and instill the concept of boat safety every day. And repeatedly emphasize that as long as it is not a small speedboat, it is safe to take a big ship. But when Caesar thought of the terrible scene of the sailor being torn apart by a shark and eating, he couldn't help trembling and was a little afraid of the ocean. Marin was helpless. He just wanted to play a joke on his son and scare him by the way. Who knows, there will be a special situation that is not in the script, such as sharks eating people. In short, this matter has to be solved slowly. Fortunately, the child was not scared out of his wits, nor did he have a fever and burn his brain. Otherwise, Marin himself could not forgive himself. Seeing that Caesar was in a bad state at the moment, in order to divert his attention, Marin offered a trick that would keep students busy in the future, the sea of questions tactics. Caesar's current educational progress is already at the 3rd grade level. Unlike the abridged junior high school textbooks that children in Beihai National School learn, Marin personally taught Caesar the original textbook without abridgment. Especially the physics and chemistry part, which not only introduced electricity, but also introduced some common sense of astronomy and nuclear physics, which made Caesar confused. Marin didn't bother to care whether he understood or not. He directly made a test paper based on the memory deep in his mind and asked Caesar to take the test himself. If he didn't get 80 points, out of 100, he would be beaten. Sure enough, the sea of questions is a magic weapon to make children forget other things. Caesar suddenly forgot his fear and struggled hard in the sea of questions. Mathematics doesn't need to be explained, various algebraic equations and geometric figures need to be proved by auxiliary lines, which makes Caesar a little headache. As for Chinese, Marin was also ingenious. In terms of writing essays, he didn't let Caesar write any narrative or argumentative essays, but directly asked him to simulate writing official documents and administrative orders. In the future, Caesar will be a monarch and often have to deal with government affairs. Therefore, it is more practical to get in touch with official documents and administrative orders earlier than to write those articles that complain without illness. Marin would be happy if Caesar could get familiar with government affairs earlier and help him deal with some official documents. Europe is different from Asia. Because the eldest son inheritance monarchy cannot be easily changed, it is rare for the prince to kill his father. Generally speaking, those who launch rebellions are often non-eldest sons. Because the eldest son has already had the right of inheritance, there is no need to rebel. Of course, there are also second-rate princes who go against their fathers, but they are often ideological disputes and do not involve life and death. Therefore, Marin hopes that Caesar will grow up early to help him share his worries. If his son is outstanding, he even plans to retire early. Of course, he will hold the control of the army firmly in his hands and will let it go only after his death. Otherwise, if he really wants to throw away everything, no one will listen to the old man. Giving up government affairs and controlling military power alone can not only maintain an absolutely effective voice, but also get out of the complicated government affairs. Of course, men are prone to impulsiveness before the age of 30. Therefore, even if Caesar was exposed to government affairs from a young age, Marin would not let him make decisions all at once. After all, Caesar has not even finished high school knowledge yet, and he does not have a rich knowledge reserve. Moreover, even if he has learned college knowledge, he still needs several years of experience to settle down and not panic when encountering things. Many times, even smart people find it difficult to get things done without experience. Therefore, those smart big companies are too lazy to train from scratch, but directly dig people with more than 2 years of work experience or even several years from small units. Generally speaking, a man will really start to become calm when he is about 30 years old. At the same time, he also has relatively rich work experience. The most important thing is that after several years of social beatings, men of this age are often no longer impulsive. Because a few years of work experience is enough for an impulsive person to be beaten, all over, by society. If you are still impulsive at the age of 30, it proves that this person has a defective character and is not up to the task. In fact, Marin thinks that the policies of later generations to support college students' entrepreneurship are nonsense. Why? Because college students have no social experience or work experience at all. The most important thing is that they have not experienced the beatings of society. At this age, people are often too naive. Giving money to naive college students to start a business is often a waste. Only a few college students with careful thinking can succeed in starting a business. Most enthusiastic college students often encounter setbacks in starting a business. Therefore, Marin has always felt that it is better to support college graduates around 30 years old with rich experience to start a business than to use money and policies to support college students with no experience. This is safe enough. However, politicians in later generations believe that universities receive a lot of attention. Investing here can attract more attention. As for college graduates who have been working in society for a few years, the halo of college students has long faded. Although they are more suitable, who cares about them? Moreover, supporting college students to start businesses will attract much more attention than supporting college graduates who have graduated for a few years. As for whether it is reasonable or not, and whether the investment will go down the drain, who cares? As long as 1 or 2 college students succeed in starting a business, the media can brag about it. As for most of the losers, sorry, everyone didn't see it. Therefore, even if he completed his studies, Marin would not let Caesar take over government affairs immediately. Because without a few years of experience, it is difficult for him to be independent. Even if he is to let him do it, he must wait until he is 30 years old at least. In fact, this is considered early. In later generations, China stipulates that the age of senior leaders must not be less than 46 years old. Because, a 46-year-old man's personality is truly stable. A 30-year-old man has just gotten rid of his childishness and started to mature. However, Marin retained the military power and the right to speak, so he could still help and avoid a big mess. Moreover, after annexing the United England, Caesar would have to face the opponents and various constraints of the Kingdom of England. This would be a good opportunity to hone his skills. If he could deal with those who had different political views in England, it would prove that he could become a qualified monarch. Chapter 1944. The first drama begins. Probably because he died once, Marin, the time traveler, is extremely careful about life, never reckless, and almost cautious to the point of being timid. But Caesar is a teenager after all, and he doesn't have such a deep understanding. Only after suffering a loss, will you have a little bit of a number in your heart. So, in order to teach the child a lesson, Marin decided to plot against his own son. Then, the newly built 50-ton catamaran was tampered by Marin's people. The rivets of the stainless steel beam were deliberately not tightened. It was summer, and although the weather in the North Sea Kingdom was not hot, it was close to 30 degrees. Marin pretended to be generous and let Caesar, the bare child, take a few servants and sailors to drive the catamaran out to sea. Of course, in order to prevent him from getting into trouble, Marin specially equipped him with a life jacket and asked several warships to accompany him for protection. Then, the ignorant young Caesar began his first sea drift away from his parents. On the first day, there was nothing wrong with the ship. After all, it was a steel beam structure, so even if it was tampered with, nothing happened. But on the morning of the second day, when Caesar's ship went out to sea for the third time, the steel beam on the ship finally loosened. Caesar, his servants, and several sailors all fell into the water. Fortunately, they all had life jackets and no one drowned. However, while waiting for rescue, an extremely terrible thing happened. A shirtless sailor was accidentally cut on his upper body by a loose steel beam and bled. Then, 2 sharks nearby smelled the blood, rushed over, and tore the shirtless sailor apart and shared it under Caesar's eyes. The bloody scene frightened Caesar a lot, and he fell ill after returning. Marin was also scared to death. If it was Caesar who was bleeding. Oh my God, he couldn't imagine how desperate he and Angela would be after his son was eaten by sharks. So, for the next few days, Marin slept with Caesar in his arms, constantly comforting his son. To be honest, he didn't dare to face the furious Angela at this time. Because Angela also knew about the plan to deliberately pit his son. But after learning that his son was almost eaten by a shark, Marin's soft waist flesh was pinched purple by Angela. In desperation, Marin simply hid in his son's room, and comforted his son immediately when he had a nightmare. Being frightened, coupled with a cold and fever after falling into the water, this was a serious illness in ancient times. The two emperors of the Ming dynasty, Zhengde and Tianqi, both died after catching a cold and having a fever after falling into the water. Of course, both emperors took elixirs after they fell ill, and they might have been killed by someone. In ancient times, there was no means of reducing fever, so it was easy to die. But Marin had means. He first asked Liu Tai to use the professional Chinese medicine Chaihu imported from the Ming dynasty on Caesar. Then, he personally wiped Caesar's body with alcohol. The dual fever reduction of drugs and physics finally saved Caesar. After recovery, Caesar's temperament seemed to be much more honest, and he never mentioned going into the water again. This made Marin happy, but Caesar actually began to fear taking a boat. Marin thought, how can this be done? In the future, you will unite England, and you must take a boat to London. And England is far away overseas. If you don't take a boat, will you fly over? Even if Marin can make a hot air balloon, that thing is much more dangerous than taking a boat. So, in the following days, Marin began to constantly enlighten Caesar and instill the concept of boat safety every day. And repeatedly emphasized, as long as it is not a small speedboat, it is safe to take a big ship. But when Caesar thought of the terrible scene of the sailor being torn apart by a shark and eating, he couldn't help trembling, and was a little afraid of the ocean. Marin was helpless. He just wanted to play a joke on his son and scare him by the way. Who knows, there will be a special situation where sharks eat people, which is not in the script. In short, this matter has to be solved slowly. Fortunately, the child was not scared out of his wits, nor did he have a fever that burned his brain. Otherwise, Marin himself could not forgive himself. Seeing that Caesar was in a bad state, in order to divert his attention, Marin used the ultimate trick that made students have no time to care about him in the future, the sea of questions tactics. Caesar's current educational progress is already at the level of the 3rd grade. Unlike the abridged junior high school textbooks that children in Beihai National School learn, Marin personally taught Caesar the original textbook without abridgment. Especially the physics and chemistry part in it, not only introduced electricity, but also introduced some common sense of astronomy in nuclear physics, which made Caesar confused. Marin didn't bother to care whether he understood it or not. He directly made a test paper based on the memory deep in his mind and let Caesar take the test himself. If he didn't get 80 points, out of 100, he would be beaten. Sure enough, the sea of questions tactics is a magic weapon to make children forget other things. Caesar immediately forgot his fear and struggled hard in the sea of questions. Mathematics doesn't need to be explained, various algebraic equations, and geometric figures need to be proved by auxiliary lines, which makes Caesar a little overwhelmed. As for language, Marin was also ingenious. In terms of writing, he did not let Caesar write any narrative or argumentative essays, but directly asked him to simulate writing official documents and administrative orders. In the future, Caesar will be a monarch and often have to deal with government affairs. Therefore, it is more practical to get in touch with official documents and administrative orders earlier than to write those articles that complain without illness. If Caesar could get familiar with government affairs earlier and help him deal with some official documents, Marin would be eager. This side of Europe is different from that of Asia. Because the eldest son inheritance monarchy cannot be easily changed, it is rare for the prince to kill his father. Generally speaking, those who launch rebellions are often non-eldest sons. Because the eldest son has already had the right of inheritance, there is no need to rebel. Of course, there are also second-rate princes who go against their fathers, but they are often ideological disputes, not involving life and death. Therefore, Marin hopes that Caesar will grow up early to help him share his worries. If his son is outstanding, he even plans to retire early. Of course, he will hold the control of the army firmly in his hands and will let it go after his death. Otherwise, if he really wants to throw everything away, no one will listen to the old man. Giving up government affairs and controlling military power alone can not only maintain an absolutely effective voice, but also get out of the complicated government affairs. Of course, men are prone to impulsiveness before the age of 30. Therefore, even if Caesar is exposed to government affairs from a young age, Marin will not let him make decisions all at once. After all, Caesar has not even finished high school knowledge yet, and he does not have a rich knowledge reserve. Moreover, even if he has finished college knowledge, he needs several years of experience to settle down and not panic when encountering things. Many times, even smart people find it difficult to do things well in the absence of experience. Therefore, those smart big companies are too lazy to train themselves from scratch, but directly dig people with more than 2 years of work experience or even several years from small units. Generally speaking, a man will really begin to become calm when he is about 30 years old. At the same time, he also has relatively rich work experience. The most important thing is that after several years of social beatings, men of this age are often no longer impulsive. Because a few years of work experience is enough for an impulsive person to be beaten, all over, by society. If someone is still impulsive at the age of 30, it proves that this person has a flawed character and is not capable of handling important tasks. Chapter 1945, The Battle of Santo Domingo. On the first night after arriving in Santo Domingo, the investigation team had a good time. However, the food supply on the island seemed to be very tight, so they could only eat sweet potato rice. Of course, the leaders still ate black bread. The governor of Santo Domingo, Macas, solemnly told the head of the investigation team, Bishop Rugani, a bishop in a certain area of the Papal States, not a cardinal, that this was what we saved to entertain the distinguished guests. The other officials of the investigation team were stunned. When did ordinary black bread become something to entertain distinguished guests? Then, Macas cried and complained to all the distinguished guests, it was not that we treated you badly. But, something big happened here last year. There was an indigenous guy named Carlos, who learned some cultural knowledge from the Spanish and learned to make weapons such as bows and arrows. Then, this restless young man, revolted, last year, led thousands of indigenous people to launch a rebellion, and also established a Carlos kingdom. Carlos didn't know what name to use for the country, so he simply used his Spanish name. Moreover, this year, this guy continued to grow, with tens of thousands of indigenous people under his command, and there were tens of thousands of able-bodied men who could fight as warriors. The members of the investigation team naturally didn't believe it. In their opinion, the tribe of indigenous people had at most a few hundred people, and thousands of people were scary. Where did tens of thousands of troops come from? Therefore, except for Bishop Rugani, the head of the investigation team who was ordered by the Pope to play dumb, everyone else showed a look of disbelief. But on the next morning, they had to believe it. Because there were thousands of indigenous people surrounding the castle of Santo Domingo, and the number was still increasing. Last night, the people sent by Macas killed a dozen people from the village under Carlos, which was closest to the castle, and immediately angered the indigenous chief Carlos. So, the next morning, he gathered 3,000 or 4,000 strong men from several nearby villages, armed with recurve bows and spears, and surrounded the castle of Santo Domingo. Moreover, Carlos sent people to notify the village chiefs farther away and asked them to send troops to support. So, the next day, the members of the investigation team saw that there were more and more Indian native warriors outside the castle of Santo Domingo. By the afternoon, there were already 7,000 or 8,000 people. The masters of the investigation team, who had a good sleep last night, were scared to death when they saw this situation. After all, the number of people was tens of thousands, endless. Although the 7,000 or 8,000 native soldiers outside the city were not tens of thousands, the number was not much different. Moreover, the formation of the natives was loose, not as concentrated as the European army. To outsiders, it looked like there were more than tens of thousands of troops. Isn't this tens of thousands of soldiers? Bishop Rugani said with trembling teeth. Baron Mosen from the Duchy of Lorraine frowned and looked at it, and explained, not 10,000, but close. In any case, Baron Mosen was also a noble. In this era, most nobles were military nobles, and Baron Mosen had some foresight. But the native soldiers outside the city were too chaotic, and there was no neat formation to calculate, so Baron Mosen could only rely on experience to estimate that the number should be less than 10,000. But the following situation made the members of the investigation team begin to despair. In the afternoon, it seemed that more people came from distant villages to join the siege. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Baron Mosen said solemnly, the number must be over 10,000 now. In fact, until the next morning, there were still follow-up troops coming from afar. Macas secretly observed with a telescope and estimated that the total number of people reached about 14,000. This was already the most troops that the indigenous leader Carlos could mobilize. After all, he only had tens of thousands of people under his command. In order to demonstrate and fight, he mobilized all the men. At this time, there were only 500 defenders in the Santo Domingo castle. However, the governor of Santo Domingo, Macas, was not in a hurry at all. Because he knew that they had an advantage in weapons. Moreover, when Carlos's native army began to attack at noon the next day, Macas's people smiled and gave an order to scatter broken glass and nails under the city wall. Then, the leaders of the investigation team were surprised to find that the first batch of native warriors who rushed up all jumped back with their feet covered. Why? Because the natives don't wear clothes and don't have shoes. Just scatter some broken glass and nails on the ground, and they can hurt the bare feet of the native warriors. So, the first wave of the natives' attack ended in vain. But Carlos had worked for the Spaniards for several years after all, and he was not comparable to ordinary natives. After 2 days of thinking hard, Carlos finally realized it. So he sent his men with brooms to clean up the glass slag and nails under the city. Although the soldiers on the top of the city desperately shot the natives who cleaned up the glass slag and nails with matchlock guns, they were still cleaned up a lot. In particular, the natives often came to clean up at night. In this way, 2 or 3 days later, the natives finally swept out the way to attack. And in the city, Makas didn't have any extra glass slag and nails to scatter. Of course, Makas didn't expect this move to defeat the enemy. So, continue to prepare for defense step by step. The natives carried the simple wooden ladder that Carlos built according to his memory, intending to climb the top of the city and attack. However, they didn't see that a large pot had been set up on the top of the city, and it was steaming. This was certainly not boiling the smelly, golden juice, but boiling oil. This was also the traditional way of defending the city in ancient China, pouring boiling oil down. However, this trick was very rare in ancient Europe. Why? Because there was no vegetable oil in Europe, nor cheap tung oil, only expensive olive oil and linseed oil, as well as butter and sheep oil. However, these oils are very expensive, and generally no castle is willing to pour oil down. Of course, the defenders of Santo Domingo did not pour expensive olive oil or linseed oil, but cheap whale oil. After the whale oil is boiled, it is also liquid. Rugani and other members of the investigation team were very curious about the luxury of the defenders of Santo Domingo, and they actually poured oil. But when they got closer, they smelled a fishy smell. Obviously, these oils are raw whale oil that has not been processed much. Macas explained that these were fish oils extracted from fish caught nearby. Rugani and others didn't know much, so they didn't ask any more questions. Baron Mosen and others who knew military affairs, because they were inland people, didn't know that fish could produce oil, so they didn't ask anything. Moreover, Baron Mosen didn't understand the defenders' actions. Even if they poured oil, how many people could you burn? Isn't this a waste of oil? But soon, he understood that the main purpose of this oil was not to burn people. After the indigenous army put hundreds of simple wooden ladders on the city wall, the defenders on the top of the city slowly scooped up the boiling whale oil with wooden spoons and poured it on the indigenous people who climbed the ladder first. Suddenly, the group of indigenous warriors who climbed the stairs the fastest let out a miserable howl. They didn't have any armor, only leaves and other things around their waists to cover themselves, basically most of them were naked. Being splashed with boiling whale oil, it would be a disaster. But the real trouble came when the first batch of native warriors who were scalded by boiling oil fell down, and the soldiers on the top of the city continued to scoop up hot oil with wooden spoons and splash it on the wooden ladders. Then, hundreds of wooden ladders were covered with oil. This is bad, the native warriors are barefoot anyway. If they wear shoes, there will be no problem with the oil on the wooden ladder. But if they don't wear shoes, it's hard to stand on the oily wooden ladder. So, the next native warriors who climbed the ladder kept slipping and fell off the ladder. Occasionally, a few who climbed up were stabbed down by the defenders with spears. The investigation team on the top of the city was stunned, but when Mosen and other nobles saw it, their eyes lit up at first, and then dimmed again. They also saw that the defenders of Macas were sure that the natives had no shoes. If the natives had non-slip leather shoes, the oil on the ladder would not affect their climbing. Therefore, pouring oil on the wooden ladder is only suitable for dealing with natives who don't wear shoes, not suitable for use on the European battlefield. If it were ordinary natives, they might have to retreat. After all, this is indeed difficult to solve. But Carlos was someone who had been in the Spanish castle after all. He pondered and came up with a solution to clean the ladder. He sent people to take the ladder back and soak it in the river to clean it. Although it was not completely cleaned, it was not so greasy. Then, he asked people to smear mud on the ladder, which was still a little greasy. After drying in the sun, the ladder was no longer slippery. After several confrontations, the whale oil in the castle was used up. Macas was also a little nervous. He thought he could defeat the natives, but he was defeated twice. So, next, the two sides started a real offensive and defensive battle. Fortunately, the defenders had the castle as a support and could avoid the bows and arrows of the natives. However, the native warriors could hardly avoid the muskets on the top of the city. After a few days, the top of the city was covered with blood. Most of them were from the natives, and there were also a few unlucky defenders. A few unlucky guys were accidentally hit by stray arrows shot from the bottom of the city. Fortunately, only 2 people died, and the others were rescued. After the indigenous army attacked for more than 10 days, Carlos finally found an embarrassing problem. The food was eaten up. Then, the indigenous army had to disband and go home. The women continued to grow cassava and sweet potatoes, and the men went into the mountains to hunt. This is also the reason why Macas dared to provoke a fight to scare the investigation team. Before, the two sides had fought many times. Macas also knew the weakness of the indigenous people, that is, insufficient food reserves. Just like this siege, the indigenous warriors brought cassava and sweet potatoes from home to participate in the war. After eating, they had to go home to get them, or go hunting to get them. Therefore, the indigenous people had no ability to besiege the city for a long time. But what puzzled Macas was when the indigenous people became so manic. Why did they attack for more than 10 days? In the past, even if they were stimulated, they would only attack for 3 to 5 days at most. This time, if he didn't have a trump card in his hand, he would be scared by the offensive of the indigenous people. At this time, the investigation team, which had been frightened for more than 10 days, also took the opportunity to propose to go to Cuba Island to continue the investigation. As for Haiti, after witnessing the brutal siege, several representatives of the investigation team had to admit that the Taino people on the island were indeed barbaric and powerful, and that they could not be tamed without violence. Chapter 1946, Another Indigenous Siege. The attack and defense of Santo Domingo was actually a half-real and half-fake attack and defense. Originally, Macas didn't even plan to use whale oil. However, he was frightened by the full deployment of the indigenous army, so he took out the tactic of pouring whale oil on the wooden ladder, hoping to repel the enemy. But unexpectedly, it was cracked. Fortunately, he still had other trump cards in his hand, otherwise, 500 people against more than 14,000 people would be really dangerous. What trump cards did he have? Naturally, it was earth grenades. Although there were many natives, they were also afraid of the attack of earth grenades. Although the earth grenades were not powerful and could only injure a few native soldiers at a time. However, the terrible attack method with loud noises and damage had a great impact on the morale of the enemy. But this time, Macas' main task was to scare the investigation team, so he didn't take out this trump card. Fortunately, the indigenous army persisted until it ran out of food and sent the investigation team away. Afterwards, Macas learned the reason why Carlos went crazy this time. He had just fallen in love with the daughter of the chief of the village that Macas sent people to attack this time, and planned to marry her as his second wife. However, before he could marry her, Macas sent people to massacre the village and killed his sweetheart, cutting off her head. Suddenly, the indigenous leader Carlos was furious. So, he mobilized all his troops to besiege Santo Domingo and launched a fierce offensive. Unfortunately, although Macas's garrison was small in number, it had a solid castle and many trump cards, so after running out of food, he had no choice but to order a retreat. Of course, Carlos was still angry and planned to attack again next time when there was enough food. However, Macas was not afraid. In addition to those trump card methods, he also had a reinforcement force of 3,000 to 4,000 people hiding in Havana. As long as the investigation team left America, the reinforcement army would come immediately to cooperate with him to completely encircle and suppress Carlos's forces. Therefore, Macas was not worried about the natives making any waves. After all, although the natives had a force of more than 10,000 soldiers, most of them were just joining in the fun and had little combat power. Facing thousands of well-trained troops, they would definitely end up defeated. As for the investigation team, they finally got away from the war-torn Santo Domingo and came to Guantanamo on the island of Cuba. Of course, Guantanamo is not called Guantanamo now, but Havana, which is clearly a lie. At this time, the governor of Cuba, Terra, also personally sat in the new city of Guantanamo to receive the investigation team. Welcome to the adults of the investigation team, welcome to Bishop Rugani. Terra personally went to greet the investigation team at the Long Bridge Pier of Guantanamo Port. Although they were born as serfs of the Hoffman family, Marin later forced them to study. So, over the years, Terra also learned Latin. At least, communicating with the people of the investigation team was not a problem. In the evening, the banquet was finally no longer cassava and sweet potatoes. Because Cuba is an old colony that has been operating for many years, it is natural that the leaders of the investigation team cannot be neglected. Therefore, here, Terra served black bread to the leaders of the investigation team, including his subordinates, and also served a lot of fish and meat, including red wine. Oh, there is beef. Rugani was very satisfied after seeing the dishes on the table. But Terra said faintly, yes, there is beef. It happened that 2 cows died of heat in the manor yesterday, so it was just right to kill them and eat meat. Heat, die of cows. The members of the investigation team were all shocked. Because they didn't expect that cows could starve to death. Terra gave them a popular science: the cows on the steppes of East Europe are adapted to cold climates, but difficult to adapt to hot climates. In summer, there are always many cows that are killed by heat. In fact, Terra is not completely nonsense. Because before the introduction of African cows and Indian cows, cows on the island of Cuba would indeed die of heat every summer. After all, the cows introduced from Eastern Europe are not heat-resistant. In fact, the best oxen that are most adapted to tropical climates are humped cows from India. Unfortunately, Marin now has a small number of humped cows. Therefore, there are still many old breeds of cattle on the island of Cuba. Seeing the arrival of the investigation team, Terra deliberately killed 2 cows with heat and got a lot of beef to entertain them. After learning the true origin of the beef, the interest of the investigation team in eating was reduced a lot. If they hadn't seen Terra himself eating beef in big mouthfuls, they might not dare to eat dead beef. After all, it is a sugarcane producing area, so after the meal, Terra also asked people to serve cane sugar water to entertain the investigation team. However, Baron Mosen and others also realized a problem. It seems that the number of garrisons in this Havana city is a bit small, only a few hundred people. So, after Mosen raised the question, Terra told him in order to solve the security problem of Santo Domingo, half of the troops have been sent to Santo Domingo. Originally, Havana had thousands of troops. The next day, Terra personally took the members of the investigation team to the church. Next to the church, in a huge yard, hundreds of syphilis patients were lying. In addition to hundreds of syphilis patients, there were dozens of local people serving those patients. This is the important set for acting in Guantanamo. In order to show goodwill to the indigenous people, Marin specially built this temporary place to accommodate hundreds of syphilis patients. On the beds, there were hundreds of local people suffering from severe syphilis. Many of them were covered with pustules and looked terrible. Terra did not let the investigation team approach those syphilis patients, but asked people to go up to a tower next door so that the investigation team could look down and see the scene in the large yard. At the same time, Terra explained to the investigation team, these syphilis patients are all from Santo Domingo. Before the local natives rebelled, hundreds of people were accommodated. At the beginning, we asked the priests in the church to serve them personally. However, due to contact infection, several priests in the church unfortunately contracted syphilis and died. After saying that, Terra squeezed out a few tears, then pointed to the cemetery in the backyard of the church and pointed to several tombstones. May they rest in peace in heaven, amen. Rugani immediately took the lead in making a prayer gesture, and others immediately followed suit. Later, in order to protect the safety of the priests, we hired a group of local people who were not afraid of syphilis to take care of the patients. After saying that, Terra pointed to the natives who were wearing masks and white coats and moving among the patients. Because of the terrible infectiousness of syphilis, I have ordered people to block the yard next to the church and prohibit ordinary people from approaching. As for the hundreds of patients inside, they can only rely on God to bless them. If they can recover, I will naturally let them go back. If they die unfortunately, they can be buried on the spot in the cemetery behind the church. Rugani and others nodded repeatedly after hearing this. Even Baron Mosen and others who came to find fault had nothing to say about this arrangement. Besides, Mosen and others did not dare to enter the yard to check. After all, they were afraid of death. In the next 2 days, accompanied by Terra, the investigation team also inspected the sugarcane fields outside the city in the villages where local serfs who planted sugarcane lived. Because they had been prepared, the villages where these local serfs lived had been repaired long ago. Moreover, the village where these local serfs lived was spacious and bright. The serfs were not shackled, and everyone had a smile on their faces. Obviously, this was well prepared. In this way, the claim that Marin abused and enslaved the local indigenous people was self-defeating. But on the third day, when the investigation team was about to continue the investigation, thousands of indigenous soldiers suddenly appeared and surrounded the city of Havana. What's going on? Governor Terra, why are there so many indigenous soldiers besieging the city? Rugani and other officials of the investigation team asked in panic. They had just faced a siege in Santo Domingo not long ago, and there was still a shadow in their hearts. Terra explained with a bitter face, alas, isn't it the fault of that damn indigenous leader Carlos? The indigenous people nearby are also Taino people. After Carlos launched a rebellion on Hispaniola, he sent his men to Cuba in canoes to instigate the locals to launch a rebellion. Now, while the troops in the city have been transferred to guard Santo Domingo on Hispaniola, several local tribes nearby have suddenly gathered thousands of troops and come to besiege Havana from time to time. After a pause, Terra also explained, of course, these native savages also know that the Havana castle is strong and difficult to conquer. Therefore, their main purpose is actually to plunder the villages outside the city. As soon as Terra finished speaking, the members of the investigation team standing on the top of the city saw thick smoke rising from the village where the native serfs lived that they had visited and investigated yesterday. Obviously, those native rebels were setting fire to the village. However, the members of the investigation team did not know that the thousands of native rebels this time were actually native fake soldiers recruited by Terra's men in the Havana colony. This time, this group of fake soldiers also cooperated with Terra to perform for the investigation team. The barbarians in this wild area are really barbaric, and they rebel at every turn. Seeing the native rebels raging outside the city, the officials of the investigation team shook their heads and had a very bad view of the colonies in the Americas. So, Rugani wrote in the investigation report, the locals are quite barbaric, and they are easy to revolt once someone incites them. This is the case on Hispaniola Island, and it is also the case on Cuba Island. So, at the beginning, I think that tough military action is indeed necessary. Perhaps, only when these barbarians believe in the Lord and are guided by the Lord, can they change their barbaric habits. Terra secretly nodded after peeking at what Rugani wrote. In fact, Terra already knew that the leader of the investigation team was from the Papal States and was arranged by Pope Julius II. In the end, Bishop Rugani will definitely make a judgment that is favorable to the North Sea Kingdom. However, this requires the North Sea Kingdom to cooperate well in the acting. Otherwise, it is not easy for others to draw conclusions casually. After all, there are several representatives of the hostile German states watching over there. Chapter 1947 I have made contributions to the Holy See. There were more than 7,000 indigenous rebels surrounding Guantanamo Castle, of which 3,000 were fake soldiers who helped Terra manage the Cuban natives. Their leader was given a very German name, Hans. During the siege, those who went to the village to destroy were basically more than 4,000 natives who were not fake soldiers. However, there were fake army officers who commanded them to smash, loot and rob in an orderly manner. Yes, smash, loot and rob in an orderly manner. This was not the real native barbarian army of Haiti, but a fake army with a strict organizational structure. While the natives other than the more than 4,000 fake soldiers were smashing, looting and robbing in the village, the 3,000 fake soldiers stood in a neat queue and stared at the direction of the castle. That posture was very much like a regular army. The natives also have an army? Baron Mawson from Lorraine was shocked when he saw the situation. Because, in Santo Domingo, although there were many native troops, they were basically noisy, like a mess. If there were not only a few hundred people in the castle, the difference in numbers would be too big, and the defenders could easily be swallowed up by the opponent's numerical advantage. But this indigenous rebel army outside Guantanamo Castle clearly looked like an army. Especially the 3,000 natives standing in the front row, although the weapons they used were very backward, mostly simple spears made of sharpened wooden sticks, and earthen bows and arrows. However, when the other 4,000 people went to several villages around the castle to loot and set fire, these 3,000 people stared at the castle motionlessly, obviously afraid that the defenders in the castle would counterattack. Along with Baron Mawson's doubts, several other representatives also turned their eyes to Terra. Terra pretended to be helpless and said, "That rebel leader was once my slave." "Your slave? How could he train an army?" "You know, those who can train 2,000 or 3,000 people in a good manner are generally the children of knight families." Baron Mawson asked in confusion. Terra covered his face helplessly, and then said, "When we first came to Cuba, I brought my servant named Stone, Hans's original name, with me because he was very obedient and loved to study. In addition, due to the lack of manpower to look after and supervise the natives, I asked Stone to recruit 100 young and strong natives and train them to use spears and bows and arrows to guard against those natives who might have ill intentions. But unexpectedly, he learned the means of military command. He was originally loyal, but a few months ago, the guy named Carlos over there sent someone to drive a canoe over and secretly contacted Stone. Under the instigation of Carlos's men, Stone defected from the castle with more than 100 of his men. Then, he formed a team of several thousand people. Fortunately, I didn't teach them how to use muskets, nor did I give them muskets. Otherwise, Havana City would be in danger." Terra pretended to have an expression of surviving a disaster. After learning from Marin for a few years, Terra's performance was definitely up to the level of a small-time actor in Indian. And in this era, this level was good enough. In other words, Carlos on Hispaniola was trained by the Spaniards, and the stubborn Stone leader on Cuba was trained by you? Baron Mawson concluded. Terra continued to pretend to be embarrassed and said, "It seems like this." At this time, Baron Mawson and representatives of several other German anti-Marin vassal states almost burst out laughing. It was so cool, the colonies of the North Sea Kingdom were really not peaceful. But the more this was the case, the better they felt. Terra pretended not to notice their expressions of trying not to laugh, and said seriously, "But it's okay, I have applied for reinforcements from the mainland. Our Majesty Marin has also decided to send tens of thousands of troops to encircle and suppress the two rebels. However, it is difficult for most Europeans to adapt to the hot and humid environment there. If we are in the wild, we can easily defeat them. But if they hide in the forest, it will be difficult." The representatives of the vassal states present all nodded in agreement with Terra's words. After all, Germany is currently a place with dense forests. Many bandits and rebels, after hiding in the Black Forest, it is difficult for the government army to wipe them out. But although they understand, they are still very happy to see the colonies of the North Sea Kingdom become messy. After all, it is also a very comfortable thing to see the enemy suffer. Seeing that several representatives of the vassal states were obviously very happy but had to control their expressions, Terra pretended to be ignorant and comforted them. "Don't worry, my lords. Our Majesty has decided to mobilize tens of thousands of troops from the mainland. Not only can they defeat the rebels, but they will also stay to cut down trees and cut down all the trees. In this way, the rebels will have no place to hide. One day, Cuba and Hispaniola will be settled. Moreover, our Majesty has decided to rescue 100,000 healthy natives from Hispaniola, which is seriously affected by the epidemic. Then, they will all be developed into believers of the Great Lord." Terra chattered about the future plan like a fool. Bishop Rugani and several people from the Holy See, as their own people, heard that the North Sea Kingdom was really going to develop 100,000 natives into Christians as promised, so they were naturally overjoyed and nodded in approval. However, Baron Mosen and several representatives of German states rolled their eyes fiercely. Damn, this idiot, how can he tell that we are worried about him? It's too late to worry about his death. However, the North Sea Kingdom is really willing to spend money and actually wants to develop 100,000 Christians. This big move is simply flattering the Holy See to the extreme. In this era when the Holy See is still very authoritative, even if the representatives of several states are unhappy, they must keep smiling and agree with Bishop Rugani from time to time. Especially the two representatives from the bishop's state, who are people from the church. Although they are hostile to Marin, they have to pretend to be very happy when they hear the plan to develop 100,000 Christians. In fact, they are very conflicted in their hearts. They are indeed happy about the increase of 100,000 Christians. However, the person who did this was Marin, the enemy of their boss, and they were very unhappy. Seeing the expressions of several people who didn't know whether to cry or laugh, Tara was secretly happy. He remembered a very irritating thing that Marin once said: "I like to see you want to kill me but can't do anything to me." In order to prove the merits of missionary work, Tara prepared a few months ago. Witnessed by Bishop Rugani and other representatives of the investigation team, Tara called 100 local teenagers and recited large passages of the Bible in Latin in front of the investigation team, which made Bishop Rugani and other church representatives clap their hands red with joy. Well, with these 100 children who can recite the Bible in Latin, Bishop Rugani can completely give a positive evaluation of the colonization of the North Sea Kingdom. In fact, Tara also wanted to find more indigenous people to recite the Bible, but there were very few indigenous people who could learn European languages. It took a lot of effort for Tara to find 100 indigenous teenagers who could recite the Bible in Latin. In addition to the 100 teenagers who could recite the Bible, there were actually 2 adult indigenous priests who could speak German in the church in Guantanamo Castle. These 2 people were geniuses among the indigenous people, and Tara didn't know how to use them. In theory, such geniuses should be very useful to help the government. But Marin was worried that such people were too smart and would develop the desire to be independent after mastering a lot of skills. So, later, Marin thought of a very unethical way: all the geniuses of the indigenous people were sent to the church to be priests. In this way, after these geniuses entered the cage of the church, they could not even get married and have children. Even if they were smart, they could only recite scriptures and pray to God every day. In this way, the genius of the indigenous people was wasted in the church. However, this move can greatly please the Holy See, so why not do it? Sure enough, after the 2 genius missionaries of the indigenous people communicated with the representatives of the investigation team in fluent German and Latin, Bishop Rugani characterized the missionary work on the island of Cuba: "It was fruitful, and I hope to continue to work hard." At this time, Tara held his chest high with a proud look on his face. That proud and exaggerated expression clearly said, "I have made contributions to the Holy See, I am a great contributor. Come and praise me." Chapter 1948: Tactics of Tiring the Enemy. Bishop Rugani and other representatives of the Holy See naturally had an anti-smile of encouragement and praise, while the representatives of the hostile German states had sad smiles. While the investigation team was patrolling the city to inspect the missionary work of Havana City, the rebels outside the city were not idle either. The people standing on the top of the city saw that the rebels seemed to have packed up and transported away all the property of the villages around Havana City. Even the serfs were kidnapped together. Oh, that's terrible. Without the serfs, who will cultivate the fields outside the city? Tara's face was full of distress. The representatives of the German states next to him were happy now. Throughout the day, the rebels only visited the manors outside the city and did not attack the castle. When it got dark, the rebels seemed to have retreated in an orderly manner, leaving behind a mess and a burning village. Things seemed to have passed like this, but in the middle of the night, shouts of killing suddenly rang out around Havana City. The defenders in the city were alarmed, and they hurriedly put on their clothes, held muskets, and went up to the top of the city to fight back. Bang 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 dash, bursts of loud noises from muskets came, and bursts of screams from the natives were heard from the bottom of the city. What's going on? What's going on? Bishop Rugani and a group of investigation team officials came to the governor's palace opposite the church in panic. At this time, Tara seemed to have just been awakened, and looked sleepy. Tara yawned and explained casually, "My lords, the stubborn guy is too cunning. He knows that attacking Havana during the day will definitely cause great losses, because the natives cannot resist the muskets. However, this bastard actually attacked in the middle of the night. If our soldiers had not been very vigilant during this period, they might have broken through the city defense and endangered the lives of all the lords." At this time, Baron Mosen and other representatives of the states also said with fear, "Yes, a surprise attack in the middle of the night. If it was the army I commanded, it might be caught." According to European practice, military confrontations usually take place during the day, and there are very few night battles. It was not until the 18th century that Europeans began to be shameless, and night battles and sneak attacks became more common. Everyone went up to the top of the city to inspect, and then reluctantly returned to the governor's mansion, sitting there dozing off and waiting for news. The sleepy representatives of the investigation team did not see that when the musketeers on the top of the city were loading, they only stuffed rags in, not lead bullets. In other words, the defenders on the top of the city fired empty guns. If it was daytime, with military experts such as Baron Mosen watching, they might be exposed. However, it was midnight. They did not notice that the musketeers on the city wall did not load lead bullets in the middle of the night. As for whether the natives under the city wall were shot, it was even more unclear, and they could not see it even if they wanted to. So, this lively offensive and defensive battle was completely a mess. Unfortunately, the officials of the investigation team were very sleepy at this time. After walking around the city wall, they felt that the city defense was stable, so they ran back to the governor's mansion and sat in a chair to take a nap and wait for news. But listening to the continuous gunfire coming from outside, they could only doze off half asleep and half awake. Many times, when he was about to fall asleep, he was awakened by a sudden burst of gunfire. He continued to doze off under the pretext of being sleepy. Tara left the governor's mansion and climbed up the city wall on the pretext of commanding on the battlefield. But the investigation team officials who were dozing on the chairs in the governor's mansion did not know that after leaving the governor's mansion, Tara did not climb up the city wall, but rested in a small house at the foot of the city wall. In order to avoid being disturbed by the gunfire, Tara prepared cotton balls and plugged his ears tightly, and the impact became very small. At dawn the next day, both the members of the investigation team and the soldiers who participated in defending the city were sleepy, and only Tara, who had slept enough, was full of energy. At this time, the rebels had long faded, and what was left outside the city was a mess. There was a lot of blood on the ground, which might be left by the natives after being shot. The actual situation was that the rebels brought the blood of pigs and sheep to the ground to create an effect. But because it was operated in the dark, how could the investigation team in the city find it? They didn't even dare to go out of the city to inspect those manors. Because they were not sure when the rebels would come again. During the day, the investigation team did not leave the city, but just looked at the messy battlefield below the city from the top of the city. Then, the energetic Tara continued to pester them to introduce the great achievements of the North Sea Kingdom in opening up America. Because they did not sleep well, the officials of the investigation team kept yawning. But Tara ignored it and continued to talk. During lunch, many members of the delegation dozed off while eating, and even one person almost buried his head in the plate when he dozed off. That night, before going to bed, Tara quietly found Bishop Rugani and several other representatives of the Holy See and gave them cotton balls to plug their ears. So, after the rebels attacked again in the middle of the night, Bishop Rugani and several other representatives of the Holy See could still sleep peacefully amid the gunfire. And Baron Mosen and several other representatives of the states who lived in the backyard of the governor's mansion could not sleep for half a night. Tara was still the same, and ran to the small house to sleep under the pretext of going to the city wall to command. Bishop Rugani and other officials of the delegation who lived in a church in the city sent someone to inform them that the bishop and others would pray for the defenders in the church and would not come. In fact, this was Tara's arrangement. Bishop Rugani and his men were not praying for the defenders at all. They were clearly sleeping soundly. But Baron Mosen and other representatives of several states did not know this, and they were still waiting for news in the living room of the governor's mansion with sleepy faces. Later, they were so sleepy that they ran back to rest. However, Tara did not provide them with cotton balls to plug their ears, and they could not fall asleep when they heard the gunshots. After that, for several days, the rebels would attack the city on time every midnight, and the defenders on the top of the city would crack and shoot outside the city. Since they got cotton balls to plug their ears, Bishop Rugani and others have been much more energetic. And Tara also privately gave them many valuable gifts to make them feel good. Baron Mosen and other representatives of several states who lived in the backyard of the governor's mansion were uncomfortable, and they could not sleep well every night. They wanted to sleep during the day, so Tara sent people to provide them with various services, just to prevent them from sleeping well. After a few days, Baron Mosen and other representatives of the states were almost suffering from nervous breakdown. However, Tara also seemed to be very tired. In fact, Tara asked his makeup staff to help him draw dark circles under his eyes. And Baron Mosen and others really had dark circles under their eyes. After a week of this, Baron Mosen and other representatives of the states almost collapsed in their hearts. Damn, living in Santo Domingo is better than living in Havana. Although the food there is worse than Havana, you can sleep well at night. Bishop Rugani and others, who were full of energy, took advantage of their sleepiest time to discuss with Baron Mosen and other representatives of the states how to draw conclusions. Several people were already very sleepy and almost lost their ability to think. So, several people waved their hands and said, "Just do as Lord Rugani said." After that, several people fell asleep again. Chapter 1949 report released. The few people who came to find faults no longer had the heart to toss and turn, and the next thing was easy to do. Because the serfs outside the city were kidnapped by the rebels, there was no possibility of investigation. Therefore, the main object of the investigation team was the 700 or 800 indigenous people living in the city. In Guantanamo, this fake Havana city, in addition to the 500 garrisons led by Terra and the families of the soldiers, there were also 700 or 800 indigenous people. They mainly provided services for Terra and the garrison soldiers, and were the main labor force in the city. After all, Terra and his army could not engage in production labor. The main goal of the investigation team was to investigate the living standards of these indigenous people and see if they were abused. But this problem obviously did not exist. Not to mention that a plan to welcome the inspection had been prepared here a long time ago. Even if it was not prepared, there would be no abuse of indigenous people in the real Havana. The military discipline of the North Sea Kingdom is very strict, and there will never be a situation where soldiers oppress the people. Even if they are indigenous people, the soldiers will not abuse them innocently. Unless the indigenous people broke the law or did not obey the rule of the colonial authorities of the North Sea Kingdom. In the city, Bishop Rugani personally led a group of people to visit dozens of households in the city in a surprise attack. Most of them broke in during mealtime, mainly to see what the natives were eating. As a result, they were surprised to find that the natives here lived better than the poor in Europe. Because they grew rice locally, the natives mainly ate rice. Then, they had some simple vegetables. Because Cuba is located in the tropics, vegetables are not lacking all year round. Therefore, when the natives in the city eat, everyone can eat a bowl of white rice. Then, the family will also eat a pot of vegetables with less oil and water. This kind of life is not good, but it is definitely not bad. After all, it is white rice, pure food without sawdust and soil. This alone shocked the knowledgeable investigation team officials. Baron Mosen asked Terra in confusion, "Are you giving the natives white rice just to deal with the inspection?" It is normal for him to guess this way, because Westerners are not unfamiliar with dealing with inspections, and they all have some tricks. But Terra said confidently, "Of course it's not to deal with the inspection. Cuba is located in the tropics, and rice can be harvested twice a year. So, there is no shortage of rice. Unfortunately, the rebellion of the local indigenous people is more difficult. At the same time, the problem of syphilis is also troublesome. Moreover, there are many poisonous snakes and poisonous insects in the tropical jungle, which is very dangerous." After saying this, Terra showed a painful expression. In fact, Terra still lied. The rice that can be harvested twice a year comes from India. The Kampa rice introduced from the Ming dynasty, introduced during the Song dynasty, can reach the level of 3 harvests a year. However, Terra can't say it. Otherwise, it will attract jealousy and covetousness. Bishop Rugani is one of them, so he cooperated and said, "In other words, your development in Cuba has both dangers and benefits. A cultured person is a cultured person," and he summarized it more accurately than Terra, a semi-literate person. Yes, that's what I mean. It's because you, the bishop, have a higher level of education, while I have a lower level of education, so I can't summarize it accurately enough. Well, in general, there are both dangers and benefits. Terra nodded repeatedly. What about other places besides Cuba? Baron Mosen interrupted. Other places? Terra looked at Baron Mosen, thought for a moment and said, "Cuba is relatively good. Some places are really scary. The land in the south, that is, the Amazon jungle area, is really dangerous. I heard that people who have ventured there have all published books, and the descriptions of the situation are roughly the same. In addition, there is a place called Panama in our southwest, which is really dangerous. There are a lot of poisonous insects and mosquitoes in the jungle there. Once bitten, it is easy to get malaria." Malaria? The members of the investigation team all took a breath. In this era, malaria is almost a terminal illness that is certain to kill. It is very scary and frightening. That's right, it's malaria. In the tropical rainforest, the most terrifying thing is not the beasts, but the diseases. There are a lot of poisonous mosquitoes and insects on the land in Panama. Once bitten, the mildest is the wound redness, swelling and itching, and the severest is directly suffering from malaria, and there is also yellow fever. Wait, what is yellow fever? Baron Mosen interrupted. Europeans had not yet come into contact with yellow fever at this time, so naturally they didn't know what it was. Of course, the Portuguese were an exception. After all, the Portuguese had already colonized West Africa. And yellow fever is a common disease in West Africa and tropical America. It is a terrible disease in which people get a high fever and jaundice after being bitten by poisonous insects and mosquitoes. The mortality rate is very high. It's similar to malaria. Terra explained. In fact, yellow fever is indeed a very terrible disease. Because the North Sea Kingdom currently has no treatment. Malaria, on the other hand, is no longer a terrible disease with artemisinin. However, Terra will definitely not tell this secret. After all, malaria is the main disease that scares other countries away from colonizing tropical areas. If the treatment method is announced, it will attract colonial competitors. Similar to malaria. Others also took a breath, because, similar to malaria, it is basically equivalent to a terminal illness in this era. At this point, Terra smiled and comforted everyone. Don't worry, yellow fever is relatively rare on the island of Cuba. At most, someone will get malaria from time to time. It's no big deal. It would have been better if he didn't say it. After he said that, the members of the investigation team, including Bishop Rugani and several people from the Vatican, cursed in their hearts, damn, no big deal. Malaria can kill people, right? Thinking of this, everyone in the investigation team felt insecure. But they didn't know that Terra really thought that malaria was no big deal. Because Bahai country has artemisinin, malaria is just a common minor illness. Hearing that the tropics are so dangerous, the members of the investigation team can't stay here. They don't want to die in a foreign land because of malaria or yellow fever caused by mosquito bites. What's more, Baron Mosen and others were exhausted. Therefore, the progress of the investigation was accelerated. A few days later, Bishop Rugani began to write a report. Your Holiness and Archbishops of the College of Cardinals, after many days of detailed investigation, we have found that there is no slavery or abuse of indigenous people in the colonies of Cuba and Hispaniola in the North Sea. The lives of the local indigenous people are even better than those of the poor in Europe. Because, according to the colonial governor Terra, Cuba is located in the tropics, and rice can be harvested twice a year. Therefore, the local indigenous people can eat their fill and have a bowl of rice for every meal. As for vegetables, there is no shortage of them in the tropical regions all year round. But the local indigenous people are not very peaceful and are prone to rebellion. In addition, there are also many poisonous mosquitoes and insects in the forest. In some places, if you are bitten by a mosquito, you are likely to contract terminal diseases such as malaria and yellow fever. As for the missionary work, the investigation team has found it to be true. However, due to the language barrier, only a small number of young and smart indigenous people can learn the European language and recite the Bible. Governor Terra told us that they plan to first train a group of smart young indigenous people to become faithful Christians. Then, let those Christians further spread the glory of the Lord to other indigenous people. Then, strive to develop all indigenous people into Christians in a few decades. In summary, the North Sea Kingdom's pioneering and colonizing behavior in the savage continent was quite civilized, and it did spread the glory of the Lord. Therefore, the investigation team unanimously believes that the North Sea Kingdom did not abuse the indigenous people and was indeed committed to spreading the glory of the Lord. The previous rumors about the North Sea Kingdom abusing the indigenous people were pure slander. After Bishop Rugani finished writing the report, he circulated it to all members of the investigation team. After reading Baron Mawson's report, several representatives of the German states were somewhat unhappy, but they could not find any evidence to refute it, so they could only sign the report reluctantly. In addition, they did not sleep well these days, and they were worried about contracting a terminal illness such as malaria after being bitten by poisonous mosquitoes. Therefore, they could only sign reluctantly, hoping to end the investigation as soon as possible so that they could leave here. Chapter 1950, Designated Long Staple Cotton Producing Area. It's so hard for me. Lord Rugani, everything was going well in Cuba. Who could have thought that such a large-scale rebellion would suddenly break out? All the farmers under my command were captured by the rebels. Who will plant the sugarcane and rice next season? Woo-woo. As he said this, Terra held Rugani's hand and burst into tears. What could Bishop Rugani do? He could only pat his shoulder to comfort him. The Lord will bless you. Well, it's almost the same as not saying anything. Baron Mosen and other representatives of several hostile states were somewhat gloating, but at the same time they were extremely fortunate, they could finally leave this dangerous place. Hearing that they might get malaria, they dared not stay any longer. Although they were not favored in the country, otherwise they would not have taken on this difficult task. But no matter what, they were still members of the nobility and lived a comfortable life. If they died of illness here for no apparent reason, it would be a huge loss. Therefore, it is better to leave as soon as possible. With tears in his eyes, Terra reluctantly said goodbye to the people of the investigation team at the dock. Then, after the ship left the dock, he kept waving. But when the top sail of the ship disappeared on the sea level, Terra immediately smiled and ordered, "Pack up, we move back to Havana." Then, he stretched and muttered, "Finally, this fooling show is over. It's so tiring." In fact, the defenders in the city were more tired than him. Because they had to go to the top of the city every night to pretend to fight, they had very little sleep. Basically, they were not much better than the representatives of those hostile states. Now that the investigation team finally left, they could finally have a good sleep. So, everyone in Guantanamo Castle did not leave immediately that day. Because the soldiers strongly requested a day of rest. Terra also understood, so he let them make up for the sleep. Then, the next morning, a fleet hidden in the nearby bay appeared at the dock and began to move the city's things to return to the real Havana. However, it would be a waste to abandon this newly built city. Maybe it can be used for acting again in the future. Therefore, Terra finally left 50 soldiers and 50 indigenous serfs to guard the castle and cultivate the surrounding fields. However, the nameplate on the city gate was changed from Havana to Guantanamo. Since the city has been built and such a huge cost has been spent, there is no need to waste it. In the future, Terra plans to send more soldiers and serfs to develop here. After all, the thousands of acres of land dug out around the city cannot be wasted. Moreover, Guantanamo has a very good geographical location. It is not far from Haiti Island. When the army captures healthy indigenous people on Haiti Island, they can be transported to Guantanamo for centralized resettlement and identification of syphilis. After confirming that they are healthy, they will be transported to the North American colonies. In addition, the population for the development of Guantanamo in the future will also be selected from the Taino people captured from Haiti Island. Haiti Island is currently a highly developed island with a population of 1 million, although hundreds of thousands of people have to be transported to the North American colonies as serfs. However, it is still possible to leave a few thousand people to develop locally. A few thousand serfs are enough to develop the Guantanamo area into a relatively prosperous area. However, Guantanamo is a bit weird. Because, on the island of Cuba, where the climate is generally humid, the Guantanamo area is actually a relatively dry area. This is mainly because the mountains to the north of Guantanamo block the moisture from the north. The island of Cuba is located in the northeast trade wind belt, and the Guantanamo area in the south of the mountain, which happens to be blocked by the northern mountains, is actually quite dry. In some areas, even cacti that are only found in desert areas grow. But the Guantanamo area is not short of water, because the mountains in the north with abundant rainfall flow down several rivers, bringing sufficient water sources for irrigation. Only in a few areas that are not covered by rivers will it appear a little dry. And this also brings convenience to local development because of the lack of moisture. The local virgin forest is not dense. When Terra brought people to open up here, he didn't cut too many trees. Because the local trees are not very lush, it is very convenient to develop. If the forest is too dense, let alone development, just cutting down trees will exhaust a person. Only in Guantanamo, where the water vapor from the northeastern ocean is blocked by mountains, it has become a rare arid area in the Caribbean, and the trees are scarce enough. If it were other European countries, it might be difficult to develop in places like Guantanamo where there is not much rainfall, and they could only do grazing. However, this problem does not exist in Marin's North Sea Kingdom. As long as there are rivers, irrigation canals can be dug, and then large tracts of fertile land can be opened up. Whether it is planting sugarcane, rice, or tropical fruits, there is no problem. Moreover, the local area is very suitable for growing cotton. Because cotton is a crop that requires a lot of light. The islands in the Caribbean have a special long staple cotton, which is a very excellent cotton variety. Marin had planned to plant this long staple cotton, also known as Sea Island cotton, on the island of Cuba. It was discovered on the island of Barbados, and Marin sent people to find it specially. Originally, the long staple cotton on the island of Barbados was not discovered until the 18th century, and then imported into plantations in the southern United States, becoming an important cotton variety. However, due to the Civil War and the bollworm disease, the long staple cotton cultivation in the southern United States was basically destroyed, but the inferior upland cotton was retained because of its stronger vitality. Later, the planting areas of island long staple cotton were mainly in Barbados, Jamaica and Antigua on the islands of the Caribbean Sea, and became a rare variety in the world. In later generations, island cotton is a very precious textile raw material. Its main use is to make expensive high-end suits. Because of its scarcity, its price is more expensive than silk and cashmere. The reason why island cotton is difficult to promote on a large scale in later generations is mainly because its variety has poor environmental adaptability. Mainly, it is not cold resistant and can only grow in tropical and subtropical regions, and has high requirements for light and temperature. As for the fact that Egypt can become the world's most famous long staple cotton producing area in later generations, it is because Egypt's natural environment is very suitable for the growth of long staple cotton. First of all, Egypt is a tropical desert climate area with abundant sunlight. Secondly, the Nile River brings abundant irrigation water, and the land in the flood-prone areas of the lower reaches of the Nile River is also fertile. The arid climate, coupled with fertile land and abundant irrigation water, makes Egypt a world-famous producer of long staple cotton. However, in this era, Egypt is not a producer of long staple cotton. Because the world's cotton textile industry has not yet emerged. The cultivation of long staple cotton in Egypt can be traced back to the end of the 18th century when the French invasion of Egypt failed. In order to open up financial resources, the Egyptian Pasha, equivalent to the princes of the Ottoman separatism, introduced the cultivation of island long staple cotton. Later, because the Civil War destroyed the long staple cotton cultivation in the United States, Egypt's long staple cotton began to stand out and became an important supplier of the British cotton textile industry. In later generations, it became an important source of raw materials for the high-end clothing industry. Of course, that was originally in history. Marin came through, and everything changed. Marin had sent people to find the long staple cotton that was originally discovered by British colonists in the 18th century. Barbados is located northeast of Grenada. After receiving Marin's order, the governor of Grenada, George Sr., sent several Indian untouchable serfs to Barbados to search for long staple cotton. They soon found it. Indians are good at growing cotton. After the Indian serfs brought back long staple cotton, they began to cultivate it on Grenada. Today, the area has grown to several hundred acres. But the climate of Grenada is relatively humid, with rain all year round, which is not actually an ideal place for producing long staple cotton. It was the Guantanamo area that recorded the local arid climate and hydrological conditions after the construction of the fortress, which made Marin realize that this was an excellent place for producing long staple cotton. As long as the cotton plantation is opened up in the local area, high-quality cotton can be supplied in the future for the weaving of high-quality cotton cloth. Marin, who came from the later Chinese world, was actually not used to the current mainstream linen and woolen cloth in Europe and preferred cotton clothes. Of course, it was cotton underwear. As for outer clothes, he still wore silk according to habit. Otherwise, his status would not be shown. However, for the clothes inside, Marin would definitely prefer soft and odorless cotton cloth. The cultivation of long staple cotton on the island in Guantanamo is actually to supply high-quality cotton cloth in the future. Although the area of Guantanamo is not large, Marin's demand for long staple cotton cloth is not large, as long as the aristocracy is enough. As for the ordinary people, cotton cloth woven from Mexican upland cotton will do. However, because of the inspection by the Vatican Commission, the planting of long staple cotton was not implemented. But now that the commission has left, cotton can be planted locally. It just so happens that thousands of troops from Havana, Cuba, will soon go to Haiti to arrest people. At that time, thousands of honest serfs will be planted here to plant long staple cotton on the island to supply the needs of local nobles. As soon as Terra returned to Havana, he received an order from Marin immediately send a ship to notify Old George to send a group of Indian serfs with long staple cotton seeds to Guantanamo to start planting long staple cotton. In any case, Indians have a very long history of planting cotton and are the first country in the world to plant cotton and weave cotton. Some of the Indian untouchable slaves introduced by Marin have rich experience in planting cotton, and some women are also good at weaving cotton. Therefore, it is a good choice to let some Indian untouchable slaves go to Guantanamo to lead the initial cotton planting and cotton weaving. As for the people captured from Haiti later, the Taino people could have asked the Indian serfs to teach them how to grow cotton and spin and weave cotton. I believe that in the near future, Guantanamo, a rare arid area in the Caribbean, will become an important production base for high-end cotton underwear in the North Sea Kingdom. Chapter 1951 Knitting Training Class. There is a reason why cotton can replace linen and woolen cloth. Cotton cloth is not only soft and comfortable, but also easy to wash, and is a good material for underwear. It is said that after the introduction of Indian cotton cloth, the level of personal hygiene of Europeans has improved a lot. Of course, Marin did not want to replace silk and woolen cloth with cotton cloth. Why? This is not in his interest. If cotton cloth is popular in Europe, then silk and woolen cloth will fall out of favor. The silk trade in the Ming dynasty is precisely Marin's important interest. Therefore, it is absolutely impossible to replace silk and woolen cloth with cotton cloth. However, cotton cloth can be used to make underwear. Marin's plan is to make Europeans accustomed to wearing cotton underwear and woolen sweaters in the future. As for the outside, the nobles and the rich wear silk outer clothes, and ordinary people wear woolen cloth and linen outer clothes. In this way, the three textiles have their own living space and do not interfere with each other. And Marin also guaranteed his own interests in silk. In fact, this distribution model is very much in the style of later generations. In modern times, people are accustomed to wearing all cotton underwear and sweaters outside underwear to keep warm. Then, it's up to you to do it outside, depending on your personal preferences and financial resources. Under Marin's promotion, some women in the North Sea have learned to knit sweaters, and can knit sweaters and trousers with good cold protection. These sweaters are tight-fitting and do not look cumbersome when worn. Silk robes can also be worn outside, which is very convenient and fashionable. Before Marin introduced sweaters, Europeans' inner cold protection clothes were mainly sheepskin jackets with fur. However, the cold protection effect was not very good. In particular, the arms were not taken care of. Or, simply clothes made of woolen cloth, wearing multiple layers, but very heavy. Unlike hand-knitted sweaters, if the craftsmanship and materials are good, the knitted sweaters are light, warm and breathable. In addition, the most important point is that hand-knitted sweaters are not restricted by the venue and do not require machinery and equipment, which is very suitable for idle women. Just go to the store to buy a few balls of wool and a few wooden needles, and you can knit sweaters. Marin clearly remembered that in his previous life, his mother and the women in the neighborhood would gather together to gossip before winter came, and knit sweaters with their hands. Knitting sweaters can generate benefits. Women with good skills can not only knit sweaters for their families, but Marin will even arrange for the shops under Beihai to place orders with women with good skills during the slack season, asking them to help knit high-quality sweaters, and then purchase them and sell them in a centralized manner. In this way, those women with good hands can also have an extra income during the slack season to subsidize their families. This is definitely a good thing for ordinary families, and it can make the family's economic conditions much better. In addition, because knitting sweaters can consume a lot of wool, it is also a good stimulus for the sheep farming industry. After all, even inferior coarse wool can be used to knit sweaters after being spun into wool yarn, and it is cheap. In this way, Beihai State has formed a complete industrial chain of raising sheep, shearing wool, purchasing wool, spinning yarn, knitting sweaters, which feeds many people and makes the lives of ordinary families much better. At the same time, it can also generate a lot of tax revenue. Marin even ordered to hire the woman with the highest knitting skills in a certain place, and organize local young women and girls to learn knitting skills from them during the slack season. In this way, knitting sweaters has become an important job for ordinary women in Beihai country in their spare time. Not only can it kill time, but it can also bring income to the family. Of course, the premise is that your skills are not too trendy. Otherwise, the purchasing store will refuse to accept it. For now, due to limited funds and traditional social concepts, the official craftsman school in Beihai country currently only recruits boys. As for girls, they cannot go to school normally at present. But Marin has decided to take advantage of the opportunity of teaching knitting skills to teach those girls to recognize some words. It does not require a high level, but at least recognizes words, and then learns basic addition, subtraction, multiplication and division at the elementary school level. In this way, in daily life in the future, you will not be deceived because of your lack of calculation ability. Even Marin did not plan to spend money to build a special girls' school, but planned to directly borrow churches from various places. Anyway, except for Sundays, the church is idle. During the slack season, you can call all the women together in the church under the name of knitting training class. While knitting sweaters, you can find nuns to teach the girls to read and the simplest addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. The teaching equipment is also very simple. The nuns use blackboards and chalks, while the girls use the cheapest sandboxes and branches. In this way, without the need for a venue and without spending much money, you can let the girls of Beihai have the most basic writing and arithmetic skills. It doesn't need to be too high, the level of the second grade of elementary school is enough. Moreover, the time is set during the slack season, and it does not delay the girls from helping with housework at home. As for the name, it will be implemented in the name of knitting training class. Anyway, the Beihai church is under the control of Marin, and those people in the church dare not say anything. Borrowing the church venue does not cost much. As for teaching little girls to read, nuns must be used to avoid the appearance of some weird priests. Although nuns are not everywhere, it is not difficult to arrange a nun for a church. At most, the government arranges a carriage to pick up nuns from the convent to teach in churches around the country. Of course, Marin does not want to bury and waste some particularly smart girls. Once the nun finds that the little girl is particularly smart, Marin will use financial funds to send her to the girls' school specially established by Marin for free for further training. Then, according to their specialties and interests, they will be trained into suitable talents. As a traverser in the future, Marin does not discriminate against women. Even in his previous life, Marin did not dare to discriminate against women. Otherwise, he would be warned by the female fist. Therefore, Marin unanimously believes that if women shift their attention from love, entertainment, makeup and luxury goods to business, except that they are not as good as men in physical work, there is not much difference in other aspects. Of course, in this era, restricted by social values, Marin cannot provide too many employment opportunities for women. However, there are some industries that cannot be done without women. For example, gynecologists, especially obstetricians and gynecologists and nursing professions, cannot be done without women. At present, the midwives in Beihai Kingdom have little education and low professional quality, which is a safety hazard. You know, women's production is related to the plan of population growth. Therefore, most of the smart girls selected from the knitting sweater training class will be trained to become professional gynecologists and nurses in the future. Of course, this depends on personal interests and specialties. For those girls who don't like to be doctors, Marin will arrange them to learn clothing cutting and design, as well as art and other professions that are very suitable for girls. Some people will also stay and serve as teachers in girls' schools to train more smart women. And if there are very rare scientific research women, Marin will not refuse. On the contrary, they will be especially encouraged and protected. After all, having more scientific researchers is also what Marin expects. And the basis of all this is the basic education and selection of the knitting sweater training class. Marin has long been familiar with this kind of sheep-headed selling dog meat black box operation method. Just like the craftsman school that is very popular in Beihai Kingdom now, it is actually a very popular primary and secondary school in later generations. It's just that it's aimed at the common people and focuses on science. After all, Marin wants to protect the interests of the nobility. However, it does not prevent the children of common people from standing out through science and engineering industries and changing their own destiny. And this knitting training class that sells dog meat under the guise of sheep gives smart women of this era an opportunity to escape poverty. If they become female doctors, nurses, fashion designers, artists or scientific researchers, their treatment will definitely be higher than that of ordinary people, and they will be protected by Marin. At that time, Marin will not only give these powerful women higher salaries, but also deliberately raise their social status to attract more girls to make progress. Chapter 1952 Saleswoman, Logistics and Human-Powered Tricycles. In addition to wanting to train some elite women to become gynecologists, nurses, fashion designers, artists and scientific researchers, Marin will also have an arrangement for those non-elite women, that is, let them become salespersons. The profession of salesperson seems insignificant in later generations, but in this era, it is a technical job. Why? Because salespersons need certain calculation skills, at least, the accounts cannot be calculated incorrectly. This ability, in the era of universal 9-year compulsory education in later generations, as long as the intelligence is not too bad, can basically be competent. But in this era of extremely low literacy, it is a job with a certain technical content. Because most people are illiterate and can't calculate. Fortunately, the European economy is backward now, the degree of commercial circulation is very low, and few salespeople are needed. But because of Marin's various measures, ordinary people in the North Sea Kingdom can not only eat enough, but also have some spare money. Therefore, commercial circulation is more developed than other countries. Although it is not the extremely prosperous circulation in later generations, it can at least reach the level of unified sales and purchase before the reform and opening up of China in later generations. That is, in each town, there are some official stores that sell essential goods such as oil, salt, sauce, vinegar, needles, thread and cloth to the people. Because the stores are opened in the town, people's lives are greatly facilitated. In the past, many necessities often need to be bought in the city. But Europe is vast and sparsely populated, and the density of cities is very low. It often takes hundreds of miles to have a city. Unlike the Ming dynasty, there was a prosperous town every few dozen miles. Therefore, this is very inconvenient for ordinary people. After all, if you walk, it may take more than a day to walk hundreds of miles. Now, Marin has opened the stores of the Beihai Chamber of Commerce under his name in various towns, and unified the goods with a full range of varieties, which greatly facilitates people's lives. This kind of store is very much like the state-owned stores before the reform of China in later generations. Of course, Marin repeatedly ordered the salesperson to correct his service attitude and not to annoy customers. But now, a thing that makes Marin very depressed is in front of him, that is, the store is in urgent need of salespersons. In this era, a salesman who can read and do accounting is generally trained through the 7-year apprenticeship system. Just like other craftsmen, those illiterate teenagers first signed an apprenticeship contract with an established salesman or store owner, and then worked for the store owner without salary for 7 years. The established salesman or store owner who took him in was obliged to teach him to distinguish commodities and do accounting within 7 years. In fact, this simple accounting is enough for the mathematics level of the 2nd or 3rd grade of elementary school. However, in order to learn this, the apprentice needs to work for the master for 7 years, and in 7 years, the elementary school education can be learned thoroughly, and there is still 1 more year. But in this era, knowledge is so valuable. If you want to learn a simple accounting, you have to work for 7 years for nothing. Moreover, there are not many such opportunities, so you need to grab them. Just like Kohler, the first person under Marin who could do accounting, he pestered the Jewish merchants who often went to the countryside to do business, and secretly learned accounting, becoming a talent of this era. Otherwise, with Kohler's thin figure, Marin might not be willing to take him as a follower. In this knitting training class, held by Marin, the little girls will be taught by the assigned nuns to memorize words, the Bible, and simple addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. If the performance is good, but not enough to be selected to go to the girls' school for further training, then you can consider sending them to Beihai store to work as salespersons. As for the original male salespersons, Marin will transfer them to warehousing, logistics, and handling departments. Although it is more difficult, Marin has no choice. There are too few laborers in Beihai country. It is absolutely a huge waste for men to be idle salespersons. Therefore, men either farm and serve as soldiers, or become craftsmen. Want to sit behind the counter and be an easy salesperson? Sorry, Master Ma does not agree. An easy job like a salesperson should be done by women. In this way, a lot of male laborers can be liberated to do a lot of heavy work that women can't do. You can imagine that if there are dozens of salesmen in a town, hundreds of towns in the North Sea Kingdom can be replaced by women, which can liberate tens of thousands or even more male laborers. Whether they are craftsmen or logistics movers, it is better than hanging around behind the counter. After all, there are only 300,000 or 400,000 males in the entire North Sea Kingdom. If 10,000 or 20,000 males are freed up at once, there are too many things they can do. Marin plans to train all the freed male salesmen into logistics and distribution personnel. They are all professional talents who can calculate accounts and keep accounts. It is perfect to use them to form a logistics and distribution group. In addition, Marin is now vigorously building cement slab roads in the North Sea. Once the traffic is fully rolled out, these former male salesmen who can calculate accounts can quickly use the developed road system to easily transport goods to various towns and villages, making life more convenient for people. Don't underestimate logistics and distribution. In the future, because of the large number of express delivery companies such as SF Express, people will not be too convenient to shop. Don't look at Ma Yun so awesome. Without the support of a strong logistics system, the so-called online shopping is just a joke. Of course, Marin didn't expect the people of Beihai to enjoy the fast logistics system of online shopping in the future. After all, the social economy has not developed to that level. Moreover, the technical conditions are not enough. However, it is still possible to develop the logistics system to the state-owned store system before the reform and opening up. Although there are no convenient means of communication such as telegraphs and telephones in the 20th century, the Beihai country is not large and does not need such advanced means of communication. Moreover, Beihai has a developed post station system that can quickly transmit messages. When the scale of the post station system is up, Marin also plans to open a postal system to civilians. In this way, with the cement slabs that extend in all directions, it will be simple and fast to transport all kinds of goods to various towns. In fact, Marin feels that the electric tricycle has made a great contribution to the developed express delivery system in the future. Don't look at the fact that express mail is transported by cars. However, the specific distribution is absolutely inseparable from the electric tricycle. And the takeaway system is also inseparable from the support of electric bicycles. If the delivery guy doesn't have an electric bicycle, although he can ride a motorcycle, it's not cost-effective. After all, the oil price is so high. Therefore, in the developed logistics system of the future, the popularization of electric tricycles and electric bicycles in the distribution and door-to-door delivery links is absolutely very important. Of course, with the current technology, electric vehicles are impossible. However, two-wheeled bicycles and human-powered tricycles that can be pedaled by human power can be made. Needless to say, bicycles make it convenient for people to travel. Once cement slab roads are popularized throughout the country, it will be very convenient to travel between places by bicycle. And human-powered tricycles are also very important for the transportation of small amounts of goods. For example, if you want to deliver a few boxes of goods to a town dozens of miles away, it is not cost-effective to use a four-wheeled carriage. After all, once the carriage moves, the pulling horse needs to be fed. And the food consumed by a horse in a day is enough for 4 or 5 people, which is very costly. If there is a human-powered tricycle, it will play a huge role in the transportation of small amounts of goods over medium and short distances. Moreover, the consumption is also low. After all, even if a person pedals a tricycle, at most he can eat 1 or 2 more bowls of rice, which is much more cost-effective than raising a horse to pull a cart. Of course, if it is a long-distance and large-volume transportation, a four-wheeled carriage is still needed. For the short-distance transportation of small amounts of goods within and between towns, human-powered tricycles will have incomparable huge advantages. Marin clearly remembers that before the emergence of electric tricycles, those small vendors who set up stalls and went to the market basically had a human-powered tricycle. Moreover, before taxis became popular, there were also a lot of human-powered tricycles in the county town to pick up passengers. Therefore, Marin issued an order to develop human-powered tricycles. As long as the research and development is successful, it will greatly promote the circulation of social commodities. And the task was not solved by the mechanical department, but by those watchmakers. Chapter 1953 Rubber Tire. For people of this era, a human-powered tricycle is undoubtedly a sophisticated machine. And the people who are best at tinkering with sophisticated machines in this era are the watchmakers. Leonardo da Vinci learned a few tricks from these watchmakers and tinkered with a mechanical lion in the original history, which was driven by a clockwork. The technical content of a human-powered tricycle is definitely not higher than that mechanical lion. However, Leonardo da Vinci now has a heavier task. He has to take 2 groups of students to develop diesel engines and steam engines, and teach a group of chemical engineering college students. Therefore, although Leonardo da Vinci is the most suitable, Marin still did not ask him to develop a human-powered tricycle. After all, he is already busy. If he asks him to work on a human-powered tricycle again, he will definitely be exhausted. Moreover, Marin was very familiar with human-powered tricycles and bicycles in his previous life. After all, he has both at home. Before the rise of electric vehicles, Marin's family basically used bicycles when traveling. When going out to transport something, except for a large amount of hand tractors, a small amount of items are basically transported by human-powered tricycles. Because he had used bicycles and tricycles for a long time, there were many problems and they had to be repaired many times. Therefore, Marin could remember the structure of bicycles and human-powered tricycles with his eyes closed. Therefore, he did not need a big man like Leonardo da Vinci to come out. As long as an ordinary watchmaker with good craftsmanship could make a human-powered tricycle under his guidance. As for the bicycle, which he was more familiar with, Marin planned to put it aside for the time being because it was not as significant as the human-powered tricycle. Moreover, after making a human-powered tricycle, the bicycle would only be a simple modification, without any difficulty. The only problem was probably the supply of engine oil needed for the chain and the supply of rubber tires. After all, when human-powered tricycles became a popular means of transportation, the consumption of engine oil and rubber tires required for the chain would definitely be relatively large. Although it had not been made yet, Marin never worried about whether rubber tires could be made. He only worried about the consumption of rubber tires. After all, in later generations, it was common for bicycles to change tires, and the consumption of rubber tires was very large. However, the output of natural rubber is very limited nowadays. Although the new natural rubber has been planted, it will take 6 or 7 years before it can be tapped. So, Marin suddenly felt that the planting of natural rubber needs to be expanded. Otherwise, once the human-powered tricycle is developed, the consumption will be amazing. In addition, the production of chain oil must also be increased. Therefore, the pace of oil development must also be accelerated. After all, engine oil is also extracted from the high boiling point residues left after gasoline, diesel and kerosene are extracted from petroleum. In addition, the research and development of wear-resistant tire technology also needs to be put on the agenda. Marin remembered that carbon black was added to the outer tires of automobile tires in later generations, which could increase the wear resistance of tires tenfold. Originally, the life of white rubber tires without carbon black was only 8,000 kilometers. After adding carbon black, the lifespan increased tenfold. Therefore, Marin also needs to order his men to study how to add carbon black powder to the outer tires of white tires. Moreover, the amount of addition needs to be controlled. This requires many attempts. But after knowing the principle, at least you can avoid many detours. In addition, Marin will go all the way and directly adopt the popular radial tires in later generations. In this way, too many detours will be avoided. As long as the research of radial tires with carbon black is successful, and the production of natural rubber is greatly increased, the wheels of vehicles in the North Sea will be dominated by rubber tires in the future. But first of all, the source of rubber must be sufficient. Although Marin knows about synthetic rubber, he does not understand chemistry and does not know how to synthesize rubber. Therefore, he can only choose to plant more natural rubber. In later generations, the largest natural rubber producing areas are Malaysia and Indonesia in Southeast Asia. But Marin knows that the reason why natural rubber is produced in Southeast Asia rather than America is that in the 19th century when the use of natural rubber was discovered, most countries in America were independent, and only Southeast Asia and other places were still European colonies. Therefore, Europeans can only vigorously develop rubber planting in Malaysia and Indonesia in Southeast Asia. In the Americas, it is less promoted. Therefore, it is not that rubber cannot be planted in the Caribbean, but when rubber is promoted, many countries in the Caribbean have become independent. Or, it is because the island is small in size and there is not enough labor, so rubber planting is not promoted. After all, planting natural rubber and tapping rubber are labor-intensive industries that require a large number of workers. At that time, there were many Malays in Southeast Asia, and there were also hard-working Chinese immigrants available, so a large-scale rubber planting industry was developed. Today, although Marin does not have hard-working Chinese workers available. However, it is still possible to plunder tens of thousands of workers from the island of Haiti, which has a population of 1 million, to plant natural rubber. It seems that Haiti in later generations once produced natural rubber. But Marin was very afraid of syphilis on the island of Haiti, so he did not plan to plant rubber on the island of Haiti, but planned to take all the Taino people who were not infected with syphilis away from the island of Haiti. Then, let the remaining syphilis patients on the island fend for themselves. After all these syphilis patients died, Marin would have to wait for a few years before bringing people back to develop the island of Haiti. For this reason, Marin has issued an isolation order isolating all people infected with the syphilis virus, whether they are Europeans or indigenous people. And islands with a large number of syphilis patients will also become temporarily isolated areas. In fact, in addition to the prevalence of syphilis among the Taino people on the island of Haiti, there are also many Taino tribes in the eastern part of the neighboring island of Cuba with syphilis patients. Therefore, while ordering the development of the Guantanamo area, Marin also planned to send troops to clean up the Taino people in the eastern part of Cuba. Once a syphilis carrier is found, he will be isolated and left to fend for himself. The ultimate goal is to eliminate all sources of syphilis. Syphilis is too contagious. Although Marin knew that penicillin could treat syphilis, he believed that it would be better to eliminate the source of syphilis, which would save trouble. The source of syphilis is on Haiti and several nearby islands. Marin planned to take advantage of the opportunity to conquer Haiti to send 4 or 5,000 soldiers and 2,000 eunuchs to inspect the islands in the Caribbean in turn and isolate all syphilis patients. And use lime powder and other methods to completely kill viruses in order to eliminate the source of this evil disease. At the same time, when checking syphilis patients, those Indians who were not infected with syphilis would also be taken away to help Marin plant natural rubber. In this way, it can be regarded as killing two birds with one stone. Not only has the source of syphilis been eliminated, but a large number of labor forces can also be brought in to help Marin grow natural rubber. When rubber tires become popular in the future, there will be no problem of supply difficulties. Of course, in order to prevent the indigenous people from dying from diseases such as smallpox, Marin will first let them all be vaccinated with cowpox, so that they will not be afraid of smallpox in the future. In addition, Marin intends to implement a strict quarantine system and conduct strict health checks on Europeans traveling to America to prevent Europeans with serious diseases from bringing infectious diseases to America and causing the extinction of local people. In this way, he will not lack labor. In order to prevent the indigenous people from having a sense of ownership in their hometown and confronting the colonial authorities, Marin will find a way to take the indigenous people away from their hometown and let them come to other places. In this way, they are unfamiliar with the place and it is not easy for them to make trouble. For example, the Taino people on the island of Haiti will become very honest for a long time after being taken to Cuba. And when they are familiar with the local area, they will have no chance to be dishonest. Because Marin won't give them a chance. Plus, the North Sea Kingdom doesn't treat the natives badly, so as long as they can get by, no one wants to die. Chapter 1954, Europeans, Political Correctness, How Terrible is Syphilis? It is said that after syphilis was introduced to Europe at the end of the 15th century, it lost a great opportunity to control its spread in the early stage because it could not figure out its source for a long time. Then, syphilis was everywhere in Europe. Moreover, it was brought to the Ming dynasty in the east by Portuguese merchant ships. However, it is strange to say. Although syphilis was brought to the Ming dynasty by Portuguese sailors as early as the Zhengde and Jiajing periods. However, syphilis was not too rampant in ancient China during the Ming and Qing dynasties, and there were no terrible legends. It seems that in China, syphilis is also a private disease that is difficult to talk about, but it is rare for people to die of ulceration like Europeans. Therefore, Marin speculated that it is estimated that the Chinese and Indians are both yellow people, and they are more resistant to the syphilis virus. Therefore, in ancient China, syphilis and willow diseases were controlled in the lower body. Unlike European whites, they all have ulcers on their faces. In addition, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, China's etiquette was strict, and syphilis was only spread among those dissolute people, so it did not cause widespread spread throughout society. Europeans have been more dissolute since ancient times, and there is no restraint of etiquette. Therefore, the spread was extremely fast and wide. Of course, the Chinese in later generations also learned from Europeans and Americans to mess around, and AIDS and the like began to spread rapidly. To what extent did syphilis affect Europe later? Marin has seen a piece of information showing that in the early 20th century, 10% of Londoners, 15% of Parisians, and 20% of American recruits suffered from syphilis. At the beginning of the 20th century, the population of London exceeded 6 million, and the population of Paris exceeded 3 million. As for American recruits, it's hard to say. If it was before World War I, the number of American recruits was limited. But if the US military during World War I is counted, the number of troops sent to Europe reached 2 million. Well, in total, there were more than 600,000 syphilis patients in London, more than 400,000 in Paris, and about 400,000 American recruits were syphilis patients, right? This is not surprising. Old American soldiers have always been very lustful. This is just a few big cities or groups. If it is the whole of Europe, the total number is incredible. It is said that Beethoven had syphilis and became deaf, not sure. And Nietzsche, Maupassant, Van Gogh and other big names in the literary and artistic circles seem to have had syphilis. It can be seen that the chaos in the entertainment industry has a long historical tradition, and it cannot be blamed on the artists. After all, the ancestors loved to mess around, let alone their disciples. Of course, Marin doesn't care about those in the literary and artistic circles, nor does he care whether the Chinese have a stronger resistance to syphilis. In this life, he is also a white man, and his resistance to syphilis is obviously very low. Therefore, in order to avoid endangering himself and his descendants, Marin may have to be ruthless and ban syphilis. For this reason, Marin had to temporarily delay the development of the Caribbean region. Moreover, a lot of manpower and material resources will be invested to strictly screen the indigenous people in the Caribbean. Once a syphilis carrier is found, he will be isolated. Although, for the indigenous people in the Caribbean, syphilis may be a slightly more severe skin disease. But as long as it is a skin disease, there are always differences. For example, the skin will be different from that of normal people. Therefore, based on the principle of better to kill by mistake than to let go, Marin decided to isolate all Taino people and nearby Caribbean natives with skin diseases, regardless of whether they have syphilis or not. Then, choose a larger island and drive away the indigenous people suspected of having skin diseases. Moreover, men and women are placed separately on different islands. In this way, even if syphilis is not fatal to these indigenous people, as long as men and women are separated and their possibility of reproduction is cut off, syphilis will not be passed on to future generations. As for whether there will be any gays on the island of pure men and women, that is not Marin's concern. As long as they do not leave the isolated island, Marin will not care. As long as they dare to board the ship and go out to sea, the ship will be sunk, the personnel will be killed, and lime will be sprinkled for disinfection. Doing this is already considered Marin's bodhisattva heart. If it were the colonists of various countries in history, they would have started slaughtering long ago. Marin just isolated them and separated the men and women, which was already a great mercy. Of course, Marin would not give up the development of the Caribbean region because of this. For example, Cuba Island is what Marin needs to develop with all his strength. After all, Cuba Island has good natural conditions and can produce a variety of tropical crops to supply the needs of the North Sea. As for other islands in the Caribbean, Marin thought about it and decided to recruit local natives to form a puppet army to occupy and search each island to clear out any suspected syphilis patients and prevent the spread of the virus. The indigenous people themselves have high resistance to syphilis, and they are responsible for searching and identifying syphilis patients, which greatly improves safety. If it were replaced by European whites, they might get seriously ill and die easily after contact, which would be too scary. Just like Marin sent a group of European white death row prisoners before, wanting them to get syphilis and scare the members of the investigation team with their miserable conditions. As a result, after they got syphilis, they soon died of ulcers all over their bodies, and none of them survived until the arrival of the investigation team. Later, the hundreds of syphilis patients were the hundreds of people with poor health found by the colonial army from the locals, which allowed the syphilis virus to grow. If it were a strong native, it wouldn't be a big deal even if they had syphilis, because, for those strong natives, syphilis is not much different from acne on their bodies. However, this thing can kill Europeans. Marin thought he had good self-control. Even if syphilis spread to Europe, he could control himself and not mess around to avoid contracting syphilis. However, he had no confidence in his children. If his sons were a little more romantic and contracted this, their descendants might be wiped out. Therefore, in order to prevent future generations from being poisoned by syphilis, he could only be ruthless to the indigenous people in the Caribbean. Moreover, it was not too cruel, just isolation, and no direct massacre. Of course, this was just Marin's self-deception. After all, exiling a large number of patients to a deserted island, although not directly massacred, was equivalent to indirect killing. After all, there were not enough resources on the deserted island to feed so many people. In the end, those patients would starve to death. However, this decision was very popular with the Vatican. Because this kind of bloodless behavior is exactly what Christianity advocates. It is precisely because of this cultural tradition that animal protectors appeared in later generations. Even when killing a chicken or a fish, there is a law requiring that the chicken and fish should not die too painfully. Marin sneered at this kind of idiot. If you really want to be kind, you should release the animals. Why do you still want to kill them? Therefore, this seemingly kind behavior is actually too stupid to be evaluated. Therefore, many of the kindness of Christians is actually hypocrisy, which belongs to crocodile tears. Otherwise, European colonists, who are all Christians, would be so cruel and crazy. Although Buddhism is not very good, it is much better than Christianity in terms of doing good deeds and accumulating virtue. At least, they really eat vegetarian food and do not kill animals. Unlike Christians, they eat large pieces of meat while boasting about kindness. They slaughter animals and dismember honest and simple cows into steaks, while shamelessly shouting to protect animals. However, these are not important to Marin. What is important is that holding a butcher knife while shouting for mercy, this is the political correctness of Europeans. No matter how brutal it is, you can just pretend to repent afterwards and that's it. For politician Marin, being able to be politically correct in the European style is enough. Chapter 1955 Military uniforms must be cool. The Indian natives' puppet army is still very useful. Of course, the premise is that you have to select the right soldiers. Just like Qi Jiguang's selection of soldiers, Terra strictly abides by Marin's selection order, and only selects honest and simple natives, not those who are smart and cunning, nor those who are brave, nor those who are timid. In this way, a puppet army composed of honest natives was formed. The reason is simple. Smart and cunning people often don't listen to orders, and they have many small ideas of their own. It is easy to become independent after becoming big. And the bold and brave ones are often prone to hot blood on the battlefield, and they don't listen to orders and do bad things. There is no need to talk about the timid ones, who are prone to collapse and run away. Generally speaking, those who can become leaders among the natives are often either smart and cunning, wise men, or brave heroes. This kind of people have a strong sense of ownership. Once they mix into the puppet army, they may turn the puppet army into their own army. And those honest and timid natives, as long as the rules are set and they are not treated harshly, there will be no problems. The most important thing is that Marin would send clergymen to brainwash these indigenous puppet troops every day. Considering that the honest indigenous people could not understand German and Latin, Marin specially arranged several tailor liars. No, it was the disciples of Archbishop Taylor, who became the teachers of the two indigenous priests who were proficient in German and Latin, and taught them how to brainwash the believers, or spread the glory of the Lord. Of course, they preached in the language of the indigenous people. After all, if you speak German and Latin, the indigenous puppet troops can't understand it. But if it is translated into the indigenous language, then it can be understood. With the help of the disciples of these two tailor liars, the indigenous puppet troops are instilled with the idea of loyalty to the emperor, finally the American King Marin, every day. In addition, Marin is also very good to his soldiers, and the welfare is in place. Therefore, there is no worry that these indigenous puppet soldiers will betray themselves. In fact, in history, the reason why many puppet troops who surrendered to the devils turned around was mainly because the devils looked down on them and treated them as servants. Even in the mine warfare, the puppet soldiers were forced to step on the mines, which made many puppet soldiers rebellious. The opposite is what the Americans did in later generations. For example, there are many Chinese people in the US military, and even Chinese women. The US military fooled the Chinese people every day, using things like the Lighthouse of Freedom and the Cooking of the World to fool them, and welcome them to join the big family of Zio Cooking. Then, all kinds of discrimination against them were not allowed, which moved these second devils of the new century and made them bow down to the American masters. Obviously, Marin's routine is based on the old aesthetics of later generations. Of course, Marin does not need to instill the American idea of Zio cooking to those indigenous puppet soldiers, as long as he tells them that they are welcome to join the warm big family of the civilized world. Moreover, after becoming a puppet soldier of the North Sea Kingdom, not only will they not be discriminated against by the genuine colonists, but they can also live a very comfortable life. At least, it is much better than before it was ruled by the North Sea Kingdom. Life is good, there is no discrimination, plus they are a group of honest people, and they are fooled every day. If they can still rebel, then there is nothing to say. In fact, aren't the young Chinese men and women who joined the US military in later generations pursuing a better life? However, they did not expect that the motherland would develop so fast later, while the old United States would fall into an economic crisis, and there would be a second-rate General Beryl who was hostile to immigrants. Very embarrassing. As long as you are a person, you will yearn for a better life. Not to mention these indigenous people, even those craftsmen from the Ming dynasty, when they heard about serving the barbarians, at first, they were actually very resistant in their hearts. But the Ming dynasty civil officials in charge of them forced them to go, and they could only accept it. But after arriving in America, Marin made the families of those craftsmen who lived in poverty in the Ming dynasty well-fed and clothed, and had meat every meal. Then, those Ming dynasty craftsmen forgot the heavenly kingdom of their hometown. For them, the generous treatment and greatly improved social status are enough to make them forget the past. There is no way, people are profit-seeking animals, and most people find it difficult to refuse better material living conditions. And there are really few great scientists of the older generation like Qian Lao and Deng Lao in the world. Therefore, the later generations move chairs for the old scientists because they are worth it. But most people, like Lao Yang and Lao Li, choose to stay with the Americans who are well treated. Of course, Lao Yang and Lao Li are very ambitious. They won the Nobel Prize together, but they fell out because of who went on stage to receive the award first. A pair of good friends turned against each other from then on. It can be seen how ambitious these two are. Of course, we can't laugh at them. Because, under the influence of American education introduced after the reform and opening up, most young people in later generations will not be greater than Lao Yang and Lao Li. After all, the core of American education is self and selfishness. On the contrary, the traditional education received by Qian Lao and Deng Lao pays great attention to family, country, and the world, and has a stronger sense of responsibility and ideals. This is the traditional education of China. Although Confucianism has various problems, many talented people have emerged under the influence of the idea of family, country, and the world. The Chinese civilization has not been interrupted for thousands of years, which is also closely related to the idea of family, country, and the world, full of responsibility. Otherwise, the inheritance would have been broken long ago after 2 foreign invasions, just like India. However, the indigenous people obviously have no thoughts and national identity. They are still in the primitive age, and only Mexico and the Inca Empire have slave society. Therefore, as long as they are bought with enough benefits and bluffed with education, they can still be easily dealt with. Of course, starting with the treatment of the puppet army, Marin suddenly thought of the problem of military uniforms. What did Marin think of? He thought of a practice of the mustache during World War II, that is, let people design the most handsome military uniforms. Let young people feel a sense of pride after wearing military uniforms. Yes, the most handsome military uniforms. Even in later generations, people have to admit that the uniforms of the nano soldiers are very handsome. This is because, Xiao Huzi once said, military uniforms must be handsome, so that young people will join the army without hesitation. Under the guidance of this idea, Sanddetsi hired big-name designers from Hugo Boss to design very handsome military uniforms for the German army in World War II. This kind of military uniform can be considered fashionable even in the 21st century. Why are there so many fans of Sanddetsi in later generations? Isn't it because of the handsome military uniforms? In the same way, if you want to attract young indigenous people to join the puppet army, handsome military uniforms are also necessary. Therefore, Marin plans to send professional designers to design handsome puppet military uniforms for the indigenous puppet army. However, don't think that it is the kind of fashionable clothes in later generations, and you don't need to copy Sandetzi's military uniforms in World War II. Because, the aesthetics of the indigenous people are different. Yes, don't impose the aesthetics of later generations on the indigenous people of this era. Who are the indigenous people in the Caribbean? Indians. And what is the aesthetics of Indians? Just look at the Indians who survived in later generations. They like to wear headdresses full of feathers, and at the same time, they like to dress themselves up in colorful and coquettish styles. So, don't apply the fashion of later generations to these Indians. If you want them to feel handsome, you must be coquettish. In short, feathers must be all over your head. At the same time, your whole body must also be colorful. This kind of aesthetic that is very vulgar in later generations is very fashionable for Indians in this era. Moreover, it is the top fashion. Anyone who can wear a helmet full of bird feathers and wear colorful clothes will definitely attract the attention of the natives and make them envious. Therefore, the tone of the uniforms of the indigenous puppet army has been set. They must be flashy, colorful, and vulgar, preferably, with some shiny glass ornaments. Only in this way can we attract the indigenous youth to join the army to the greatest extent and die for the colonial cause of the North Sea Kingdom. When the uniforms of the puppet army are so flashy that even the local chiefs are jealous and eager to own one, the design is considered a success. Chapter 1956, Battle of New Dabik Grassland, Part 1, How to Make a Piece of Clothing Look Sexy. Marin suddenly remembered the traditional, cutout outfit of German mercenaries. What is the cutout outfit of German mercenaries? It is a kind of colorful and strange clothes with pockets sewn all over. As for why it is full of pockets, this is not the identity proof of the several bags of disciples of the beggar gang, but to facilitate the financial grabbing during robbery. The more pockets, the more property can be put in. Therefore, there are many places on the German mercenaries that are similar to the cutout sewn bags. When the nine-pocket elder of the beggar gang saw this group of German mercenaries, he would probably worship in a daze. Why? There are dozens of pockets on them, and they are obviously more senior. And when sewing those pockets of property, the mercenaries did not have a uniform style of fabric, and the sewing skills of the big men were very rough. Therefore, this kind of clothing with many pockets, the fabric of the pockets is colorful, all robbed by the mercenaries. Then, the whole outfit naturally looks colorful. And this pit father style just fits the bad taste of the Indian natives. Anyway, they just like the colorful look. So, Marin planned to use a linen coat, and then sew various colored scraps of cloth on the outside to make the clothes colorful and out of place. As for the feathers on the head, Marin thought of a feather duster. Many of the feather dusters in later generations dyed the chicken feathers into various colors, colorful. Marin also planned to do so. He planned to have someone design a hat full of feathers. Then, use various pigments to dye the chicken feathers into colors. In this way, it is in line with the aesthetics of the Indians. Of course, chicken feathers are not necessary. There are also many tropical birds in Cuba. Many of those tropical birds have colorful feathers. If hunters are sent to shoot them down, all the feathers will be used to make feather crowns. The more coquettish, the better, so that the Indian natives and puppet troops can stand out. In this way, more young Indians will willingly join the puppet army. In addition to feather crowns and colorful non-mainstream clothes, some flashing glass ornaments are also indispensable. For the rustic indigenous people, the flashing glass ornaments are definitely very high-end things. Therefore, Marin decided to set up many hanging points on the chest of those colorful clothes, imitating the military dresses of later generations. Of course, it is not to hang medals, but to hang flashing glass ornaments. After hanging glass ornaments, this kind of shiny and flirty flower clothes will definitely become the favorite of the indigenous people. However, Marin is not sure which one the indigenous people like best. So, he decided to follow this idea and let the big tailors design and make hundreds of similar flaunting clothes. Then, send them to the colonies, find someone to wear them, and go to the indigenous people. Finally, according to the feedback from the indigenous people, select the most popular flaunting clothes among the indigenous people as the standard uniforms of the indigenous puppet army. Of course, there is a premise, that is, the cost should not be too high. After all, this is for a large number of indigenous puppet soldiers. If the production is too complicated and the cost is too high, it will not be worth it. When Marin was immersed in designing sexy clothes for the indigenous puppet army, Kohler suddenly knocked on the door of his office in a hurry, looking anxious. "What's wrong? You are so flustered, how can you be so embarrassed?" Marin was a little unhappy that someone was trying to design his ideas. Kohler said anxiously, "Your Majesty, there is an urgent report from Egypt that the Mamluk Sultan Geriger led an army of 70,000 and was defeated by the 60,000 Turkish army led by the Turkish Sultan Selim I in the Dabik grassland in northern Syria. At present, Sultan Geriger has retreated to the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon with his remaining troops and built a defensive position. The latest news is that Sultan Geriger, who was shot and injured, left his first fierce general Adi Jimmy to lead 20,000 remaining soldiers in the Bekaa Valley to block the Turkish army from moving south, and then return to Cairo to recuperate." Marin was shocked and said, "Didn't I provide them with thousands of Rumi guns? Why did they still lose?" Kohler replied, "According to the reports of our intelligence personnel in Egypt, it seems that Sultan Geriger of the Mamluk dynasty and the main general Adimir do not like muskets, but prefer bows and arrows. Therefore, the 7,000 muskets we sold were equipped with the least valued slave soldiers. When the war broke out, the 7,000 slave musketeers were all infantry and failed to arrive at the battlefield in time. But during the retreat, these slave musketeers who were responsible for the rear guard relied on the complex terrain in the Bekaa Valley to block the Turkish army's southward advance." Then, Kohler took out the map, spread it out, and explained it to Marin. "The terrain in Lebanon is complex, mainly consisting of the coastal Lebanon Mountains, the pre-Lebanon Mountains in the east, and the Bekaa Valley between the two north-south mountain ranges. The Bekaa Valley is also the most important plain and agricultural area in Lebanon. The north-south length of this valley is about 150 kilometers, and the width, intelligence personnel estimate that the average width is about 16 kilometers, and in some places it is only a few kilometers wide. When Sultan Caligul retreated, he fled with only more than 14,000 Mamluk cavalrymen. The vassal troops all fled in all directions, and the local Syrian army even surrendered directly to Turkey. It is said that the Syrian governor was killed by a stray bullet from a Turkish musketeer during the charge. Then, without a leader, the Syrian vassal army simply surrendered to the Turks. Afterwards, Sultan Caligul's more than 14,000 cavalrymen met 7,000 slave musketeers who were still rushing north in the Bekaa Valley. These musketeers, relying on the rugged terrain of the Bekaa Valley, blocked the pursuit of the Turkish army. After all, the Turkish army could not display its power in the narrow Bekaa Valley. Slave soldiers are also different from slave soldiers, although most of the Mamluk cavalrymen are also slaves. However, they are cavalry, and most of them come from the Caucasus. The slave musketeers, on the other hand, are mostly Egyptian slaves and have a low status in the Mamluk dynasty. Fortunately, muskets are very suitable for defense. Adimir led more than 20,000 remnants to set up positions in the narrowest part of the southern end of the Bekaa Valley, and arranged the musketeers on the hillsides on both sides of the valley, which made the Turkish army very angry. Because their muskets and artillery could hardly threaten the Egyptian slave musketeers lying on the hillside. But those Egyptian slave musketeers on the hillside could cause a large number of casualties to the densely packed Turkish soldiers in the valley. Then, the Turkish army was blocked in the Bekaa Valley and stagnated. Chapter 1957, Battle of New Dabik Grassland, Part 2. Then, the Turkish army divided into 20,000 troops, and under the guidance of the surrendered Syrian vassal army, they crossed the former Lebanese mountains, arrived in Damascus, and controlled this ancient city. Moreover, they took over the entire Syrian region. Kohler continued to introduce. Turkey controls the whole of Syria. Marin frowned. This is not good news. You know, the Syrian region is one of the few agricultural countries in the Middle East, and later it was one of the few grain exporters in the entire Arab region. Although Ottoman Turkey also occupied the Balkan Peninsula, which produces grain, it was a Christian region. In the Muslim region, there are still very few grain-producing areas on the Anatolian Peninsula. The main reason is that the Anatolian Peninsula is mostly mountainous. Moreover, there is no tradition of developing agriculture. The Syrian region is different. It has a long history and was once the core ruling area of the Umayyad dynasty of the Arab Empire. Although the local climate is not humid, the river resources are abundant and can be used for irrigation. Therefore, the local agriculture is very developed and it is an important grain-producing area of the Mamluk dynasty. Moreover, during the Mamluk dynasty, Saladin also moved the capital to the historic city of Damascus in his later years. Then, the world-famous Damascus scimitar, let alone, everyone has heard of it. Occupying Syria means getting a large granary for Turkey. Moreover, although Damascus is not the capital of the Mamluk dynasty, it is one of the most prosperous commercial cities, which can bring huge economic benefits to the Mamluk dynasty. Moreover, after the Portuguese and the Spanish blocked the Arabian Sea, the Mamluk dynasty opened up the spice trade route on land. And Damascus is precisely the main distribution center for camel caravans on land. The Mamluk dynasty's camel caravans transporting pepper and spices set out from the northern states of India and passed through the Sindh region. Then, they entered the territory of the once hostile and now friendly Persian Safavid dynasty, all the way northwest, and then entered the Mesopotamian region of Iraq. Afterwards, the camel caravan went west along the Mesopotamian region, entered the Syrian region, arrived in Damascus, and gathered again. Then, merchants in Syria or Lebanon would transport the spices to the port of Beirut on the west coast, resell them to Venetian merchants who came to purchase spices, and then ship them back to Italy. Therefore, Turkey's capture of Damascus, a land spice transit station, did greatly damage the economic interests of the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty. After losing Damascus, a 1,000-year-old commercial city, camel caravans for spice trade could no longer take the Syrian route. Even if the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty adjusted the spice transportation route, it would certainly suffer huge losses. After all, changing the trade route easily is not something that can be done overnight. During this period, many problems will emerge. Before the new trade route is opened, the losses of the Mamluk dynasty will definitely be very large. You know, further south of Damascus is the Kingdom of Jordan in later generations. What is Jordan? It is a barren land with 80% of its territory being desert. The only place with a little water is the east bank of the Jordan River bordering the Palestinian region. There are some small rivers in the western mountains, and the vast eastern region is completely a barren desert area. Moreover, in the western part of Jordan, there are the towering Ajlan Mountains, which are difficult to cross. Even if you come from the east and cross the Ajlan Mountains, you will encounter the obstruction of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Damascus in the north is an ancient city with mature commercial routes and trade routes to the Lebanese coast. Therefore, the land spice trade route was set in Damascus before. But now that Syria has been lost, the old trade routes have disappeared in an instant. If you want to open up new trade routes, it will be extremely difficult. Apart from anything else, it would be more troublesome to cross the northeastern region of Jordan in later generations. Because there are deserts there, and there is no oasis along the way. This era is not as convenient as satellite navigation in later generations. In the vast sea of sand, it is easy for people to get lost. If it is a 1,000-year-old ancient road, it is okay. The most feared thing is that the road that has never been opened up can easily make the caravan lose its way. North African merchants crossed the Sahara Desert and headed south along the wells and oases along the way. Camels can't stand walking in the vast sea of sand for too long. The desert in northeastern Jordan is not far away, only a few hundred kilometers. But no one has ever walked there. When opening up a trade route, someone must be in trouble. If the spices of a camel team are lost, it would be fatal. After all, spices are so expensive these days. Or, because the eastern part of Jordan in later generations is all desert, the Mamluk dynasty has not sent anyone to control that part at all, but only sent people to control the mountains in western Jordan. At this time, according to intelligence, the Turks have occupied most of Syria under the guidance of the original Syrian vassal army. However, the Jordanian mountains in the south, which are also under the jurisdiction of the Damascus Governorate, have not yet been controlled by the Turks. The main reason is that the Turks are short of manpower and cannot spare their hands to go south for the time being. It is already good enough to control the land in Syria in later generations. In addition, while Ademir led his army to guard the narrow area at the southern end of the Bekaa Valley, he also sent troops to occupy the Golan Heights at the southern end of the former Lebanon Mountains, which was the area that Syria and Israel later fought fiercely for. The Golan Heights is known as the water tower of the Middle East and is the source of many rivers in the Middle East. In later generations, it is the source of 40% of Israel's fresh water. Therefore, Israel fought hard and was accused by the international community to occupy this place. Moreover, this place has an extremely important strategic position. The Golan Heights is located in the area where Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan meet. As long as it is occupied, the four regions can be attacked at any time. Therefore, until the crossing, Marin did not see Israel willing to return this place to Syria. And Ademir did not intend to occupy this key place. He heard that the Turks had occupied Damascus under the leadership of a traitor. In order to prevent the Turks from sending troops from Damascus and going around behind him, he divided 5,000 troops and stationed in Quneitra to control the Golan Heights. Unexpectedly, this was a stroke of genius, because after controlling the Golan Heights, Ademir completely took the strategic initiative. Damascus is 60 kilometers down the eastern slope of the Golan Heights. After the Turks controlled Damascus, they also organized an offensive to seize the Golan Heights. On the one hand, it solved the threat of Damascus, on the other hand, it also opened up a road to the west to encircle the rear of Ademir's defenders and be able to go south to control Jordan. However, it is too difficult to attack from below the Golan Heights. And there are still many musketeers in the Mamluk defenders, who easily repelled the attack of the Turkish army. In this way, relying on the stroke of genius of controlling the Golan Heights, coupled with the terrain advantage of the Bekaa Valley, Atamir's more than 20,000 troops actually blocked the way of the 60,000 Turkish troops to the south, forming a stalemate. Chapter 1958, Battle of New Dabik Grassland, Part 3. Marin spread out the topographic map of the war zone, looked at it for a long time, and said with a smile, "This Ademir is really capable, he is worthy of being the first general under Sultan Gerigol. The Bekaa Valley and the Golan Heights are the key areas south of Lebanon and Syria. Controlling these places really makes the Turks lose their temper. It seems that he is still a famous general." Koller smiled and shook his head. "Not really, according to the intelligence from Egypt, this Ademir is a fierce general, with average wisdom, not smart, but not stupid. He has always relied on bravery and leading by example in battle. However, this time, he almost died. But because Sultan Gerigol was shot and fell off his horse first, he dismounted to check. As a result, his horse was shot to death, but he escaped. As for choosing to defend in the southern end of the Bekaa Valley and the Golan Heights, it was because when Sultan Gerigol and his more than 10,000 remaining cavalry were unable to escape, they happened to meet 7,000 Egyptian slave musketeers who were still on their way north at the southern end of the Bekaa Valley. Then, they temporarily decided to set up defenses there. As for sending troops to the Golan Heights, it was because they were afraid that the Turks would send troops to cut off his retreat, so they were forced to send troops to occupy the area first." "Oh, so that's it." Marin thought for a while, and suddenly asked, "You said that Sultan Gerigol was shot and returned to Cairo for recuperation. Is it serious? Gerigol is the Sultan of the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt. Marin does not want him to die at this critical moment. Otherwise, the Turks will definitely take advantage of the fire." Koller shook his head, then nodded and said, "It's not too serious, but it's a bit serious." "How do you mean?" Marin was curious about this statement. "It's like this. Sultan Gerigor was shot in the left arm, which was very serious. Even the articular cartilage of his left arm was shattered by lead bullets. In addition to lead poisoning. According to doctors in Cairo, Sultan Gerigor may have to have his left arm amputated. In other words, he will become one-armed in the future." Marin curled his lips and thought, what's wrong with one-armed? Haven't you heard of the legend of the one-armed Sheni? Oh, no one has heard of it. After all, this is a character in a novel hundreds of years later. However, the lack of an arm does not affect Gerigor's being his sultan. The key to the problem is how many direct troops are left in Gerigor. Marin clearly remembers that in the famous game Warcraft in later generations, the green-skinned king of Thrall lost control of the orcs because his most elite green-skinned Cuchulainn was annihilated during the northern expedition, and was eventually seized by the leader of the brown-skinned orcs, Shauho, who was in good condition. And the bald head in later generations also became the commander-in-chief because he had many direct descendants of Huangpu and dominated the army, and expelled the traitor Wang and others. If Gerigol suffers heavy losses among his elite troops in this battle, then given the Mamluk dynasty's tradition of infighting, his life as a sultan will be difficult in the future. Koller shook his head and said, Galagol did suffer heavy losses, but other factions suffered even greater losses. The 14,000-plus cavalrymen that Galagol took back with him were mostly his direct subordinates. According to the reports from the intelligence personnel we sent to the front line, he observed through the telescope that Galagol had the opportunity to take away more troops. However, he deliberately abandoned several other teams and fled with only the 10,000-plus Mamluk cavalrymen around him. Obviously, he may have deliberately abandoned the armies of some other Mamluk nobles. Perhaps he had thought of this a long time ago. According to reports, Galagol brought a total of 50,000 Mamluk cavalry and artillery units from Egypt. Then, the governor of Damascus and some nearby small governorates pieced together 20,000 vassal troops to fight together. But with the death of the governor of Damascus, the 20,000 vassal troops on the right wing collapsed first. Before that, the Mamluk cavalry even gained a certain advantage in the center and left. At that time, the Turkish cavalry had been repelled by the Mamluk cavalry. The Mamluk cavalry even attacked the Turkish artillery position, but was blocked by the iron chains pulled between the Turkish army's artillery. Coupled with the counterattack of the muskets, the Turkish battle formation was not broken. Then, because the governor of Damascus was killed by a musket while leading his troops to charge, the Turkish reserve took the opportunity to rush out from the side and fiercely attack the panicked Damascus vassal army, causing part of the Damascus vassal army to attack the formation in the middle, causing chaos. Marin touched his chin, thought for a while, and said, in other words, the Egyptians almost repelled the Turkish army, but failed because of the collapse of the Syrian vassal army? Koller shook his head, not really. Although the Egyptian Mamluk cavalry was fierce, it failed to break through the Turkish battle formation, but only suppressed the Turkish offensive. Then, with the collapse of the right-wing vassal army, the Egyptian army was defeated. Before that, it can only be said that the Egyptian army was not at a disadvantage. Marin nodded, that's right, the Mamluk cavalry is indeed powerful. After all, they are strictly trained and can be regarded as a weakened version of special forces in this era. Then, Marin seemed to remember something and said in surprise, "Hey. No, that's not right." Marin remembered that the Battle of Dabik Grassland in history took place in early 1516. And now, it's the middle of the year, several months late. Moreover, the reason why this war broke out in history was that Persia was defeated by Turkey first, and the Turks wanted to send troops for the second time to completely destroy Persia. As a result, it caused dissatisfaction and worry to Sultan Geriger, so he led his army north to fight against Turkey, but unfortunately lost. In this time and space, with the help of Marin, Persia was not crippled by the Turks, and Ismail I did not lose his fighting spirit. Logically speaking, in such a war, the Persians, who are still strong, should not sit idly by. Marin raised his doubts, and Kohler found a document from the pile of documents and explained, "It's like this, the Persians did not sit idly by, but because Ismail I suddenly fell seriously ill when he led 60,000 cavalry to Baghdad. He was bedridden, and then, the Persian generals did not dare to act on their own, so they stayed in Baghdad. Then, the Persian army failed to rush to the battlefield in time to participate in the war. Originally, the two countries planned to besiege the Turkish army together. However, according to the pigeon report sent by our spies in Persia, Ismail I was not sick, but assassinated. He was seriously injured, so he was forced to stay in Baghdad to recuperate. The assassin was said to be sent by the Kurds. And the Kurds, supported by the Turkish Sultan Selim I, hired the assassin at a high price. Although they succeeded, they also seriously injured Ismail I, delayed the Persian army, and bought time for the Turks to defeat the Egyptian army. Wait. Aren't the assassins a branch of the Shia Ismaili sect? They are supposed to be from the same sect as Ismaili I, so how could they assassinate Ismaili I, the leader of the Shia sect? Marin was a little confused. In the later game Assassin's Creed, it was introduced that the assassins were a branch of the Shia Ismaili sect. Kohler turned out a bunch of confidential documents and reported, "It is true that the assassins were from the Ismaili sect, but since the eagle's nest in the mountains was destroyed by Hulagu, the chief general of the Mongol expedition to the west, the assassins have declined. Some remnants have gradually become pure assassins who work for money and no longer pay much attention to the issue of sect." This time, the Kurds' offer was high enough to impress an assassin leader. He personally brought 5 disciples, pretended to surrender to Ismail I, and then assassinated him. Fortunately, Ismail I's guards risked their lives to save him, thus saving his life. But Ismail I was seriously injured and bedridden, and could no longer lead his troops westward to join forces with the Egyptian army. Selim I took the opportunity to fight against Galagol alone. Galagol felt that his side had an advantage in terms of military strength, and he wanted to show the power of the Mamluks, so he fought alone. Unexpectedly, he was defeated in the end. With an army of more than 50,000, he only brought back more than 14,000 cavalry from his own army. Originally, his own Mamluk cavalry had more than 30,000. Marin finally realized, "I understand." Originally, Egypt and Persia wanted to unite to defeat Turkey, but the Turkish Sultan Selim I instigated the Kurds to bribe the assassins to assassinate the Persian Shah Ismail I, preventing the Persian army from arriving at the battlefield as scheduled. Then, the selfish Sultan Galagol led his army alone to defeat the Turkish army, but was defeated miserably because of the collapse of his vassal army. Kohler nodded repeatedly, "Yes, this is the cause of the war. Right now, the Egyptians are badly hurt and may not be able to challenge Turkey again. On the Persian side, Ismail I is said to have just recovered from his injuries and the army is still in Baghdad." After hearing this, Marin stroked his forehead and said, "Damn it, the Middle East has changed again." Fortunately, the old man Galagol is not dead, and he has left some people to stop the Turks from going south. Next, Marin knew without thinking that the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty, which had suffered heavy losses, had withdrawn from the Middle East hegemony, and it was good enough to hold on to the basics. In the future, it will only be Turkey and the Persians who will compete. But after obtaining the rich Syrian region, the Turks' strength has greatly increased. I'm afraid that the Persians will also take a defensive stance. Chapter 1959, Marin takes action. Anyway, Sultan Geriger survived. However, considering that his left arm had to be amputated due to lead poisoning, Marin thought about it and decided to send a pigeon to deliver a letter, transit through Italy, notify Egypt, send alcohol extracted from strong liquor, and teach Egyptian court doctors to boil gauze in boiling water to avoid infection and death after amputation. You know, medicine in this era was extremely backward, and no attention was paid to disinfection. Even if Geriger was a sultan, the possibility of infection after amputation was extremely high. Once infected, there was a narrow escape. So Marin quickly asked people to release pigeons to notify the spies in Italy, and then Italy used pigeons to notify the spies in Egypt to prevent Sultan Geriger from accidentally infecting during amputation. But 2 days later, the reply from Egypt had not been sent back, but another bad news was sent back. The Turkish Sultan Selim I deliberately released the 20,000 captured Mamluk Lord cavalry. Originally, after the defeat of more than 50,000 Mamluk cavalry, Geriger could not escape with the remaining 14,000 cavalry of his headquarters. The 20,000 cavalrymen of the Mamluk feudal lords were deliberately abandoned by Galagol. After being abandoned, the 20,000 cavalrymen of the feudal lords were also shameless and surrendered to the Turks without much resistance. Originally, Selim I planned to detain these people. However, the ministers who were familiar with the internal situation of the Mamluk dynasty suggested that he release these cavalrymen belonging to the Mamluk feudal lords. Because they only brought back the cavalrymen of their headquarters when they escaped, so, although the national strength was damaged, Galagol's rule would become more stable in the future. Because no one has the strength to challenge him. If Galagol Sultan is given enough time, he may be able to clean up the domestic opposition and complete the true unification of the Mamluk dynasty. By then, the strength of the Mamluk dynasty may not be very bad. However, Selim I's move shattered Garagar's wishful thinking. After the 20,000 Mamluk cavalrymen belonging to the feudal lords returned, Garagar's strength not only no longer had the upper hand, but would fall behind. Of course, because these cavalrymen belonged to multiple feudal lords, these feudal lords could not form an advantage over Garagar. However, Garagar could not suppress those feudal lords either. In other words, from now on, the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty will be in a period of internal power struggle for a long time, and it will be difficult to pose a threat to Turkey. Then, Turkey can free up its hands to concentrate on dealing with Persia. This is really bad news. Marin rubbed his temples, feeling a headache and depressed. Originally, Marin also planned to suppress the momentum of Turkey's rise through the joint efforts of Persia and Egypt. But now, the Egyptians have collapsed. Although they were not destroyed, they also lost half their lives. As for Persia, although it was not seriously injured in the last war, it lost its sharpness. What is sharpness? Sharpness is morale. Before the war with Turkey, the Persians were proud, just like their Shah Ismail I. Because they had never been defeated, the morale of the Persian army was very high. When facing the enemy, the Persian army maintained strong self-confidence and morale. Even if the strength is not as good as the opponent can be defeated. Just like in the early Tang dynasty, because the Tang army built up extremely strong self-confidence after destroying the Turks, Shi Junmai dared to use 120 cavalry to defeat 10,000 enemy troops. Was Shi Junmai cheating? Or were his 120 cavalrymen each won against 100? Neither, but because the Tang army was invincible in various battles in the early Tang dynasty, the Tang army soldiers became extremely confident. However, their opponents were naturally afraid of the prestige of the Tang army. Therefore, it led to the amazing feat of Shi Junmai's 120 cavalry defeating 10,000 enemies. Similarly, after the last war between Turkey and Persia, although the Persian strength did not lose much, the confidence of the Persian army was severely hit. After that battle, the Persian army, including their monarch Ismail I, no longer believed that they were invincible. On the contrary, Turkey, through two decisive battles with Persia and Egypt, established the same strong confidence as the army in the early Tang dynasty. It can be said that when the Turkish army meets the Persian army in the future, Persia may not even dare to take the initiative to attack. Unless, their own advantage is very large. Otherwise, they will only take a defensive position. This is war. Once a country's army has suffered a disastrous defeat or a great victory, it will have a great impact on the morale of the army. War is never a comparison of numerical strength. Only those unscrupulous arms dealers will unilaterally exaggerate the role of weapons and equipment. In fact, weapons and equipment cannot determine success or failure. Just like when the Eight-Nation Alliance invaded China in the late Qin dynasty, they opened the Qin army's arsenal and found that the Qin army's weapons were very advanced. But because of decades of repeated defeats, and the Qin army had serious problems with discipline and training, they were given machine guns and Krupp cannons, but they still couldn't beat the mixed army of the Eight-Nation Alliance. Not to mention war, even football is the same. Because of frequent losses to the South Korean team, the Chinese national football team in later generations actually suffered from the inexplicable Korea phobia. As soon as they came on the court, facing the South Korean team, they naturally lost their morale and confidence. How could they win? Therefore, although Persia's national strength is still there and Egypt has not collapsed, these two countries are no longer a big threat to Turkey. Because Turkey has already played out its overflowing self-confidence and its combat effectiveness can be extraordinary. Egypt and Persia have long lost their confidence. If they meet the Turks again, the will to fight is very problematic. If Egypt had not lost this battle, the two countries might have joined forces and turned the tables. But in this war, Egypt was defeated too badly. Sultan Garagol and his allies lost more than half of their 30,000 Mamluk cavalry, while Garagol's opponents did not suffer much loss and were sent back as prisoners by the Turks. In the future, it will be difficult for Egypt to threaten Turkey again. However, Marin did not expect Egypt to overthrow Turkey. All Marin asked was that the Turks would not go south to control Jerusalem and Egypt. Needless to say, Jerusalem is a holy city for both Christianity and Islam. If Turkey takes this city, I'm afraid morale and prestige will explode. But Europe will be greatly affected. After all, if the holy city is taken by the Turks, the morale of Europeans will also be affected. As one rises and the other falls, the Turks will become more arrogant. In addition, Egypt is also very important. If Turkey takes this place, it will not only deal a heavy blow to Venice, but also make Spain and Portugal more invincible. Venice is an important chess piece used by Marin to contain Spain and cannot be brought down by Turkey. In addition, with Egypt, a granary that is more important than Syria, Turkey will want to raise troops in the future, just like playing. After all, the agricultural area in the Nile River basin is not covered. Originally in history, Turkey had a super strong ability to raise troops after annexing Egypt. Before annexing Egypt, Turkey could only send out an army of 60,000 to 100,000 people to fight. But after annexing Turkey, when they attacked Europe later, they would easily send out an army of 200,000 or 300,000. According to intelligence, Turkey's population is about 11 million, including several million Slavs in the Balkan Peninsula. However, the Slavs in the Balkan Peninsula cannot provide Turkey with a large number of cavalry, but can only provide Turkey with 10,000 to 20,000 infantry, including musketeers and artillery. Although these European infantry are very important in the war, their number is not large. At this time, the Mamluk dynasty, according to the spies lurking in Cairo, has a population of less than 5 million. Among them, Egypt has 3 million people, the largest population. The second largest population is Syria, with 1.2 million people. Then, there are less than 300,000 people in Lebanon, less than 200,000 people in the Jordanian mountains, more than 100,000 people in Palestine, and many people in Libya and Hijaz. But now, the Syrian region has basically fallen into the hands of Turkey. Most of the Lebanese region has also fallen into the hands of Turkey, and only the southern mountainous area is still under the control of the Mamluk dynasty. In other words, the Turks suddenly have an additional 1.4 to 5 million people. For the 16th century, when population was productivity, it was definitely a significant increase in national strength. Moreover, Arabs are different from Slavic farmers in the Balkans. There are more Arab herders, and many herders are soldiers when they get on horseback and pick up scimitars. Therefore, although Syria and most of Lebanon only bring 1.4 to 5 million people to Turkey, the source of soldiers they may bring is more powerful than the millions of Slavs in the Balkans. For example, the Syrian region alone provided 20,000 vassal troops to the Mamluk dynasty in the previous battle of the Dabik Steppe. Now, all these people belong to Turkey. With the increase of one side and the decrease of the other, Turkey has naturally become much stronger. The Mamluk dynasty of Egypt has lost nearly one-third of its population in Syria, a cash cow with developed agriculture and commerce. In addition, Selim I also insidiously released the captured Mamluk feudal lord cavalry. In the future, there will definitely be a lot of trouble in Egypt. Not to mention being able to fight against Turkey, it is a big problem to be able to hold the current territory. It seems that I have to take action. Marin thought for a long time and finally made up his mind. Chapter 1960, Manor Defense Line. Originally, Marin planned to see the situation. If Egypt was still defeated, he would help Egypt to build defenses on the west bank of the Suez Canal, which was being dug, to resist the offensive of the Turks and keep Egypt. Because of the Suez Canal, the Venetians who were digging the river would also help the Egyptians to hold this line. At that time, it would not be Marin's family that supported Egypt. It would be very difficult for the Turks to conquer Egypt. However, the current situation gave Marin another idea. He could completely rely on the terrain advantages of the Bekaa Valley and the Golan Heights to stop the Turks from moving south in southern Lebanon. The Golan Heights, a key place for conflicts in later generations, left a deep impression on Marin. There were trenches and barbed wire everywhere, and it was also a hot spot for international news in later generations. If the Egyptians could hold the Golan Heights and the southern end of the Bekaa Valley, it would be difficult for the Turkish army to move south to control the Palestinian region. Then, the war would not have to burn near Egypt. The most important thing is that by keeping the Palestinian and Jordanian regions, the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty still has the opportunity to continue the spice route from land. Moreover, war horses and Circassian combat slaves can be introduced from Persia. In this way, the Egyptians will not collapse. If the Turks push the front line to the Sinai Peninsula, everything will be over. Because the land road connecting Persia and India will be completely cut off, and the sea will be jointly blocked by Spain and Portugal. At that time, the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty will have no hope, let alone resist Turkey. Therefore, Marin decided to help the Egyptians consolidate their defenses while the Egyptian army still controlled the Golan Heights and the Bekaa Valley, completely stop the Turks in this place, and keep the territory in the south. Due to the special terrain, it is much simpler and cheaper to fortify the narrow southern end of the Golan Heights and the Bekaa Valley than to fortify in northern Syria. As long as a solid wall and trenches are built at the southern end of the Bekaa Valley, roads are destroyed on the Golan Heights, and the pass is blocked, the Turks' southward march can be blocked. However, Marin doesn't believe that the Egyptians can do it well. Therefore, Marin plans to take action himself and send people to help build the defense line. Marin has a great advantage in building the defense line, because he has cement. With cement, it will be much easier for Marin's people to build fortifications in the narrow area at the southern end of the Bekaa Valley. Moreover, the speed will be very fast. As for the Golan Heights, it is estimated that a lot of explosives will be used to destroy all the roads suitable for attacking from the bottom of the slope. Then, cement will be used to build fortifications at some important passes. In this way, even if the Turks want to conquer this place in the future, it will be extremely difficult. Then, the Egyptians will deploy enough musketeers in these fortifications, and use the Rumi guns of the North Sea Kingdom, which will surely make the Turkish army unable to take care of themselves. The core of this is the construction of fortifications and the introduction of weapons and ammunition. Weapons and ammunition are easy to say, Marin can provide them to Egypt at cost price. But the construction of fortifications. Marin does not intend to let others do it, and decides to send troops to do it himself. After thinking about it, Marin decided to send an advisory group and an engineering team to help and guide the Egyptians to build fortifications in the Bekaa Valley and the Golan Heights to stop the Turks from moving south. At the same time, Marin will also send people to rebuild the port in Haifa as an important port for transporting cement. Haifa is located on the northwest coast of Palestine, and in later generations, Haifa port is also the largest port in Palestine. Haifa port has a long history, but during the European Crusades in the 13th century, the city of Haifa was broken and destroyed by the Crusaders. After that, the port of Haifa became a small coastal fishing village, and it was not until modern times that it was resurrected because of the railway. Now, because the port of Haifa is only a few dozen kilometers away from the Golan Heights and the southern Bekaa Valley, it is convenient for transportation. Therefore, Marin plans to send people to build a dock at the port of Haifa to facilitate the transportation of cement in the future. At that time, the army sent by Marin will transport a large amount of cement to the Golan Heights and the Bekaa Valley to build strong walls and fortifications to block the Turks. Once the walls and fortifications are fully completed, Egypt will no longer need more than 20,000 troops to garrison for a long time. At that time, only a few thousand soldiers would be needed to guard those passes and easily block the attack of the Turkish army. Therefore, for the troops sent this time, fighting is secondary, and the ability to deploy and build fortifications is the most important. After thinking about it, Marin finally remembered a person, Mano, the commander of the engineering corps. Mano and the famous Maginot Line, defense line, in later generations are pronounced a little differently, but the same thing, Mano and Maginot are both proficient in building fortifications. Strictly speaking, Maginot was a general and the minister of the army, while Mano was once a senior craftsman serving the army. More specifically, Mano was once a mason, responsible for building walls. Later, Mano, who was still a small mason, began to serve the German mercenaries, leading the construction team and helping to build fortifications. Then, Mano entered the Bahai National Army. Because of his outstanding professional ability, he was appreciated by Marin and trained to become an important commander of the engineering corps. Whether it is building ordinary houses and walls with cement concrete or building bunkers and turrets, Mano is very good at it. In his hands, the engineering corps built a large number of bunkers and fortifications, which can be said to be experienced. And now, the defeated Egyptian Mamluk dynasty does not need a general who can fight, but professionals who can build solid fortifications for them. Coincidentally, Mano, who was born as a bricklayer, is such a professional. Marin plans to equip Mano with 1,000 engineers with good skills and send them to the Middle East together, landing in the small fishing village of Haifa. Then, go to the Golan Heights and the southern end of the Bekaa Valley by land. Then, there, using cement and other materials shipped by Bahai National, build solid walls and fortifications locally to facilitate the blockage of the Turkish army from going south. In addition to cement, Marin will also send people to transport a large amount of asbestos, mix it with cement, and build asbestos fiber concrete walls. In this way, the wall's ability to resist attacks can be enhanced. After all, the Turks also have artillery. If the wall is not strong enough, it may be blown down. Therefore, at the very least, the wall must be made of fiber concrete instead of just cement. In addition, trenches and traps must be dug outside the wall to increase the safety of the defense line. In fact, the construction of the wall is mainly at the southern end of the Bekaa Valley. After all, the terrain here is relatively flat and more vulnerable to Turkish artillery attacks. Fortunately, Mano's engineering corps can use the local terrain to dig trenches on the hillsides on both sides, and with the asbestos fiber concrete walls, a three-dimensional defense system can be built. As for the defense line on the Golan Heights, it is even simpler. Because it is a highland, it is impossible for the Turks to transport heavy artillery up there. And small artillery is difficult to blast through the fiber concrete wall. At that time, a bastion design will be added to ensure that the Turkish artillery fire can be easily blocked. Marin planned to name this line of defense, Mano Line of Defense. After all, the person in charge of building this line of defense was Mano, the general of the engineering corps under his command. Chapter 1961, Venice invented a glass mirror. After deciding to name this concrete defense line, Mano Line, Marin's heart became uneasy. Because he always thought of the French Maginot Line being bypassed by the German army. Maybe, this Maginot Line will also be bypassed by the Turks. In order to avoid such a major mistake, Marin spread out the map and studied the local terrain. After repeated deliberation, Marin believed that it was unlikely that the Turkish army would bypass the narrow coastal plain. Because the Lebanese coastal plain is too narrow and not suitable for tens of thousands of troops to pass through. And if there are fewer troops passing through, the defense line can also be broken. However, Marin suddenly noticed a problem. It seems that the threat at sea is not small. The Lebanese coastal plain is not suitable for the passage of the army, but the Turks can occupy Haifa by sea, and then attack the back of the defense line through the port of Haifa. Although the defense line is made of concrete and difficult to break, the Turks can change the situation as long as they cut off the food supply of the defense line and besiege it. It seems that the safety of the port of Haifa is very important. Marin tapped the desk with his fingers and began to think about countermeasures. It is impossible to send troops to garrison Haifa by yourself. After all, if there are too few garrisons in Haifa port, it will be useless, and if there are too many, the expenses will be particularly high. As for letting Egypt garrison itself, it is feasible. However, because of this disastrous defeat and the loss of the rich Syrian region, the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty is in financial difficulties, and it is estimated that it will not be able to afford too much money to support too many troops. Therefore, even if the port of Haifa is rebuilt, Egypt will not garrison too many troops. There is no way. Since the spice trade was cut off by Portugal and Spain, the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty has been poor and cannot afford too much military expenses. The problem of money, huh? It seems that the Venetians are very rich. Marin's eyes lit up. Although Venice was seriously injured because of the robbery of the spice trade business, a lean camel is bigger than a horse, and they have a solid foundation. Marin remembered that in the late 16th century, around 1580, Venice's annual fiscal revenue was as high as 18 million ducats. Of course, that was the income after the large-scale influx of American gold and silver into Europe, and gold and silver had already depreciated significantly. In addition, the emergence of glass mirrors has a lot to do with the resurgence of the Venetians. The Venetians also paid attention to the confidentiality of technology and moved all the craftsmen to Murano Island, ensuring that the glass mirror technology had not been leaked for more than 150 years. But Venice's protection measures also have a loophole, that is, Venice only moved the craftsmen who made glass mirrors to Murano Island, but did not move the craftsmen's families there. So, more than 150 years later, around 1666, the French took advantage of the opportunity when the craftsmen left Murano Island to go home and reunite with their families during major festivals, recruited a group of craftsmen at a high price, and stole the secrets of glass mirrors. Then, Venice was in bad luck. Originally, the Venetians could sell a glass mirror for tens of thousands of francs, called livres in this era. The one given to the Queen of France was actually worth 150,000 francs. After the French stole the technology, they began to mass-produce glass mirrors, and the price plummeted to 100 francs per glass mirror. After losing this technology, the Republic of Venice was completely in decline. Then, there was no more chance to come out, until it was destroyed. Now, although Venice has begun to decline. However, the strong family background is still there. In addition, it hopes to turn over with the help of the Suez Canal, so it is still strong. No. According to the original history, glass mirrors should have appeared during this period, right? Marin remembered that the Venetian mirror appeared in the early 16th century. It perfectly solved the problem of the Venetian Republic losing the spice trade, allowing the Venetian Republic to maintain its commercial advantage for a long time, until the French stole the manufacturing technology of glass mirrors, which caused the Venetian Republic to collapse. After all, a mirror sold for 10,000 livres is not too good to sell. Although the livre was severely devalued at that time, it was about 12 livres to 1 pound or 1 gold louis. In other words, a Venetian mirror can be sold for 833.3 pounds, equivalent to 1,666.6 gold coins. And it is said that the French later sold a glass mirror for 100 livres, and there was still a lot of profit. 100 livres is about 16.66 gold coins. But in fact, the cost of a glass mirror coated with tin foil with mercury is definitely not more than 1 gold coin. In other words, even if it is sold for 100 livres, the French will have a profit of more than 10 times. And before, Venice, which monopolized the technology, made a profit. Nima. 1,000 or hundreds of times. Marin was stunned. What kind of profit is this? No wonder the Venetians trapped the craftsmen on Murano Island. No wonder the French tried every means to get the production technology of glass mirrors. Should I make a glass mirror now to make money? Marin began to think. After thinking about it, Marin still didn't dare. Why? He hasn't defeated the French yet, so at this time, he must avoid being high profile. If the French are provoked to bet everything on one throw and mobilize an army of more than 100,000 or 200,000, Marin may have to flee to America with his family. After all, in history, the French were jealous of Venice and their eyes were red. If Marin made a glass mirror too early, he would be the one to be jealous. Stimulated by huge profits, the French might be violent and at all costs. After thinking about it, Marin decided that after defeating the French and establishing his prestige, he would take the opportunity to launch glass mirrors, and then make a lot of money, counting gold coins until his hands cramped. However, things are unpredictable. When Marin was still dreaming of monopolizing the glass mirror business, shocking news came from Venice: the Venetians withdrew from the glass mirror. What? The Venetians have already made glass? Marin opened his mouth in surprise, and the one in his hand fell to the ground and broke. This broken wine glass is like Marin's heart, it is also broken. 1,000 or hundreds of times of huge profits. Just gone. Marin was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. But Marin didn't know that in history, Venetian glass mirrors were actually invented by the Dal Carlo brothers in 1507, and quickly became the most powerful weapon for Venice's resurgence. However, Marin's crossing changed history. Among them, the biggest change Marin made to history was that he once hired a large number of glass craftsmen in Venice to the North Sea Kingdom. That was when Marin had just taken over East Frisia. In order to produce glass products for foreign trade, Marin sent people to Venice many times to recruit glass craftsmen, recruiting hundreds of people in total. It was this action that changed history. Because many craftsmen were recruited from the factory where the Dal Carlo brothers worked, their managers added burdens to the Dal Carlo brothers and made them busier. After all, there were not enough people, so the remaining craftsmen could only be used as 2 people. So the 2 brothers' work intensity increased. In 1507, because of the busy work, they had no time to study glass mirrors as in the original history. But as time went on, a new batch of apprentices, 7-year apprentices, from the glass factory in Venice were brought out, and veteran glass craftsmen like the Dal Carlo brothers had more free time to do something else. Then, this spring, the Dal Carlo brothers finally accidentally developed a mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror. After that, the 2 brothers were immediately regarded as national treasures by the Venetian authorities, and their salaries were greatly increased, but they also lost their freedom. They were restricted to the island of Murano. After several months of preparation, the Venetians finally decided to release the news after making a batch of glass mirrors. At the same time, some wealthy nobles and tycoons were invited to go to Venice to participate in the auction. And Marin, as Europe's top bachelor, naturally received an invitation. Chapter 1962, Making a Fortune in Quiet Places. Marin's heart suddenly had 10,000 alpacas roaring through it. Damn, I was just thinking about using this technology to make a fortune, and you've made it? Marin didn't really understand the history of the mirror. He only knew that it was in the early to mid-16th century, but he didn't know which year it was. How could he know that Venice had made it a long time ago? Otherwise, how could Venice have so much money later and still compete with Turkey for hegemony in the Mediterranean? You know, since Turkey annexed Egypt, it began to occupy the geographical advantage in the eastern Mediterranean and began to attack Venice. And Venice has also fought a war for hegemony with Turkey for nearly 200 years. And these wars were all fought for money. If Venice had lost its core spice trade, it would have no money to fight the Turks. Because of the timely appearance of glass mirrors, Venice's military strength has declined, and even improved. Of course, this is before the French stole the glass mirror technology. After all, the Republic of Venice's annual fiscal revenue has soared from the current 1.65 million ducats to 18 million ducats in 1580. Putting aside the issue of gold and silver devaluation, Venice's income has increased a lot. After all, even if it is a price revolution, the overall price has only increased 5 or 6 times. But Venice's fiscal revenue has increased from the current 1.65 million ducats per year to 18 million in 1580, which is almost 11 times. Obviously, this is almost twice the price increase. In other words, Venice's economic history has greatly increased. And the opportunity is the emergence of glass mirrors. It can be predicted that with glass mirrors, the Venetians will be able to fight a beautiful turnaround this time. Marin has already anticipated the hot sales of glass mirrors. At the beginning, Marin could imagine that the Venetians would definitely ask for a high price and drive up the price of the first batch of glass mirrors. Thinking of the original price of 150,000 francs, livres, for a mirror in history, Marin's heart was very complicated. It can be predicted that with glass mirrors, the resurgence of Venice is unstoppable. Moreover, what Marin envied was that Venice was not afraid of the covetousness of other countries. If Marin dared to take out the glass mirror, the French and German princes might unite and force him to hand over the secret recipe by force. After all, the situation in Germany is complicated. If you are not careful, you will be easily beaten up. Venice's life is much better than Marin's. Because in the Italian region where Venice is located, there is no one who can fight except Venice, including the Papal States. Therefore, even if Venice has an extremely profitable mirror project, it is not worried about being beaten up by the coalition. Because other states in Italy cannot fight. In fact, the Duchy of Milan and the Kingdom of Naples in the Italian region were both quite capable and strong. However, these two powerful states were destroyed by the French, which removed the stumbling block of Venice. In addition, the Cambrai alliance, that was supposed to be formed in 1508 to fight Venice was dissuaded by Marin in this time and space, resulting in Venice's strength not declining much now. Of course, Marin dug a hole and asked Venice to repair the Suez Canal in advance, which also delayed Venice's strength. But even so, because Venice was not beaten by the Cambrai alliance for 7 years, it did not suffer a serious injury, and its foundation was still very strong. Originally, Marin still had doubts about pulling Venice to defend Haifa port together. But when he learned that the glass mirror was born, Marin immediately understood that the Venetians had the financial resources to take care of it. If it was really sold at a sky-high price of 150,000 francs per mirror, equivalent to 25,000 ducat gold coins, only 100 glass mirrors would be sold for 15 million francs, equivalent to 2.5 million gold coins, which was super profitable. Of course, 150,000 francs per mirror is impossible. That should be a special case, a glass mirror with the deluxe version configuration for the queen. For example, the wooden frame is changed to a gold frame, and then a master handmade it. As for the ordinary version, it should be around a few thousand gold coins to 10,000 gold coins. Because the surrounding Italian states cannot be attacked, Austria in the north is separated by the Alps, and France in the west is separated by several Italian states, so there is no threat. Therefore, the Venetians can rest assured that they have mastered the secret technology of mirror manufacturing. Besides, the craftsmen and equipment for making glass mirrors are all on Murano Island. Even if an army breaks through the land fortress of Venice, it cannot steal the technology of glass mirrors. And the North Sea Kingdom, due to its geographical location, cannot be as free and easy as Venice. Because, if you are not careful, you will attract the joint attack of France and German princes. If it is other money-making projects, other German states may not unite to deal with him. But if it is a project like glass mirrors that can clearly make 1,000 or hundreds of times the profit, it would be strange if those generally poor German princes were not jealous and crazy. Just like Marin's current main food benefit, it is only a few times the increase in production, that is, a few times the profit. Although it makes people jealous, it does not make people lose their minds. However, for a Venetian glass mirror, one mirror can earn hundreds of gold coins, and the profit is hundreds of times higher. It is more profitable than selling drugs in later generations, and more frightening than selling arms. This kind of profit margin will obviously drive people crazy. Therefore, the Venetians are not willing to do the glass mirror business, and Marin dare not do it. However, now the Venetians have taken the lead and made the glass mirror. While Marin was upset, he also found an opportunity. What opportunity did Marin find? The opportunity to fish in troubled waters. Yes, Marin's exclusive glass mirror is very dangerous in the poor German region, but what if Venice stands in front to help attract firepower? Thinking of this, Marin's eyes lit up. The Venetians have just made the glass mirror, so the price must be very high. At the same time, the eyes of all Europe will be attracted by the Venetians. Then, Marin will have a chance to do it. At that time, Marin will quietly have people produce a batch of mirrors and secretly sell them at a high price. In this way, no one knew that Marin had mastered the technology of glass mirrors, but Marin made a fortune quietly. Of course, in order to have enough cover, Marin decided to take over the agency sales rights of Venetian glass mirrors in the German region. Then, he quietly sold the glass mirrors, and no one would doubt it. At that time, Marin, who was originally the agent of Venetian glass mirrors, quietly took out a batch of glass mirrors and mixed them with the agent's goods for sale. Who knows? You know, in this era, information exchange is not smooth. It is difficult for the Venetians to know whether Marin sold 100 mirrors or 200 mirrors. They only know how much they have sold to Marin, but not the actual sales volume of Marin in the early Qing dynasty. At that time, with the cover of Venetian glass mirrors, Marin will be able to produce and sell glass mirrors by himself and make huge profits. Therefore, in order to take over the agency sales rights of glass mirrors, Marin specially brought a large team, under the protection of hundreds of cavalry, to Venice in the south, in an attempt to take over the agency sales rights of Venetian glass mirrors in the German region, and to cover his own production and sales of glass mirrors. By then, the Venetians would not know that while they were making huge profits and attracting the attention of all of Europe, there was a wretched Marin hiding behind them, quietly making a fortune. Chapter 1963 Actively acting as a trustee. Since he wanted to make a fortune following the Venetians, Marin naturally needed to master the style of Venetian mirrors and conduct all-round copycats. In this way, others would think that it was a glass mirror produced in Venice, and would not suspect the North Sea Kingdom. Therefore, the first step of Marin's plan to make money was to obtain the agency sales rights of Venetian glass mirrors. Then, imitate the Venetian glass mirrors, quietly sell them, and make huge profits. As for the price, there was no need for Marin to hype it up, the Venetian profiteers would do it themselves. And what Marin needed to do was to follow them and make a fortune quietly. Therefore, after Marin received the invitation letter from Venice, he set off southward to Venice to attend the auction. The auction in Venice was held at the Doge's Palace in Venice on July 10, 1516. Because Venice had very high expectations for glass mirrors, the people invited to the auction were all the top nobles in Europe, mostly royal families, and the worst were dukes and counts. Moreover, the poor counts were not invited, only those who were very rich. In this way, the number of invited people is only more than 100 people in total, and the hall of the Doge's Palace can accommodate them. Of course, other countries and nobles did not know what the auction was about, so they did not pay much attention to it. For example, the royal families of France, Spain and England only sent ordinary diplomatic envoys to represent the royal family to participate, which was also a face for Venice. There were almost no monarchs who came in person like Marin. On the other hand, some dukes and marquises from the principalities came to Italy. After all, the whole of Italy basically has business dealings with Venice. Venice is a golden thigh. People who want to make money are still willing to interact with Venice. In this way, Marin's status is actually the highest among the guests. The governor of Venice, Loredan, personally entertained Marin. After all, Marin now has a crown of King of America on his head. He is a standard head of a country, which is not comparable to ordinary princes. Even Venice, although it considers itself a sovereign state, is generally considered to be a powerful principality in the Italian region. Naturally, it is at the same level as the princes without complete sovereignty, such as the Grand Duchy of the North Sea of Marin. Therefore, after Marin arrived, Governor Loredan also gave face to accompany and entertain him for a whole day. Facing Marin, Governor Loredan boasted with a face that Venice has ushered in a new hope of rising again. Marin found it funny, but he didn't point it out. After all, what he said was not wrong. Relying on glass mirrors, the Venetians fought a great turnaround and continued to be a European power. After losing the economic pillar of the spice trade, they quickly returned to the ranks of the wealthy countries in Europe. In fact, Venice was basically supported by the huge profits of glass mirrors in the nearly 200 years of war for hegemony in the eastern Mediterranean with Turkey. At the beginning of the 16th century, an ordinary silver-framed glass mirror was sold for as high as £8,000, calculated according to the later pound, which was 1 pound equals 2 gold coins, cheaper than the current pound, equivalent to 16,000 gold coins. The mirror given to the French Queen Medici was inlaid with a lot of expensive jewels, so it was worth 150,000 livres, or about 25,000 gold coins. In other words, Venice could earn tens of thousands of gold coins from an ordinary glass mirror. If 100 mirrors were sold, it would be worth hundreds of thousands of gold coins. No wonder Venice's fiscal revenue reached 18 million ducats in 1580. As long as more than 1,000 mirrors were sold, this amount could be earned. Marin's saliva almost flowed out, so he had to wipe the corners of his mouth with a napkin to avoid embarrassment. On the morning of July 10, the auction was held on time at the Doge's Palace in Venice. Although Marin was also a king with a noble status, the French envoys and the Spanish envoys also came on behalf of their own kings and could not be treated with disrespect. Therefore, Marin could only sit next to several powerful envoys. Fortunately, he belonged to the first row. The first row was basically composed of monarchs or envoys of monarchs. The second row at the back was the position of the princes of independent vassal states or their representatives. At the back, there were the dukes and counts or their representatives who had no autonomy. The hierarchy was clear. Because the items were too valuable, the Doge of Venice replaced the auctioneer this time and went on stage to auction personally. Dear distinguished guests, today, I want to recommend a groundbreaking product to you. This product is unheard of by everyone, and only we have it in Venice. Our great craftsmen, the Dal Carlo brothers, after years of dedicated research, actually they came up with it by accident, finally produced an incredible and wonderful product, glass mirrors. After saying that, Doge Loredan waved his hand, and the messengers untied the silk gauze covering the glass mirrors on the stage, revealing the true appearance of the glass mirrors. Please come forward and see how this glass mirror works. Looking at Loredan's smug look, Marin felt funny. Isn't it just a glass mirror? Any $2 mirror in my later life is much better than this one. This is not bragging. According to later generations, this mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror is not bright enough because the tin foil has insufficient reflective ability. According to later generations, a 25-watt light bulb can only reflect 16 watts of light with a Venetian mirror. In other words, its reflective efficiency is only 60% to 70%, which is much worse than the mirrors of later generations. However, compared with the bronze mirrors of this era, this is indeed very impressive. As expected, as Loredan expected, the envoys from various countries who came to watch were shocked and they saw themselves in the mirror. Especially the showy French envoy Baron Hunter, who came to pick up the mirror and carefully look at his beautiful face. Of course, he is indeed handsome and is also a prince in the eyes of the ladies in Paris. Moreover, the French, both men and women, attach great importance to appearance. To put it nicely, it is called romance, and to put it bluntly, it is just conceited. Seeing the French envoy's performance, Governor Loredan clenched his fists fiercely. There is a play. In fact, Governor Loredan's feeling was right. The French do pursue mirrors very much, and the reason why France sent people to steal the secret recipe of mirrors in later generations is also because France has too much demand for glass mirrors. King François I of France loved mirrors very much and once bought more than a dozen Venetian glass mirrors in 1 year. At that time, the price of a glass mirror was £8,000 per mirror, which was 16,000 ducats per mirror. More than a dozen Venetian glass mirrors, with a total price of more than 200,000 gold coins, actually triggered a financial crisis in France. Everyone's reaction was already very shocking, and Marin wanted to make a fortune from it in the future. So, he cooperated very well and acted as a stooge. Oh my God! Such a clear mirror. This. How on earth did this happen? Is this a gift from God? Marin shouted with an exaggerated expression. Then, other people participating in the auction were all black MMP, you praised this thing so much, how can we lower the price next? And Governor Loredan looked at the scene with satisfaction. The effect is really good. Well, that Marin is really a good stooge. Chapter 1964 Exclusive Sales Rights. Governor Loredan saw this and took the opportunity to explain, boast, this kind of glass mirror is made by our two masters, the Dal Carlo brothers, with extremely sophisticated craftsmanship and 9,981 processes. It is extremely difficult to produce this kind of mirror. It takes up to 1 month to produce one mirror. Marin couldn't help but roll his eyes, damn. Who are you kidding? 9,981 processes. Isn't it just sticking tin foil on and applying mercury? However, it is not nonsense to say that it takes a month to produce a mirror. After all, the reaction of tin amalgam does take a month. But Marin also knew that this kind of glass mirror, especially the newly produced one, is actually very toxic because the mercury component has not evaporated completely, which is even more terrible than the formaldehyde used in later decoration. Therefore, although Marin praised and exclaimed hard, he just didn't get too close, but stayed away to help brag. Look at this glass mirror, it's so bright, and, so bright. Marin suddenly couldn't think of any words to praise the glass mirror. In fact, he didn't think there was anything to praise. Because, he was used to seeing glass mirrors in later generations, and felt that this kind of mirror was too low level, and it was also poisonous. However, others didn't notice that he was a little short of words when praising things. Because they were all stunned by the clear picture in the mirror. Those who can get to a high position are not fools. They know very well that they are big men, and they may not necessarily value this kind of mirror. However, those ladies will definitely be crazy about this extremely clear glass mirror. Marin also knows this, so he deliberately said loudly, such a clear and good mirror, if I buy one and give it to my dear Queen Angela, she will be very happy. Maybe she will take the initiative to kiss it. This is very explicit and shameless. However, everyone agrees. Why? They also felt that if they could bring back a mirror like this, their wives would be so happy. But the problem is the price. Thinking of this, the other guests present all felt nervous, and then looked at Marin with resentment. You idiot, why did you say that? Doesn't this give the Venetians a chance to raise the price? Look, Governor Loredan took advantage of the situation and bewitched, that's right, Your Majesty Marin. If you bring back a mirror like this and give it to Queen Angela, Her Majesty the Queen will definitely feel very happy. At this time, Marin suddenly said seriously, so, Gul'dan. No, it's Loredan. Governor, how much does a mirror like this cost? And how much is the price? Governor Loredan's eyes flashed, and he looked around and said, the two masters have superb craftsmanship. Masters like them can only make one mirror each month. Then Venice can only produce 24 mirrors a year. Marin asked. Governor Loredan was stunned for a moment, then his brain turned quickly and he said, that's not the case. At present, the two masters do have only this much output. However, there are many glass craftsmen with superb skills on our Murano island in Venice. We plan to let a group of craftsmen learn from the two masters. In this way, there will be dozens or hundreds of masters who can produce mirrors together. In this way, the annual output will be able to reach hundreds or even thousands of mirrors in the future. In fact, the production process of mercury-plated tin foil glass mirrors is very simple, that is, to stick the tin foil that has been hammered very flat on the glass with mercury, and then wait for a month. It is said that it takes a month to produce a glass mirror, but a craftsman can not only focus on making one mirror in a month, but can make several or even dozens of mirrors at the same time. Therefore, the output can be increased. However, the Venetians are professional profiteers and are well aware of the routine of scarcity makes things valuable. Therefore, the Venetians deliberately exaggerated the difficulty of making glass mirrors and then controlled the output. In this way, the price of glass mirrors can be sold at a very high price. Only a few hundred mirrors are produced in a year. Other guests attending the auction were shocked. Then, they realized that they might be slaughtered. Sure enough, after the auction officially started, Governor Lorden told everyone, with a face full of embarrassment, considering that glass mirrors are too difficult to manufacture, and the production is very small. Therefore, the starting price is 10,000 ducat gold coins, which is the production cost of the two masters. Marin listened to him and wanted to take off his size 44 shoes and throw them in the face of this old man. Do you still have any shame? It obviously costs no more than 1 gold coin, but it becomes 10,000 gold coins in your mouth. However, as a professional shill, Marin deliberately exclaimed, "Oh. So that's it." Then, Marin took the initiative to act as a babysitter at the auction, frequently raising his hand and competing with others. "The first glass mirror is mine. I want to dedicate it to my queen," Marin shouted, with a face like a nouveau riche, full of the smell of money. Then, after a fierce bloodbath, Marin finally got the first glass mirror at a price of 18,000 ducats. Then, pretending to be happy, he held the first glass mirror in his arms and took it back to his seat. The subsequent auctions naturally started at 18,000 ducats. Then, the next few were even sold at a price of 20,000 gold coins. In this way, the 5 mirrors put up for auction in Venice were almost sold at a high price of 100,000 gold coins. Governor Lorden almost laughed his mouth crooked, it was too damn profitable. If Venice sells 1,000 glass mirrors a year in the future, wouldn't it make 20 million gold coins? Thinking of this, the smile on Governor Lorden's face could not stop. But after the auction, Marin suddenly made a request, "Governor Lorden, I want the agency sales rights of the German region of glass mirrors." Agency sales? Governor Lorden was stunned. "Yes, exclusive agency sales," Marin emphasized. Governor Lorden hesitated and said, "I'm afraid I can't make a decision alone. I need to hold a meeting to discuss before I can reply to you." Then, Governor Lorden hurriedly summoned the councillors of the Republic of Venice to the governor's palace for a meeting. After a whole day of discussion, the Venetian high-level officials believed that Marin was indeed a friend of the Venetians and he was a perfect shill this time. Therefore, cooperation is certain. However, the exclusive agency sales rights of the entire German region are a bit too much. So, the two sides started bargaining. In order to get the exclusive agency rights, Marin was even willing to take the goods at 90% of the retail price. In other words, his profit was only 10%. And considering the ridiculous transportation costs of this era, his profit is almost very low. After all, in addition to the expensive transportation costs, Marin also needs to promote and hire people to sell in various parts of Germany, which is very expensive. Thanks to the high price of glass mirrors, a 10% profit is only about 2,000 gold coins. Even if the cost is high, it will only be 1,000 gold coins at most. At that time, there will still be a profit of several hundred gold coins. However, the Venetians believe that the southern German countries, including Austria, are close to Venice and can be reached by crossing the Alps. There is no need for Marin to make the profit from the agency sales of these southern German states. Therefore, the top leaders of Venice finally decided to give Marin the exclusive agency sales rights of Venetian glass mirrors in northern Germany. The Venetians will be responsible for sales in the southern German states. In this way, Marin was given face and the Venetians did not delay the money they made from the nearby southern German states. Of course, the exclusive agency sales rights of the American kingdom far overseas must also belong to Marin. There are also Japan, Ryukyu, and other places in the Far East under Marin's name. Although the goal was not fully achieved, Marin was not dissatisfied. Because his request for exclusive agency sales rights was just a cover, not the real purpose. Then, Marin made his own request. He asked not to disclose the number of Venetian glass mirrors he was selling as an agent. As for the reason, Marin lied that he was afraid that other German princes would be jealous after knowing it. The Venetians also knew that Marin's position among the German princes was awkward, and they actually believed his lies. At the same time, Marin also proposed that, except for northern Germany, if nobles and merchants from other regions took the initiative to buy from him, Venice should not be dissatisfied. The Venetians thought, "I will give you 90% of the selling price, can you still lower the price to compete with Venice? Unless, you don't want to make money." So, Venice agreed to Marin's meaningless request and wrote it in the agency contract. Great, I finally got the agency rights. Marin waved his fist excitedly. With an agency contract with an undisclosed number as a cover, Marin can ship privately and make a lot of money quietly behind the Venetians. Chapter 1965, Fighting for the Glass Mirror. Seeing Marin looking like he had gotten a great deal, the Spanish envoy González was very surprised. You know, Marin bought the goods at 90% of the market price, which was almost equal to not making any money. God knows why Marin was so happy. Because Spain and the North Sea Kingdom had a good relationship, González asked curiously, "Your Majesty Marin, you bought the goods at a high price, but the profit is not high, why are you so happy?" Marin choked immediately, "Yes, why is he so happy? This is unreasonable." Marin rolled his eyes, and then explained to González, sincerely, it's like this, I occupied a small island in the Far East and built a county, and paid tribute to the Ming Empire in the East. You said, if I offer a mirror like this in the name of a vassal, will the emperor of the Ming Empire be very happy? If I am happy, will he be willing to reward me with a lot of silk and porcelain? Marin did not disclose that he could freely purchase in the Ming dynasty, but just said that he had obtained the qualification of tribute trade so as not to stimulate other countries, especially Portugal. Gonzalez understood in seconds. I understand, this magical glass mirror, the emperor of the Ming Empire must like it very much. At that time, according to the customs of the East, the return gift must be very generous. Your Majesty is really smart. Unlike the original history of not understanding the Ming dynasty, because Spain participated in the Indian trade in this time and space, occupied the Spice Islands, and had many contacts with the Ming dynasty vassal states in Southeast Asia, so the Spaniards also knew what tribute trade was. In short, it is a matter of you offering 1 tael of gold, and the Ming Empire will return 2 taels of gold. As a result, the Spaniards now plan to build a country based on the Spice Islands, and then learn from Marin to pay tribute to the Ming dynasty. However, the Spaniards don't know that Marin has secretly bribed ministers in the Ming dynasty and spread the news. The core of the news is that except for the North Sea Kingdom, there is no good thing in the West, they are all pirates. Therefore, it is still very difficult for the Spaniards to learn from the North Sea Kingdom to pay tribute successfully. Because, first of all, the Ming dynasty people look down on the barbarians, and Marin, the sinister man, is behind the scenes. Historically, the Ming dynasty people can't tell the difference between Spain and Portugal, both of which are called Frangi. This time, Marin also intends to mislead the Ming dynasty, making them mistakenly believe that Spain is Portugal and not give them the opportunity to pay tribute. However, the Spaniards obviously don't know that Marin has been plotting against them behind their backs, and they are still dreaming of learning from Marin to pay tribute successfully. After Marin's statement spread, the Portuguese who learned the news were immediately furious. Why? Because the Portuguese really planned to use a rare item to please the young emperor of the Ming dynasty in exchange for the forgiveness and recognition of the Ming dynasty. Obviously, the glass mirror would be a good commodity that could win the favor of the young emperor of the Ming dynasty. However, this time, because the Portuguese envoys were not well prepared and hesitant, they did not get any of the 5 mirrors. If the North Sea Kingdom took the glass mirror as a tribute first, Portugal would have little chance. Therefore, when the Portuguese envoy José heard about Marin's plan, his face changed drastically. So José immediately sent a pigeon to the mainland, asking the mainland to authorize him to buy a glass mirror from the other 4 at a high price, and then, before the North Sea Kingdom, present the glass mirror to the emperor of the Ming dynasty. In this way, the emperor who was said to like novel things and was a bit naughty might be happy and allow the Portuguese to pay tribute and trade. Unlike now, they can only be pirates. However, José did not know that the Portuguese fleet had been defeated at this time. And Gama, the great hero who discovered India, also fled back to Malacca in a panic and recuperated in Malacca. Because after Gama was defeated in Hong Kong Island, he vomited a lot of blood and was so angry that he fell seriously ill and could only go to Malacca to recuperate. Moreover, after losing so many warships, Gama didn't know how to explain it. He was almost made a count. Now this defeat has made his dream of becoming a count almost hopeless. A few days later, José, who finally got the approval, stopped the wealthy French envoy and asked for a high price to buy a glass mirror. The French are very rich and face-conscious, so they buy 2 mirrors. José, the Portuguese envoy, offered a sky-high price of more than 30,000 gold coins to get a mirror from the French. Next, it's a matter of comparing whose glass mirror will be delivered to the Ming dynasty first. However, Marin knew very well that the Portuguese could not get ahead. Why? If they took the normal route, it would take at least 10 months for the Portuguese to transport the glass mirror to the Far East. If the North Sea Kingdom took the Pacific route, it would only take about 5 months, including the time to cross the Pacific, which was half the time of the Portuguese. Therefore, no matter how the Portuguese tried, they would not be faster than Marin. After all, the huge difference of 4 or 5 months is difficult to make up. What's more, it takes a lot of time for the Portuguese to transport the glass mirrors they bought from the French at a high price back to their homeland. Therefore, before leaving Venice, Marin looked at the Portuguese with pity. Are you competing with me in time? Are you kidding? Since the invention of the upper edge gaff sail, the time from the eastern Atlantic to the eastern coast of North America has been shortened from 2 or 3 months to more than 1 month. Even if you count the time to go south to the Caribbean Sea, it only adds up to more than 2 months. There is no way, the upper edge gaff sail is too good for running north-south routes, and it ignores the headwind at all, and it runs very fast even if it is against the wind. In addition, it only takes 2 or 3 months to cross the Pacific Ocean, and it definitely does not exceed half a year in total, usually more than 5 months. The Portuguese still use old-fashioned sails, and it takes more than 10 months from their homeland to Daming at the fastest, which is really incomparable. Before leaving Venice, Marin greeted the Portuguese envoy José with a triumphant smile and openly provoked them, agreeing that the North Sea Kingdom would compete with the Portuguese to see who would first send the glass mirror to the Ming dynasty as a tribute. Looking at the triumphant Marin, the Portuguese envoy José was so angry that he gnashed his teeth. Humph! Do you really think that my great Portuguese are vegetarians? You wait. So, when Marin left Venice and headed north to return home, José also sent a secret letter by pigeon, strongly suggesting that the mainland send a fleet to the Cape Verde Islands and the Cape of Good Hope to intercept the North Sea Kingdom's transport ships by all means. For no other reason, it was to stop the North Sea Kingdom and prevent it from presenting the glass mirror to the young and playful emperor of the Ming Empire before Portugal. However, the Portuguese did not know at all that Marin contacted the Ming dynasty and did not take the Cape of Good Hope route at all, but quietly took the Pacific route. However, in order to paralyze the Portuguese, Marin still decided to send a few ships to take the Cape of Good Hope route. Then, they were deliberately detained and delayed by the Portuguese to paralyze them. Then, when the Portuguese were proud to take the lead in sending the glass mirror to the Far East, they would find that the North Sea Kingdom had already presented the glass mirror. Chapter 1966, Boiling Urea into Ammonia to Make a Silver Mirror. Some people may wonder, wasn't Portugal at war with the Ming dynasty? Would offering a glass mirror be useful? It really was useful. Because the Ming dynasty emperor at that time was Zhengde. Although Zhengde was smart, he was also very mischievous. Otherwise, in history, he would not have been so mischievous as to ask Wang Shoren to release Prince Ning and let him catch Prince Ning again. This was simply treating military and national affairs as a child's play. Zhengde loved to play too much, so a new thing like a glass mirror would definitely win his favor. If the Portuguese could be the first to offer a glass mirror and bribe the 8 tigers around Zhengde to help speak, maybe Zhengde would not care about such a trivial matter as fighting a war. The Portuguese were not stupid. They also inquired about the virtues of the Ming dynasty emperors and knew that Zhengde loved to make trouble, so they also had their own ideas and judgments. Originally in history, the Portuguese used various bribery methods to successfully obtain the right to land and reside in Macau, becoming the only European country in Europe at that time that could do business in the Ming dynasty. But unfortunately, in this time and space, the Portuguese met a time traveler named Marin who was more familiar with the Ming dynasty than they were. Marin was a Chinese in his previous life, and he was also a top student in the history department. How could he not know more about Zhengde, the emperor who loved to make trouble, than the Portuguese? Therefore, Marin would definitely rush to present the glass mirror to the Portuguese, and then, when the Portuguese presented this thing again, Zhengde's novelty would have long passed, and it would be useless to present the glass mirror again. After all, what Zhengde likes is novelty. Once the novelty is gone, it will be meaningless. Unfortunately, the North Sea Kingdom was able to send the glass mirror to the Ming dynasty a few months before the Portuguese. When Zhengde got the glass mirror for the first time, he would definitely be very rare. However, after playing with it for a few months, even if it was rare at the beginning, he would get tired of it. At this time, if the Portuguese presented the treasure again, it would not have any novel effect. However, how to explain why he was able to send the glass mirror up a few months in advance? On the way back to his homeland, Marin came up with a reasonable explanation. He had sent people to send the glass mirror along the old Silk Road by land. Unlike the sea route, the land route does not require a long detour, and can take a relatively straight route. If you are in a hurry, you can indeed arrive earlier. Moreover, the reasonable explanation that Marin intends to give is that after he left Venice, he hired a Venetian ship to send the glass mirror to Egypt, and then rented a camel team from Egypt to cross the desert through Persia, and then rushed from the western regions to India, and then shipped it from India to Southeast Asia by merchant ship. In this way, it must be much faster than the Portuguese fleet to bypass the entire African continent. After all, it is just a glass mirror, and it is indeed reasonable to transport it quickly by land. But in fact, Marin brought the mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror that he bought with 18,000 gold coins back to his homeland. Because of the toxicity of mercury on this glass mirror, Marin did not regard this expensive glass mirror as a treasure at all. Instead, he directly used a natural sponge to pad it, put it in a beautiful wooden box, and took it back to his homeland by his men. As Marin expected, Angela fell in love with this mirror after seeing it. After all, women love beauty. Although Angela is over 30 years old, she also loves beauty. After getting this glass mirror, Angela took it for herself as if she had obtained a rare treasure and did not let others touch it. Felice, Angela's sister, wanted to peek, but was rejected by Angela without hesitation. So Felice kept muttering, "You even shared your husband with me, why can't you share the glass mirror?" Later, Marin even saw Angela hugging the mirror when she slept. Then, Marin was scared. Marin knew that this mirror had been produced for only 2 or 3 months, and the mercury component had not yet evaporated. If you use it occasionally for taking a photo, it's fine, but if you hold it while sleeping, it's absolutely a death wish. However, Marin can't publicly publicize the toxicity of the mercury-coated tin foil glass mirror. Otherwise, he won't be able to make a lot of money with this kind of glass mirror in the future. Therefore, Marin secretly told Angela that this mirror is poisonous, and the poison gas will not be completely dissipated for more than a year. Angela was immediately frightened, but she was extremely disappointed that she could no longer use such a clear glass mirror. In addition, other women in the North Sea Kingdom are also very concerned about this glass mirror. For example, Marin's cheap mother, Lady Mary, also likes this glass mirror very much, and often comes to take a look at it. As a daughter-in-law, Angela can't stop it. What can I do? Women love beauty to such an extent. Don't want to die. Marin was very worried. In response to Marin's doubts, Angela told him seriously that for women, beauty is the second life. Marin had to express his admiration, but for the safety of his relatives, he had to find a way. How to do it? It must be safe and satisfy women's natural love of beauty. Marin thought about it and finally felt that he could only use that method. There is no other way, I can only find a way to copy the silver mirror reaction. Yes, Marin planned to use his high school chemistry knowledge to create a silver mirror reaction to make a safe silver-plated glass mirror to replace the toxic mercury-plated tin foil glass mirror and give it to Angela and Lady Mary for use. Moreover, the brightness of the silver-plated glass mirror is much higher than that of the tin foil. After all, the brightness of silver is higher than that of tin foil. The silver mirror reaction was discovered by German chemist Liebig in the 1830s. After this method was discovered, people found that the glass mirrors made by this method were not only brighter and clearer, but also safer. After all, there is no harm from the highly toxic mercury vapor. Then, silver-plated glass mirrors quickly replaced mercury-plated tin foil glass mirrors. After the 20th century, cheaper aluminum-plated glass mirrors replaced silver-plated mirrors. Of course, Marin couldn't make an aluminum-plated mirror. The main reason was that Marin couldn't make aluminum. Marin knew how to electrolyze aluminum, but the problem was that he didn't have the important raw material needed for electrolyzing aluminum, cryolite. It is said that in nature, it seems that only Greenland has natural cryolite mines. When electrolytic aluminum first appeared, the cryolite mines in Greenland were almost the world's main source of cryolite, until people later discovered that cryolite could be artificially synthesized, and then the aluminum smelting industry could be truly popularized. However, that should be after World War II. Marin remembered that during World War II, the United States specially sent people to control Greenland to prevent the Germans from getting enough natural cryolite. Marin didn't know how to artificially synthesize cryolite, and he didn't know where the natural cryolite mines were in Greenland. Although Marin knew that the cryolite mine on Greenland must be on its southwest coast, Greenland is too big, with a long coastline and extremely harsh climate. Therefore, it is very difficult to find the cryolite mine. Marin can't even think about smelting aluminum. Even Marin doesn't know what cryolite looks like. Even if he sends people to find it, he doesn't know how to find it. Cuba's laterite nickel ore is too obvious, so it's easy to find. How to find cryolite? And using the silver mirror reaction to make a silver mirror is too simple. After all, this is a very important content in high school chemistry. For Marin, the former high school bully, he still remembers it very clearly. The process is actually very simple. First, silver nitrate and sodium hydroxide solution are used to prepare silver ammonia solution. It seems that the preparation method is to drip sodium hydroxide solution into the silver nitrate solution, and then add dilute ammonia water, or pass ammonia gas, and then a silver ammonia solution is obtained. Then, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde or glucose solution is dripped, and a silver mirror reaction can occur to obtain a silver coating, and a very clear and high-brightness silver-plated glass mirror is produced. For Marin, silver nitrate and sodium hydroxide solution are very easy to obtain. Although the preparation of formaldehyde and acetaldehyde is difficult, they can also be made. As for glucose, it is even simpler. Honey directly contains glucose ingredients. What is really difficult is actually ammonia water or ammonia gas. After all, there is ammonia synthesis equipment in later generations, and it is easy to make ammonia gas. But in this era, the preparation of ammonia gas is very unrealistic. No, there seems to be a way to. Marin suddenly remembered it. Seems that urea solution seems to contain urea. Heating urea liquid seemed to produce a small amount of ammonia. He did what he said, and then, the great Emperor Marin took a group of chemists to boil urea. After a very unpleasant and disgusting operation, Marin finally collected a little ammonia and passed it into water to obtain dilute ammonia water. Then, after preparing the silver ammonia solution, Marin dripped honey and heated it, and soon he got a very bright silver-plated glass mirror. However, Marin ordered the preparation process of ammonia to be strictly confidential. After all, the process of boiling urea to produce ammonia is too indecent, and Marin wants to vomit when he thinks about it. Chapter 1967, Solutions to Mercury Poisoning. Although he was wearing a mask, the urea smell emitted when boiling urea still made Marin feel sick and wanted to vomit. However, because the manufacture of silver mirrors was highly confidential, Marin was unwilling to let others do it. So, he was disgusted, and it was his own fault. The effect of the silver mirror made by the reaction of silver and silver mirror is not too good. When he gave it to Angela, Angela obviously felt that the mirror was much brighter, and she was more beautiful inside. Okay, this mirror is very safe, you can use it with confidence. However, don't say that I made it, but say that I bought it from Venice. Marin reminded, and also asked someone to order a silver frame that is exactly the same as the original mirror. Marin went to buy a Venetian mirror in order to copy the Venetian mirror to avoid suspicion. After the mirror was bought, several very reliable craftsmen began to copy the patterns and carvings on the silver frame of the Venetian glass mirror. Afterwards, the craftsmen directly made copper molds, which could be used to press the silver strips into the same patterns and carvings as the silver frames of Venetian glass mirrors on the spiral die casting machine. Because silver is softer, although the silver frames used in Venetian glass mirrors are not pure silver and are not so soft, they are softer than copper and easier to press. Then, the mercury-plated tin-foil Venetian glass mirror that was bought from Venice at a high price was naturally retired gloriously. Of course, it is still useful. I plan to send this mirror to China and present it to the emperor of the Ming dynasty. Marin decided to recycle the waste and take this mirror in exchange for benefits. But didn't you say that there is mercury poison gas? Angela was a little confused. Marin smiled, this mirror has been in the past for several months. If it is sent to the Ming country, at least half a year will have passed. Basically, the impact of the poison gas is very small. In fact, the mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror is the most dangerous in the first 3 months. If it really takes more than half a year, as long as you don't sleep with the mirror, the harm is still not great. However, it seems unlikely that a woman would not sleep with such a good mirror in her arms. You should think of a way to reduce the harm to others. Angela is kind-hearted and thinks that her man has many ideas, so she wants to help others. Angela knows that Marin plans to make huge profits by making this kind of glass mirror in the future. At that time, not only will foreign customers use this kind of mirror in large quantities, but many people in Beihai will also use this kind of mirror. As for the silver mirror used by Angela herself, Marin said that it is difficult to make and he is unwilling to make it for a long time, mainly because it is disgusting. Foreigners are okay, but Angela doesn't want people in China to be harmed. In particular, Angela can think with her toes that the people who will use this kind of mirror in large quantities in the future must be domestic ladies. And many ladies in Beihai have a good relationship with Angela. Therefore, Angela didn't want them to be poisoned by the mirror. Less harm. Reduce the toxicity harm. Marin fell into deep thought. After all, the main harm of the mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror is that the residual mercury vapor is inhaled into the human body and causes mercury poisoning. If you want to reduce the harm, you must clean up the residual mercury. How to remove or neutralize the harm of mercury? Marin thought about it. What does mercury react with? What sodium thiosulfate seems to be used in later generations? By the way, mercury often exists in the form of cinnabar in nature. And cinnabar is mercuric sulfide. It seems that sulfur can also react with mercury. Marin vaguely remembers that it seems that the chemistry teacher in the later generations mentioned that if mercury is overturned, sulfur is usually sprinkled to neutralize it and generate non-toxic mercuric sulfide. After thinking for a long time, Marin finally thought of a way to clear the influence of mercury vapor, which is to bury the glass mirror in sulfur powder, and then heat it at medium temperature to force the mercury vapor to evaporate and react with sulfur to generate mercuric sulfide, which is cinnabar. Although this may not be able to clear the mercury component, after processing, it can basically reduce the toxicity to a large extent and prevent the user from being poisoned. Angela is right, this thing will definitely be used by the noble ladies in the North Sea in the future. Therefore, it is necessary to process it appropriately to reduce the toxicity. After all, Marin can't poison his own people. As for using silver-plated glass mirrors for noble ladies in China, that's out of the question. Why? It will leak secrets. The effect of silver-plated glass mirrors is obviously better than that of mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirrors, and even a fool can see it. The picture of mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirrors is dark, while the picture of silver-plated glass mirrors is very bright. Angela, as the Grand Duchess of the North Sea Kingdom and the Queen of America, uses a higher-end glass mirror, and those noble ladies of the North Sea Kingdom will not find it abnormal. After all, she is the Queen, isn't it normal for her to use something higher-end? It is also normal for Lady Mary to use it, after all, she is the Queen Mother Buddha. But if every noble lady of the North Sea Kingdom has one, it would be abnormal. If a foreign noble lady comes to visit, she will take out a mirror to compare. Oh, the mirror I bought at a high price in Venice is not as good as the mirror used by ordinary noble ladies in the North Sea Kingdom. In this way, the fact that the North Sea Kingdom has mastered better mirror-making technology will definitely be spread. At that time, Venice will also find fault with Marin, did you steal our technology? France will also find fault, because France is the most conceited country, with a great demand for mirrors and the highest requirements. In order to save costs and mass production, France may unite with other countries to force the North Sea Kingdom to hand over secrets. Therefore, before its own strength is not strong enough, Marin temporarily plans to produce mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirrors and make a fortune behind Venice. At that time, even if people are jealous, they will only be jealous of Venice. After all, the first bird to stick its head out will be shot. And Marin, it is enough to quietly follow the fortune and count the money. Of course, it is also very important to allow customers to enjoy health. Especially, the noble ladies of the North Sea Kingdom. These people will take the responsibility of giving birth to little nobles for the North Sea Kingdom. If mercury poisoning, the children born may be deformed. Marin does not want the second generation of nobles in his country to be deformed or mentally abnormal. Therefore, it is also very important to minimize the possibility of mercury poisoning. Then, Marin conducted an experiment. He found that after the entire glass mirror was thrown into sulfur powder and heated, the mercury sulfide generated by mercury vapor and sulfur would easily form red spots on the back of the mirror. Obviously, that was cinnabar. At the same time, the frame made of silver was also easy to turn black. Obviously, after heating, even the relatively stable silver had some trace reactions with sulfur, generating a small amount of gray-black silver sulfide. For this reason, Marin also gave a solution. When the mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror was placed in sulfur powder for heating, the silver frame was removed first, and only the glass mirror itself was thrown in. Then, if small red spots appeared on the back of the mirror, just apply another coat of paint to cover it up. Chapter 1968, Backstabbing Again. After initially solving the problem of mercury poisoning, Marin began to prepare to start the production of mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirrors. It is very simple to imitate the silver mirror frame, just make the carvings on the silver frame the same as those of the Venetians. As for the problem of light-transmitting glass, it is also simple for Marin to make it. In fact, the quality is better than the optical glass of the Venetians. In fact, there are two levels of optical glass in the North Sea Kingdom. One is lead glass, which is slightly lower in quality, and the other is high-quality glass that has been chemically treated with quartz sand, which is generally used to make military telescopes. The principle of lead glass is very simple, that is, adding lead oxide. After adding lead oxide, the viscosity and melting temperature of the glass are reduced, which is very convenient for glass processing. After all, when processing glass products, the most feared thing is that the viscosity of the glass melt is too high, so that it is difficult to make the desired shape. But if the viscosity is reduced, it is much easier to make items. In addition, the reduction of melting temperature is also beneficial. The advantage is that in the process of the hot glass melt gradually cooling down, the hardening speed is slower, which is more convenient for craftsmen to carry out more complex processing. Since Marin promoted the use of coal and lead oxide in the Beihai glass factory, the manufacturing speed of Beihai glassware has reached a new level. As for the quality, it is also very good. After all, lead glass has good light transmittance and is very suitable for window glass. However, lead glass also has a problem, that is, it is best not to use it as a container for food, especially for hot soup. Because the lead ions in the lead glass are easily released after being affected by the high temperature of the hot soup and absorbed by the people who drink the soup. If it is made into a wine glass, it is also easy to precipitate lead ions in the wine. Therefore, Marin has always prohibited the use of lead glass to make eating utensils, and only allows it to be used to make window glass and other craft products. As for glass tableware and wine glasses for eating, Marin only allows the most basic green glass to be used. Although it is not good looking, it is safe and healthy. Of course, optical glass made by chemically treating quartz sand can also be used to make tableware and wine glasses. However, the cost is relatively high. The so-called chemical treatment method is actually to grind the quartz sand into powder and put it into sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid solution for cleaning. Quartz sand is silicon dioxide, which is insoluble in acid. However, impurities such as iron ions can be washed away by acid. In this way, the quartz sand powder after acid washing is washed with water and used to make glass. There are very few impurities, and optical glass can be made. But chemistry was not developed in this era, and the cost of making acid was very high. Moreover, the cost of grinding the extremely hard quartz sand into powder is very high. Therefore, the high-quality optical glass produced by this method is generally only used to make military telescopes. Lead glass is the main force of translucent glass. In fact, the quality of lead glass is only slightly worse than that of chemically treated optical glass. Moreover, the cost is much lower. It is not impossible to use lead glass to make telescopes. But that is a matter for the future. Now, Marin uses lead glass to make glass mirrors. Moreover, the quality of lead glass seems to be better than the translucent glass made by Venetians using manganese dioxide, that is, pyrolusite. Because the manganese glass of Venetians has good light transmittance at first. But over time, it is easy to turn into lavender glass. It seems that the manganese ions were oxidized to form a purple manganate substance similar to potassium permanganate, which reduced the light transmittance of the glass and turned it into old glass. The lead glass of Beihai Kingdom does not seem to have similar problems. Anyway, it is used as a mirror, not for hot soup, so the precipitation of lead ions should not be much. In other words, overall, the pirated mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror of Beihai Kingdom was slightly better in quality. Moreover, after being cleaned with sulfur powder, it is also safer. The only problem is that if the surface of the tin foil layer is not well coated with varnish, when it is buried in sulfur powder and heated, it is easy for the tin foil layer to react with sulfur to form tin sulfide, which is commonly known as gold powder. However, if the tin foil layer is well protected with varnish and the heating temperature is not too high, the tin foil layer will not be affected too much. After completing the mapping and imitation of the Venetian mercury-plated tin foil glass mirror, Marin immediately asked people to start production and use tin amalgam reaction to make mercury-plated tin foil glass mirrors. The mirror that was originally bought at a high price was sent to the ship, shipped to Panama, and sent to the Ming dynasty via the Pacific route to be presented to Emperor Zhengde. Moreover, Marin specifically emphasized that this was a glass mirror worth more than 20,000 taels of silver, the world's first glass mirror. Well, the envoy will tell the Ming dynasty Ministry of Rights that this was the mirror that Marin, the lord of the North Sea Kingdom, spent more than 20,000 taels of silver to buy from a country called Venice that produced a lot of glass and present it to the Ming emperor. In this way, the high price, coupled with the extraordinary effect, will definitely make Zhengde very happy, and the return gift will definitely be a lot. Then, Marin was trying to do something bad and bribe the eunuchs to say bad things about the Portuguese. With the preconceived notion, it would be difficult for the Portuguese to use connections in the future. Not only the Portuguese, but even the Spaniards, Marin would bribe the eunuchs to slander and cut off their idea of learning from Marin to become a vassal of the Ming dynasty. Spain wants to learn from Marin to become a vassal of the Ming dynasty. Sure, Marin will let Conde bribe those eunuchs and let them say, if you want to become a vassal of the Ming dynasty, in addition to offering treasures like sweet potatoes offered by the North Sea Kingdom, the monarch of that country should also come to the Ming dynasty and kneel down to the Ming emperor to express his sincerity. This is a bit tricky, because the King of Spain and the King of Portugal have always been very proud and think that their status is equal to that of the Ming emperor. And historically, the letter that Spain asked Columbus to bring to the Chinese emperor was also written in the tone of equal communication. Wanting the King of Spain or the King of Portugal to take the risk and travel thousands of miles to the Ming dynasty to kneel down to the Ming emperor. These two countries will definitely not be happy. You know, in this day and age, sailing is such a dangerous thing. The monarchs of ordinary countries will not be so brain-twisted that their children will participate in the great voyage. What if they die at sea? Even when Marin was determined to go to the Ming dynasty, he was mentally prepared to die at sea, and even wrote a suicide note. Therefore, just letting the Spanish monarch go to the capital to kowtow to the emperor of the Ming dynasty in person can cut off the possibility of Spain's success. After all, the arrogance of the Spanish is obvious. Otherwise, they would not have come up with the ridiculous idea of sending more than 10,000 troops to conquer the Ming dynasty. In fact, the Spaniards were probably inspired by the Japanese pirates and saw the corruption of the guards on the southeast coast of the Ming dynasty, so they came up with such an idea. However, the Spaniards did not know that there were a large number of elite troops on the northern border of the Ming dynasty. Toyotomi Hideyoshi of Japan sent 200,000 troops to invade Korea, but was also defeated by the Ming army. What's more, the Qi family army left by Qi Jiguang, the last god of war of the Ming dynasty, was still there. If a real fight broke out, Spain could only harm the southeast coast at best. Once it goes deep into the inland and forces the Ming dynasty to mobilize the border troops, it will be hard to say. After all, the Ming army's weapons and equipment were not backward at the time. They had both Portuguese cannons and matchlock guns, and there was no pressure from the later Jin, so they could still cope with it. In addition, the ancient Chinese liked to use tricks, maybe poisoning the food, burning the camp at night, etc., which guaranteed that the Spanish would be very jealous. There were also many civil servants like Wang Hong who had more ideas in the Ming dynasty. What's more, the time when Spain planned to invade was not when the peasant army and the later Jin dynasty worked together to make trouble during the Chongzhen period. As long as the Ming dynasty could concentrate its strength, it would still be very strong. Didn't you see that the Ming dynasty sent out 160,000 troops to suppress the Yao uprising? In addition, in this era, even if the Spaniards learned the Spanish phalanx, they were not able to transport tens of thousands of troops to the Far East. Of course, Marin would pretend to be a good person while stabbing Spain in the back. For example, share some of the benefits of silk and porcelain with Spain to win their favor. After all, Spain is strong at this time, and Marin does not want to confront other powers while confronting France. It is foreseeable that Spain may send a fake monarch to pretend to pay tribute and kowtow in exchange for the Ming dynasty's tribute qualification. Even Marin's spies in Spain have heard that the Spaniards are discussing whether to use such a strategy to defraud the qualification for tribute trade. At that time, who will expose the lie will become a problem. Conti can naturally expose it. However, he cannot stand up. After all, the North Sea Kingdom and Spain are allies. Therefore, in the future, stabbing the Spaniards and exposing their possible tricks will require a third party to come forward. After thinking about it, Marin set his sights on the Holy See. This operation is also very simple, that is, let the Holy See send missionary priests to Guangzhou. Then, Marin will pay a large sum of money to bribe a French priest to join. When the Spaniards come up with a fake tribute to fool the Ming dynasty, let this French missionary stand up and expose the truth. The French and Spanish are mortal enemies, and there is no discussion about exposing it, and it is very reasonable. At that time, the French and Spanish will continue to fight, and it has nothing to do with Marin. But first, Marin needs to bribe such a French missionary. Moreover, it must be ensured that this person will not pass on useful information to France after arriving in Guangzhou, so as not to arouse France's covetousness of Chinese products, especially technology. French missionaries are famous commercial spies. For this reason, Kohler was ordered to find a French priest who has no good feelings towards his motherland and is easy to bribe. Then, he was sent to Guangzhou to preach and wait to stab Spain in the back. Marin estimated that in order to obtain huge profits from the trade of silk and porcelain, Spain might send a fake monarch to pay tribute and kowtow in the name of the Spice Islands. The task of this French priest bribed by Marin was to stand up and expose the truth and tell the Ming dynasty that the Spanish were deceiving the Ming dynasty. Well, in the future, the Spanish will also be included in the Ming dynasty's blacklist like Portugal. Chapter 1969 Philippines. What is the most profitable business in the world? Of course, it is the monopoly business. Just like Venice, a mercury-plated tin-foil glass mirror with very low technical content, because it is an exclusive business and the confidentiality work is in place, it dares to ask for 10,000 or 20,000 gold coins per side. It is really too dark. Marin, who came from the future, also knows how profitable the monopoly companies such as Yidong, Jianxin and the 2 barrels of oil are in the future. Moreover, don't look at the fact that China Mobile and Telecom were very smart at the beginning and brought benefits to the people. But later, I don't know who came up with the idea to swap the heads of several companies. Because they were all their own people, the price war stopped and they no longer fought each other. The companies that were originally separated to compete began to collude and join forces to make money. Let's not talk about those. If Marin wants to get the most benefits from the silk and porcelain trade in the Ming dynasty, he can't let Portugal and Spain enter. Portugal has committed suicide and offended the Ming dynasty greatly. It will be difficult to get the opportunity to trade with the Ming dynasty in a short time. Spain has not yet offended the Ming dynasty, and is planning to copy its own methods. How can this be possible? You know, Spain has already snatched half of the huge profits of the spice trade from Portugal. If they are allowed to share a share of the trade with the Ming dynasty, then Spain will fly, right? In particular, Spain is still a maritime power. If they share the huge profits of the trade with the Ming dynasty, it will be a disaster. Because they will be more powerful to compete for the Americas. Therefore, although the two countries have a good relationship on the surface. However, Marin does not allow the Spaniards to share a share of the Ming dynasty trade. Stabbing in the back is just a basic operation. This is not just a simple struggle for interests, but a struggle for national destiny. You know, in history, after Spain occupied the Philippines, relying solely on the smuggled Manila galleon trade, there were between 1 million and 3 million silver dollars flowing into the Ming dynasty every year. But did the Spaniards lose? No. They made more. That is to say, on average, the profits that the Spaniards obtained from the Manila galleon trade each year were worth at least 1 million gold coins. And in this era of mercenaries, gold coins meant military strength. According to the daily salary of a German mercenary of 3 pfennigs, the annual salary of an ordinary German mercenary was about 18.25 gold coins. And 1 million gold coins can hire 54,700 mercenaries a year. In other words, if Spain can obtain channels for trade with the Ming dynasty, it can have money to support tens of thousands of troops a year. If it is used to build ships and develop the navy, the scale is also very considerable. You know, now a Spanish carrack warship of 200 or 300 tons costs only a few thousand gold coins, excluding copper cannons. The annual income of 1 million gold coins can maintain a powerful fleet. Therefore, whether in terms of interests or the future of the country, Marin cannot let Spain get involved in the trade with the Ming dynasty. As long as he dares to stretch out his claws, he will cut it off. For French missionaries, Marin plans to send people to the Vatican to find them. There are many French missionaries over there, and some of them don't love their motherland France very much. As long as the money is in place, it is no problem to bribe them to preach in the Ming dynasty, and then, at the right time, stab Spain. Of course, the loyalty of those who spend money is very problematic. For example, he can go to the Ming dynasty for money and stab Spain. But at the same time, he can also report the advanced production technology of the Ming dynasty to the French royal family for money in exchange for generous rewards. There are too many good things in the Ming dynasty: the production secrets of porcelain, more advanced papermaking, and advanced agricultural technology with a yield of hundreds of kilograms per mu. These are very important to France and extremely valuable. So, while bribing this person to stab Spain, Marin is also ready to kill him. If this person stays there to preach honestly and stab Spain as planned, then Marin will not embarrass him. However, if he reveals the idea of using the technology obtained in the Ming dynasty to exchange with King François I of France for the last time, Marin's people will kill him immediately. You know, Kong Tai bought a lot of subordinates in the Ming dynasty, all of whom were locals of the Ming dynasty. Among these people, there are both resourceful scholars, chicken crow thieves, and some are desperate criminals. Once the French priest shows signs of being wrong, the desperate criminals can kill him. As for who the Holy See will send to replace him after killing him, it must be to send missionaries from the Beihai kingdom to Guangzhou. There is no need to worry about betraying their own missionaries. After all, before selecting them to come to the Ming dynasty, Marin must have selected reliable ones. In short, French missionaries are easy to buy and easy to kill. Kong Tai is now spending a lot of money in the Ming dynasty. Maybe his eyes can't be all over the Ming dynasty, but it is enough to plant enough eyes in several cities such as Guangzhou, Fuzhou, Xiamen and Ningbo. After all, it is more than enough to hire a smart intelligence officer and give him 1 tael of silver a month. After all, that is an annual income of 12 taels of silver. For many market hooligans, this is a very high salary. You know, many skilled craftsmen can only get a salary of 300 coins a month. As for the desperate criminals responsible for killing, they don't need much money. A few taels of silver are enough to hire them to kill the disobedient French priests. You know, during the Battle of Liaolua Bay, Zheng Zhilong's incentive reward to his soldiers was only 2 taels of silver per person, which made his soldiers excited. To kill a Western missionary, it is estimated that it will cost 10 or 18 taels of silver to hire a willing soldier. However, what will happen after destroying Spain's fake tribute plan? What will Spain do? Marin fell into deep thought. After thinking for a long time, Marin felt that the Spaniards might choose to repeat the old tricks and go north from the Spice Islands to occupy the Philippines. Then, using the Philippines as a base, they again expressed their submission to the Ming dynasty for the second time. If the submission was rejected, perhaps, the Spaniards would follow the old path of history and use Manila as a base to welcome the smugglers of the Ming dynasty to go there. Marin remembered that in order to attract smugglers from the Ming dynasty to Manila in history, the Spaniards offered a high price of 240 taels of silver for each dan of raw silk, which was only slightly lower than the 260 taels of silver in Japan. In the Ming dynasty, a load of raw silk, even the best Huzhou silk, was sold for no more than 100 taels of silver. An ordinary raw silk was only 50 or 60 taels of silver per load in the Ming dynasty. In other words, even if Marin tried every means to destroy the way Spain cheated to obtain the qualification for tribute trade, the Spaniards could still occupy the Philippines and use it as a base to engage in smuggling. At present, there seems to be no country in the Philippine Islands, only a small Sulu kingdom in the Sulu Islands in the southwest. And the Luzon Island in the north is still an ownerless place. Yes. The Philippines, ownerless. Marin was suddenly inspired. Chapter 1970, Taking the Philippines First. Marin remembered that it seemed that it was not until around 1565 that the Spanish sent troops to occupy the no-man's land of the Philippines. The Spaniards were not without basis. Their legal basis was that although the Treaty of Tordesillas stipulated the Pope's meridian, it did not stipulate the dividing line of the Eastern Hemisphere. After Magellan's circumnavigation proved that the Earth was round, the two sides did not immediately determine the dividing line of the opposite side of the Earth in the Eastern Hemisphere. Therefore, the Spaniards later used this as an excuse to default on their debts, and forcibly occupied the Philippines on the grounds that the dividing line of the Eastern Hemisphere had not been determined, and put forward the shameless statement that the dividing line of the Eastern Hemisphere was bounded by the west of the Philippines, which made the Portuguese very angry. However, there was no way to refute it. There was no way. When the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed, neither the Spaniards nor the Portuguese knew that the Earth was round, so they did not determine the sea route in the Eastern Hemisphere. Later, the Spaniards cheated based on this point, and the Portuguese were helpless. Because, according to the Pope's meridian, stipulated in the Treaty of Tordesillas, everything east of the meridian belonged to Portugal. West of the meridian, everything belongs to Spain, and the Philippines can be reached if the papal meridian goes west. Of course, this refers to the original historical situation. And this time and space has undergone tremendous changes because of Marin's crossing. Spain, which originally monopolized the Americas, gave up the Americas under Marin's deception and instead competed with Portugal for half of the Indian spice trade. Then, the original Treaty of Tordesillas was also abolished. After that, the African coast, Western Asian countries, India and the Malacca region, as well as the Ming Empire, were clearly designated as the territory of the Portuguese. However, in Southeast Asia, except for the Malacca region, which is clearly a Portuguese colony, the other countries and regions did not clearly belong to which country. It was based on this that Spain took advantage of the loopholes in the treaty and, at the suggestion of Marin, sent troops to occupy the Spice Islands. But Marin did not expect that Spain, which had already occupied the Spice Islands, was not satisfied and wanted to establish a country based on the Spice Islands and seek the qualification to trade with the Ming dynasty. While Marin was angry and stabbed Spain in the back, he suddenly found out that it seemed that in addition to the Spice Islands, the ownership of Southeast Asia was not stipulated in the treaty, and it seemed that the Philippines also did not stipulate the ownership. At that time, when the Treaty of Rome was signed, no one except Marin knew about the existence of the Spice Islands and the Philippines. Therefore, the treaty naturally did not stipulate the ownership of these areas. Marin did this on purpose, because other countries in the Australian region did not know at that time. If the location of Australia is not clearly pointed out, no one can say anything if Marin sends people to occupy and control Australia. Unexpectedly, the unintentional move at that time did not include the Philippines in the treaty. In this way, the operability is very large. In fact, Marin considered notifying the Portuguese to occupy the Philippines and cut off Spain's hope of occupying the Philippines. After all, Portugal, which was supposed to own the entire Eastern Hemisphere according to the treaty, seized the Philippines, which was understandable, and Spain could not say anything. After all, Spain has already taken a huge advantage by getting half of India's trade rights. If they fight for the Philippines, it would be fine if they start before Portugal. If the Portuguese start first, Spain will not have the face to rob. After all, it was still the 16th century, and Europeans still had some face. Just like the French stealing China's porcelain technology and Venice's glass mirror technology later, it actually happened during the reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King who never took a bath. Because it was from the late 17th century when Louis XIV ruled France that Europeans gradually lost their sense of shame and began to do everything they could. By the 18th century, the sense of shame of Europeans was completely abandoned, and everyone began to compete to see who had no moral integrity. And in this era, due to the influence of the Middle Ages that had just passed, the nobles still paid more attention to the spirit of chivalry. For example, Maximilian I was also called the last knight king in Europe. In addition to saying that Maximilian I was keen on the study of armor, it also shows that Maximilian I was still more face-conscious and more disciplined. Although other European monarchs were not as disciplined as Maximilian I, they had not lost their sense of shame and would not be so shameless. The so-called Sun King, Louis XIV, was the important leader of European monarchs who had no bottom line and no moral integrity. Of course, it does not mean that no one steals other people's technology like Louis XIV did these days. But when people do such things in this era, they will be embarrassed and cover up. And Our Majesty Louis XIV, who does not like to take a bath, sent people to steal technology openly. This is the case with Venetian glass mirrors, and the same is true for China's porcelain firing technology. In the mid to late 17th century, European missionaries active in China changed from being mainly sent by the Roman Catholic Church to being mainly French missionaries. In the name of missionary work, they stole all kinds of skills in China. Of course, Emperor Kangxi also saved his life because of this. Because French missionaries brought quinine cream and cured Kangxi's malaria. But what's funny is that after listening to two French missionaries talk about advanced Western medicine and other scientific knowledge, Emperor Kangxi realized that if the common people learned these, they would open up their wisdom, so how could they fool the people? Therefore, Kong Matsi later ordered that the people should not learn these, but he himself learned them. Then, in order to fool the people, Emperor Kong Matsi boasted that the Manchus were invincible in bows and horses and deliberately belittled firearms. As a result, his grandson Qianlong took this set of deception seriously. When he saw the advanced firearms presented by Westerners, he actually disdained them. This is the highest realm of deception, not only fooling the people, but also fooling his descendants. The geographical location of the Philippine Islands is very subtle. To its north is Mindanao Island at the southern end of the Philippine Islands, and to the north of Luzon Island, the main island of the Philippine Islands, is the main colony of the North Sea Kingdom in the Far East, Taiwan Island. At the same time, this is also the area ruled by Little Jack Ma in the future. At present, in the entire Philippine Islands, it seems that there is only a Sulu Kingdom in the Sulu Islands in the southwest. In addition, on the southern island of Mindanao, there is a Muslim regime established by an Arab merchant, Sayyid, in 1450. Of course, this regime is not big. After all, it was established by foreign Arab merchants and has little influence on the local indigenous people. However, this is the beginning of the Muslim religion entering Mindanao, Philippines. In later generations, Mindanao became a strange area in the Philippines dominated by Catholicism. At the same time, because of the existence of Muslim religion, Mindanao has become a region in the Philippines where separatist forces often make trouble. The vast northern island of Luzon and other islands are still in a barbaric period, and are far inferior to the Muslim civilization. Of course, none of this matters. The important thing is that Luzon, the northernmost island of the Philippine Islands, has a very good geographical location. If it is occupied by the Spaniards as it was in history, then it will become a very good smuggling location. At that time, as long as the Spaniards are willing to pay a high price to buy it, there will always be bold Ming dynasty smugglers who will smuggle silk and porcelain to the Spaniards regardless of danger. Therefore, in order to prevent this situation, Marin decided to let Conti, the governor of Dongfan Island, occupy the main island of Luzon and most of the islands in the north of the Philippine Islands before the Spaniards. As long as they take the initiative, the Spaniards will be too late to attack the Bahai Kingdom, an apparent ally. By then, most of the islands in the north of the Philippine Islands will be included in the Dongfan Governor's District and will be under the jurisdiction of Conti. As for how to conquer the natives of the Philippines, Marin said it was very simple: use generous treatment on Dongfan Island, recruit local natives as warriors, equip them with good weapons and armor, and use them to conquer the natives of the Philippines. The Japanese also used this trick during World War II. They recruited 200,000 people to join the Japanese army on the Japanese-occupied island of Taiwan. A large part of them were sent to Southeast Asia, especially the Philippines, which is very close to Taiwan. These natives of Taiwan are very adaptable to the tropical rainforest climate. They are not prone to getting sick due to acclimatization in the jungle, and are extremely adaptable to the climate of the tropical jungle. They were important pioneers for the Japanese army to conquer Southeast Asia during World War II. Marin felt that this trick of the devil was worth learning. Recruiting local native warriors who were brave and familiar with the tropical jungle climate on Taiwan to join the army, helping themselves to occupy and station in Luzon and Palawan in northern Philippines first. In this way, it will be difficult for the Spaniards to rob. Then, they naturally had no chance to use Luzon as a base to encourage Ming dynasty merchants to smuggle silk and porcelain to them. If the Spice Islands were used as a base, it would be too far for the Ming merchants. In addition, recruiting a large number of indigenous warriors from the natives of Taiwan would not only help occupy and control the Philippine Islands, but also reduce the potential of the indigenous people on Taiwan to resist their own colonial rule. After all, the most capable young warriors were recruited by themselves, and the remaining people were even weaker in their ability to resist the colonial authorities. Therefore, recruiting the natives of Taiwan to conquer the Philippine Islands can not only take advantage of their strong combat capabilities adapted to the tropical jungle, but also weaken the ability of the indigenous people on Dongfan Island to resist colonial rule, which can be said to kill two birds with one stone. In particular, Marin has always coveted the Tainan Plain occupied by the indigenous people, which is the most essential part of Taiwan. Unfortunately, the indigenous people on the island mainly gathered here, but they were very capable of fighting, which made it difficult for Kong Tai to start. Therefore, Marin decided to take this opportunity to recruit all the elite indigenous warriors on the Tainan Plain with generous treatment and take them to attack the indigenous people of the Philippines. Then, let those indigenous warriors of Taiwan Island stay in the Philippines and take their families away. Then, the Tainan Plain will be empty, which is convenient for the introduction of Han people to develop. In this way, Conti does not need to use violence to seize land from the indigenous people, he can transfer those indigenous people and then get the land. Of course, those indigenous people will not lose out. Because Conti will not only give them generous treatment, but after they enter the Philippines as soldiers, Marin will also let Conti allocate a large amount of land to some conquered Filipino indigenous people as their slaves. Then, those Filipino natives allocated to them will help them to cultivate a large amount of land and produce food for them. Then, they can become the military privileged class on the Philippine Islands.